The sun hung high over the bustling town square, casting long shadows across the cobblestones as merchants shouted their prices and children darted through the crowd. People gathered in small clusters, their whispers creating a low hum of anxiety that centered around the central notice board. Tacked to the weathered wood was a new bounty poster, its edges curling in the breeze, displaying the likeness of a woman with flowing dark hair and pointed ears. The name Irina was printed in bold letters, identifying her as the blood princess of the Forest of Silence with a staggering bounty of 20,000. The rumors were spreading like wildfire through the crowd. People spoke in hushed, terrified tones about the vampire princess being resurrected and how even the 7 princes of the vampire clans feared her power. They whispered that she was the next generation of Cain's blood descendants. The crowd fell silent, watching in awe as the lone figure turned her back on them, her hand firmly gripping the parchment. This was Chelsea, a bounty hunter whose reputation for cold efficiency was matched only by the mystery of her origins. Under the cover of a violent thunderstorm, Chelsea arrived at the sprawling, Gothic spires of a mountain castle. Lightning arched across the dark sky, illuminating the jagged stone as she pushed open a heavy wooden door that groaned on its hinges. With a silver dagger gripped tightly in her hand, she moved with practiced silence, her boots clicking softly against the cold stone floor of the grand staircase. She reached a secluded chamber where an ornate stone sarcophagus sat atop a marble altar, surrounded by a thick thicket of red roses. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and ancient magic. Chelsea stood before the tomb, her reflection ghost-like in the polished surfaces as she prepared for the moment she had trained her entire life for. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her blue eyes remained focused and unwavering. She placed a hand on the heavy lid of the coffin, feeling the chill of the stone seep into her skin before she heaved it open. Resting inside was the vampire princess herself, looking more like a sleeping doll than a monster, her dark hair fanning out over the silk lining. Chelsea knew she only had one chance to end this before the resurrection was complete. She raised her blade, the steel catching a stray glint of light, but as she lunged downward, Irina's eyes snapped open, glowing with a predatory amber light. The strike was stopped instantly. Irina caught the blade with her bare hand, the metal snapping under her supernatural strength. She sat up slowly, her dark tresses cascading around her shoulders like a living shadow. A mocking smile played on her lips as she looked at Chelsea, calling her blood food that had been delivered right to her door. Chelsea gritted her teeth, her body trembling with the effort to pull away, but she found herself completely immobilized by the vampire's aura. Irina leaned in close, her voice a sultry purr as she explained that her bloodline was pure, unlike the mixed breeds Chelsea was used to hunting. A glowing red seal manifested on Irina's chest, pulsing with a rhythmic, magical light. Chelsea gasped as she was pulled forward, her shirt bunching in Irina's iron grip. The vampire loomed over her, the red roses in the tomb seeming to bloom more vibrantly in the presence of their mistress. Petals drifted through the air like drops of blood. Chelsea realized with a surge of horror that she couldn't move a single muscle. Irina tilted Chelsea's head back, exposing the pale line of her throat, and whispered that she should be a good girl and allow herself to be eaten. She promised that while the bite would start with pain, it would end in pleasure. The fangs sank deep into Chelsea's neck. A sharp, searing heat flooded her senses, and she felt her strength draining away into the vampire's embrace. In her fading consciousness, the image of her parents flashed before her eyes, a reminder of the family she had lost to these monsters. She let out a muffled groan as the candles in the chamber flickered and died. But then something strange happened. A dark, jagged seal began to glow on Chelsea's own chest, reacting violently to the vampire's venom. Irina pulled back, a look of genuine confusion crossing her beautiful features. She hissed, wondering aloud if this was a curse, and why such delicious blood food would be tainted by something that affected its taste. Irina sat on the edge of the coffin, watching Chelsea collapse, her long hair trailing over the floor. She seemed more intrigued than angry now, deciding that she would have to get rid of the damn curse first. She reached out, her fingers tracing the glowing red runes that were emerging from Chelsea's skin. As she tried to manipulate the magic, the light intensified, and Irina's eyes widened in shock as the energy backfired, surging into her own body. The scene shifted to the bright, sun-drenched streets of a town, where the locals were gossiping about the legendary bounty hunter who had actually returned alive from the Forest of Silence. They wondered if the princess had truly been killed. Inside a quiet house, Chelsea bolted upright in bed with a terrified scream, her hands clutching the sheets. She looked around the room, realizing she was back in her own home. She stared at her hands, checking for any signs of the change, but her skin felt warm and human. A soft sound drew her attention to the window, where a young girl with long silver hair sat quietly holding a teacup. The girl turned, revealing striking blue eyes that seemed to hold a depth far beyond her years. She smiled brightly at Chelsea, announcing that she was Campbell, Chelsea's fiancé. Chelsea blinked in confusion, asking how the girl had found her. Campbell's expression turned piteous, her eyes welling with tears as she explained that they were bound by a contract. She recounted how she had used her pocket money to hire a carriage and find Chelsea fainted on the side of the road. Campbell climbed onto the bed, sobbing as she clung to Chelsea's shirt, begging her not to leave again. Chelsea looked down at the girl, her mind drifting back to the life she had before her parents were killed. Her family had been prominent, but they carried a dark secret. Her mother's side had been afflicted with a vicious curse. Each clan member was destined destined to have their power sealed and die before the age of 30. Chelsea remembered seeing the purple flames of the curse flickering in her own hands as a child, while her parents looked on in despair. The only way to break the cycle was to find a destiny partner. Chelsea and Campbell had been matched since they were children, a union meant to save Chelsea's life. Chelsea tried to explain that she was no longer a pampered princess but a dangerous hunter, yet Campbell wouldn't hear it. Their reunion was cut short when the door was kicked open by a man with wild purple hair and glowing red eyes. Chelsea immediately drew a dagger, shielding Campbell and demanding to know how a black magician had entered the city. The magician laughed, calling them two little lambs and demanding their souls and flesh. He stared at Campbell with a hunger that made Chelsea's blood run cold, asking if the little one was still a virgin. Chelsea stood her ground, every sense on high alert. For a fleeting second, Campbell's expression shifted, a strange, knowing look crossing her face as she licked her lip. Then she was back to being the frightened girl, shouting for Chelsea to be careful. The magician growled that he would pull out Chelsea's nails for resisting. He lunged forward, grabbing Campbell by her silver hair and yanking her back. Chelsea screamed the girl's name, her heart shattering at the sight of Campbell being held captive. She reached for a hidden blade she kept strapped to her back, her fingers closing around the hilt. Knowing she had no other choice, Chelsea threw herself at the magician. The struggle was frantic and bloody. Chelsea managed to drive her blade into the man's side, blood splattering across Campbell's blue dress. With a final burst of strength, Chelsea pushed Campbell toward the door, screaming for her to run away. The magician hissed in rage, his face contorting with pain. He began to chant, and a massive purple magic circle erupted beneath his feet. Shadowy tentacles lashed out, wrapping around Chelsea's limbs and throat. She gasped for air as the dark energy burned her skin. The magician lifted her into the air, mocking her weakness as she struggled against the bindings. Chelsea's dagger clattered to the floor, the sound echoing in the silent room. As her vision began to blur, she looked toward the door, hoping Campbell had made it out. She saw the girl standing there, silhouetted by the light, but Campbell wasn't running. The magician screamed in frustration as his runes suddenly began to flicker and fade. The purple shadows dissipated into thin air, releasing their hold on Chelsea. He stared at his hands in disbelief, unable to understand why his black magic had failed. Chelsea fell to the floor, gasping for breath as she saw the marks on her neck glowing faintly. Realizing this was her only chance, she grabbed her fallen dagger and lunged forward. She drove the blade through the magician's heart in one swift, violent motion. Once the threat was gone, she pulled Campbell into a tight hug, her body shaking with relief. Deep in her mind, a voice that sounded remarkably like Irina's sighed, calling Chelsea a stupid woman for being such a rare and precious food source. Campbell sobbed into Chelsea's shoulder, saying how scared she had been and how lucky she was that Chelsea was there to save her. Chelsea stroked the girl's hair, telling her it was okay and that the bad person was dead. But Campbell pulled back slightly, her voice dropping to a low, chilling tone. She looked at Chelsea's wounds and mentioned that she knew a special way to disinfect them. A shadow passed over the girl's face, her eyes flashing with a familiar amber light as she told Chelsea that since she was injured, she would have to obey, or she would be taught a lesson. Chelsea felt the weight of the girl against her, a softness that seemed to ground her even as her mind remained a clouded mess of confusion. Campbell pulled back just enough to look up with those wide, shimmering eyes, her voice a gentle chime in the quiet room as she suggested that surely her mother wouldn't mind them sharing a space since they were engaged after all. A radiant smile broke across the child's face, her hands clasping Chelsea's with a warmth that felt almost intoxicating. Campbell's expression shifted to one of practiced innocence, her lower lip trembling slightly as she claimed she had nowhere else to sleep and hoped Chelsea wouldn't chase her away again. Outside, the velvet curtain of night had fully descended, pinning the world beneath a canopy of distant, uncaring stars. Chelsea sighed, the fight leaving her as she turned to pull back the heavy covers of the bed, inviting the girl to take the inner side. With a joyful cry, Campbell tossed her stuffed bear into the air and scrambled onto the mattress, her laughter echoing against the wooden headboard. Chelsea watched her, a rare, faint smile touching her lips as she felt a flicker of genuine affection for the strange girl. Campbell clutched her teddy bear to her chest, looking up with a bashful, charming tilt of her head to ask if Chelsea would join her. The invitation struck Chelsea like an arrow to the heart, and she found herself nodding before she could even think to refuse, leaning over to blow out the flickering candle and plunge the room into a peaceful darkness. But peace was a lie, a thin veil that tore away the moment Chelsea closed her eyes to reveal the jagged edges of her past. In the depths of her sleep, she heard the wet, sickening sound of teeth tearing into flesh and saw her mother's face twisted in an agonizing scream. The vampire silhouette was a dark blot against her mother's golden dress, a monster that ignored the child's presence to focus on its kill. Her mother's dying eyes locked onto hers, her voice a final, desperate rasp as she commanded Chelsea to kill the vampires and avenge their blood. "Mother," Chelsea screamed in the silent theater of her mind, her own blue eyes snapping open as tears tracked down her cheeks. She wasn't alone in the bed, but the figure looming over her was no longer a child. Adult Irina sat there, her dark hair cascading like silk over her shoulders as she asked with a cruel, knowing smirk if Chelsea had enjoyed her nightmare. Chelsea bolted upright, her heart hammering against her ribs as she stared at the vampire princess in horror. Irina's hand trailed over the empty pillow beside them, noting with feigned nonchalance that little Campbell seemed to have vanished. "Where is she?" Chelsea hissed, her hand instinctively going to the small dagger she kept hidden, the cold steel a small comfort in her trembling grip. Irina only sneered, her eyes glowing with a predatory amber light that promised nothing but pain. Before Chelsea could strike, the vampire surged forward, pinning her against the pillows with a strength that made her bones ache. "You are nothing but my food," Irina whispered, her breath hot against Chelsea's ear as she reminded her that a slave could never truly resist her master. Chelsea struggled, her hands pushing fruitlessly against Irina's chest as she snarled that she would never be anyone's slave. Irina's fingers brushed against Chelsea's lips, silencing her with a touch that felt like ice as she called the hunter a liar. The vampire laughed, a low melodic sound that chilled Chelsea to the marrow, as she leaned in close enough for their noses to touch. Obedience was the only path, Irina warned, her gaze dropping to Chelsea's throat as she threatened to turn her into an exclusive blood slave if she didn't learn her place. Chelsea felt a crushing sense of defeat wash over her, wondering if this was truly how her journey ended, unable to even break free from a single vampire's grasp. This was the reality of her life as a bounty hunter, a long, exhausting string of failures that had led her to this moment of absolute helplessness. "Irina," she gasped, her eyes flying open as she clawed her way back to consciousness. Instead of a monster, she found Campbell standing by the bed, the child rubbing her eyes and clutching her bare as she asked if Chelsea was scared. Chelsea's hand flew to her neck, finding the skin smooth and unblemished, the wounds from her dream having vanished as if they had never existed. "Don't be afraid," Campbell murmured, climbing onto the bed to wrap her small arms around Chelsea in a protective embrace. Chelsea looked at her voice a mere whisper as she asked if the girl would truly stay. "Always," Campbell promised, her smile bright and pure as she reminded Chelsea that as her fiancée, she would never dream of leaving her side. A sudden, sharp pang of hunger shot through Chelsea, a primal urge that made her vision swim as she leaned toward the girl's neck, her body reacting to the vampire blood beginning to change her. She pulled back, horrified by the unspeakable excitement bubbling up within her cursed veins. "Please," Chelsea choked out, sliding off the bed to kneel at Campbell's feet in a display of desperate vulnerability, begging the girl for help. She explained that she needed the evil attribute to counteract the curse, a paradoxical hope that only darkness could drive out the darkness consuming her. Chelsea felt a wave of shame for making such an outrageous request of a girl she viewed as a little angel, unaware of the dark shadow of Irina that flickered behind Campbell's innocent facade. Campbell reached out, her small hand caressing Chelsea's cheek with a tenderness that made the hunter's heart ache. "No, you did a great job," Chelsea insisted, her voice breaking as she looked into the girl's eyes. If it would lift the curse, Campbell declared with a determined nod, she was more than willing to help Chelsea in any way she could. In the shadows of her mind, the adult Irina laughed, thinking of how easy it was to coax her little blood slave into a false sense of security. Campbell let out a playful shout and jumped onto the bed, her braids flying as she prepared to fulfill Chelsea's strange request. She looked down at Chelsea, her expression softening as she stated that she would be happy as long as Chelsea was happy. The girl leaned in, her silver hair brushing against Chelsea's face as she repeated her vow of devotion. Chelsea felt the bed shift as Campbell moved closer, a sharp gasp escaping her as the girl's hands found her legs. "What are you doing?" Chelsea asked, her breath hitching as she lay back on the pillows. Campbell's gaze was intense, her voice dropping to a serious tone as she asked if they were finally the closest of families. "Family," Chelsea repeated, the word tasting strange and sweet on her tongue as she looked up at the girl hovering over her. "That is right," Campbell whispered, her hand tightening slightly on Chelsea's wrist. From this moment on, they were the only family each other had. Campbell hugged her tight, and Chelsea allowed herself to believe it, even as the hidden part of the vampire's soul sneered at how easily the hunter had been manipulated. Irina's internal voice mocked the hunter's proactive nature, planning to repay her in full once her true strength returned. Chelsea held the girl, her resolve hardening even as she felt the danger. She had to deal with the threat of the Blood Princess soon, if only to keep this innocent girl safe. Deep into the night, while even the farm animals were silent and still in their pens, Chelsea moved with the silent grace of a predator. She carefully drew her dagger from beneath the pillow, the blade catching a sliver of moonlight as she looked down at the sleeping girl. She slipped out of the room, the door giving only the faintest squeak as she stepped into the cool night air. She walked toward the edge of the property, her grip tight on the hilt of her weapon, startling a rooster that let out a muffled cluck. Back in the room, Campbell's eyes snapped open, the blue irises devoid of their usual warmth. She sat up in bed, her expression cold and calculating as she looked toward the empty doorway. A swirl of dark, violet energy gathered at her fingertips, a silent manifestation of her power as she whispered that she had warned Chelsea not to leave her. Suddenly, Chelsea's world spun as red ropes of magical energy lashed out, binding her limbs and pinning her to the ground as Campbell loomed over her voice a chilling echo of the princess she truly was, as she asked how Chelsea could be so disobedient. The moon hung low over the jagged spires of the ancient fortress, where bats circled the highest towers like a swirling cloak of shadows. Chelsea stood before the massive, ornate doors of the inner sanctum, her breath hitching as she prepared for the confrontation she had sought for so long. Suddenly, the heavy air was punctuated by the rhythmic flicker of the overhead chandelier, and with a violent crash, the doors burst open, forcing her to stumble back in alarm. A chilling, rasping laugh echoed through the hall, a sound like dry leaves skittering across a grave. "Who is there?" Chelsea demanded, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. From the gloom emerged a man with pointed ears and eyes like burning embers, his elegant attire doing little to hide the predatory hunger etched into his features. Chelsea realized instantly that she was facing a high-level vampire, and she wondered how such a powerful creature could be lurking in Irina's personal territory. The vampire's lips curled into a cruel smirk, revealing sharp fangs that glinted in the dim light. Before Chelsea could strike, a surge of dark energy erupted from the floor, manifesting as glowing purple runes that snaked around her limbs like living chains. Her body went rigid, her muscles refusing to obey her commands as the vampire loomed over her with a triumphant glint in his eyes. He reached out, his cold fingers hooking under her chin to lift her face toward his. "I originally wanted to eat you directly, but now I feel like that would be a bit of a waste," he murmured, his grip shifting to her throat as he squeezed just enough to make her gasp. He leaned in close, his breath cold against her skin as he whispered that he had far more intimate plans for her. A voice like velvet and ice cut through the tension, asking if an inferior creature like him truly thought he deserved to enjoy food within her castle. The male vampire froze, a bead of cold sweat rolling down his temple as he sensed the overwhelming presence behind him. Chelsea looked up to see Irina standing there in a gown of deep crimson, her gaze sharp enough to draw blood. "You are not qualified to know how I am here," Irina stated flatly, her eyes flashing with a dangerous golden light. The male vampire stammered, trying to claim that Chelsea was the prey he had hunted first, but Irina was in no mood for arguments. "Shut up," Irina commanded, and with a casual flick of her wrist, a wave of force slammed into the intruder, sending him reeling. A dark, satisfied smile played on her lips as she stepped forward, her power filling the room with a suffocating weight. "I hate it when other people covet my things," she said, her voice dropping to a possessive purr. Chelsea felt her consciousness slipping, realizing too late that the very walls of this castle were designed to suppress human strength, while Irina only grew more formidable. Irina caught the falling girl, cradling Chelsea against her chest as she noted that their current strength was still insufficient. Irina's nails lengthened into lethal claws as she looked down at the blonde hunter. "It is time to replenish my energy again," she whispered, her face inches from Chelsea's neck. In the haze of her fading mind, Chelsea saw a vision of Campbell dressed in a soft blue gown, her silver hair shimmering like moonlight. Campbell reached out to hug her, but the image was shattered by Irina's mocking voice calling her a stupid blood slave. "Am I already dead?" Chelsea wondered as she drifted through a void of starlight. A strange, burning heat began to spread through her chest, making her gasp in the darkness. She tried to warn herself that Campbell was dangerous, but a firm voice commanded her to open her eyes and see the truth. Chelsea's eyes snapped open to find Irina watching her with a mocking, tilted head. Instinctively, Chelsea's hand flew to the hilt of her dagger, but Irina only chuckled at the futile gesture. "I really want to punish you this time, my blood slave," the princess said, the room suddenly filling with the scent of blooming red roses. Chelsea felt a wave of despair, apologizing silently to her mother for failing to get her revenge, even as a strange, circular seal began to glow brightly over her heart. The light intensified, and Irina's eyes widened in genuine shock as she felt Chelsea's strength suddenly surge to impossible levels. For a fleeting second, the image of Campbell flickered over Chelsea's features, a ghostly overlap of the girl she loved and the hunter she was. The seal on her chest seemed to groan under the pressure, the magical bonds finally beginning to loosen. Chelsea stood her ground, her eyes burning with a new fire as she told Irina it was finally time to pay off her debt. Blood dripped from a shallow cut on Chelsea's hand, staining the petals of the roses scattered across the floor. Irina's expression shifted from surprise to dark amusement, finding the revelation of this hidden power utterly fascinating. She lunged forward, pinning Chelsea back against the floral display, her face inches from the hunter-s. A massive, intricate magic circle erupted beneath them, the light so blinding it threatened to swallow the entire hall. Chelsea could only stare in shock as the world dissolved into white light. "Little one, we have a long way to go," Irina whispered, her form beginning to fade into the brilliance. Chelsea reached out, screaming Irina's name, but the vampire princess vanished into thin air. Standing alone in the silent hall, Chelsea realized that the castle had been the source of Irina's absolute control, making any victory here impossible. She took a deep breath, feeling the lingering warmth of the loosened curse, and knowing she now had the means to protect herself. "I will take a long-term approach to killing her," she resolved, her eyes narrowing with cold determination. Later, Chelsea arrived back at the modest wooden shack she shared with her fiancé. She noticed the door was slightly ajar, a soft squeak echoing as she pushed it open, her heart racing with the fear that something had happened to Campbell. She rushed into the bedroom, her eyes scanning the space until they landed on the silver-haired girl sitting on the edge of the bed. Chelsea's face flushed with a mixture of relief and lingering tension as she approached. Campbell looked up, her expression soft and worried as she asked Chelsea where she had been. Stunned by the girl's gentle touch, Chelsea felt a confusing surge of guilt and a dark, unexpected spark of joy at the thought of being disciplined. Campbell reached up, her small hand cupping Chelsea's cheek with a deceptively sweet smile as she asked how she should punish her sister. Chelsea leaned into the touch, her voice a mere whisper as she told Campbell that no punishment would be too much. High above them, the shadow of Irina seemed to loom over Campbell's shoulder, a silent testament to the secret method she had used to return home before Chelsea could arrive. Campbell's gaze drifted toward a strange, purple magical residue left behind on a wooden bench, a relic of a black mage's invasion that she knew might soon be useful. She looked back at Chelsea, her voice dropping to a playful, commanding tone as she recalled how her mother used to punish her with a cane. Chelsea looked down at the silver-haired girl clinging to her, a soft, almost wistful smile playing on her lips, while she murmured, the warmth of the moment settling over them like a heavy blanket. Irina leaned her head against Chelsea's chest, her eyes fluttering shut as the steady rhythm of a heartbeat thrummed through the air. She found herself caught in a rare moment of hesitation, wondering whether she should speak her mind or keep her silence. At certain times, Chelsea was so incredibly stupid that it was almost cute, Irina thought to herself as she held on tighter. The heavy thump of the heart echoed in the quiet room, a biological drumbeat that seemed to ground the ancient vampire in the present moment. Soft light filtered through the trees as the night began to fade into a hazy dawn. Irina stirred in her sleep, murmuring a name that felt like a secret, her voice thick and barely audible. She called out for Campbell, unable to fully grasp the fleeting peace of her dreams. She blinked her eyes open, looking down at her frilly attire with a sense of growing annoyance. She wondered aloud if she could finally change out of the ridiculous outfit she had been forced to wear. By the time the next day arrived, the sun was high and bright. Irina stretched with a long, dramatic yawn, reaching out for the warmth she expected to find beside her, but the bed was cold and empty. She sat up abruptly, realizing Chelsea had disappeared again. She had told herself she wouldn't let the woman run around on her own, yet she had made the exact same mistake again. The door creaked open, and Chelsea stepped into the room, looking strikingly different in a crisp, dark school uniform with a checkered bag in hand. "Good morning, Campbell," she said with a bright, cheerful smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Irina stared at her from the bed, her eyes wide with confusion as she clutched a stuffed bear. Where had she been? Chelsea explained with forced cheer that she had gone to the Rochester School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The news hit Irina like a physical blow, her jaw dropping at the mention of a magic school. Chelsea knelt before her, explaining that since she had to resume her dangerous missions soon, it would be much safer for Irina to stay at the academy. She spoke of her old alma mater with fondness, promising that the professors were kind and that everyone would love her. Irina, however, viewed the idea with pure disdain, thinking how humans always overestimated their own abilities and were desperate to learn magic from one another. "I do not want to go," she stated firmly, her expression darkening with every word. Chelsea was undeterred, insisting that going to school was not an option and promising that she would visit frequently during the holidays. Irina fumed internally, her mind racing with the realization that Chelsea had already made up her mind to send her away to live on a campus. "I hate school," she shouted, her small fists clenched in frustration as she glares at her protector. Chelsea looked down at her with genuine concern, her brow furrowing as she asked if there was a specific reason for her hatred. Irina turned her head away, her long silver hair spilling over her shoulders as she stubbornly declared that she didn't like anything about the idea. Deep down, a sense of sharp betrayal gnawed at her. She felt as though Chelsea was simply looking for an excuse to abandon her, throwing her away under the guise of safety. This disobedient blood slave was testing the limits of her patience. Chelsea reached out, her voice soft and placating as she tried to soothe the girl. "Campbell," she started, but the name only seemed to fuel Irina's irritation as she looked at Chelsea with watery, accusing eyes. The annoyance boiled over until Irina could no longer contain the impulse. She lunged forward, her small, sharp fangs sinking deep into the skin of Chelsea's forearm. Chelsea let out a sharp gasp, a small cry of pain escaping her lips as she looked down at the girl attached to her arm. "Why are you so unhappy?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of pain and confusion. As the blood flowed, a strange, intoxicating feeling washed over Chelsea. It was an overwhelming, primal urge to pull Irina close, to kiss her, and to surrender entirely to her will. Irina finally let go, her eyes burning with a possessive, golden fire. "You want to leave me?" she accused, her voice low and dangerous. "How dare you even think of leaving me?" Irina's eyes glowed with a predatory intensity, her small frame radiating a power that felt far older than she looked. Chelsea felt her knees give way and she sank to the floor in a gesture of total submission. "I was wrong," she whispered, her head bowed as she looked up with pleading eyes. She promised never to abandon her and told Irina she could punish her in any way she saw fit, begging her not to be angry. Irina looked down at her, her expression unreadable as she considered the offer. She wondered if Chelsea was deliberately trying to annoy her just to see how she would be disciplined. She reached out with a delicate hand, tilting Chelsea's chin up to force their eyes to meet. She wondered aloud how she should punish her disobedient puppy so that she would never forget her place again. Chelsea's face flushed a deep, burning crimson, her breath hitching as she looked up at the girl she called master. Whether it was the influence of the curse or something deeper, she found herself actually looking forward to whatever treatment the angry girl had in store for her. The heavy, charged atmosphere in the room was suddenly shattered by the sound of footsteps and a voice from the hallway. A pair of school shoes appeared at the threshold of the room. "Why don't you just take your clothes?" the voice began, trailing off as the newcomer took in the scene. Both women turned toward the door in shock, their private confrontation interrupted. A blonde girl with bright green eyes and a wide, energetic grin stood there, her hands clasped in excitement. Chelsea, she exclaimed, her voice full of genuine joy. She remarked that it was great to see her and that it turned out Chelsea really was there. Before Chelsea could even stand up, the girl rushed forward and pulled her into a tight, suffocating hug. Chelsea blinked in surprise, recognizing the face from her past. It was Bate, an old classmate. However, Irina was not pleased by the sudden physical contact and immediately pushed the stranger away with a scowl. Bate laughed, seemingly unfazed by the hostile reception, remarking that Chelsea hadn't changed at all after all these years. Irina stared at the newcomer, her eyes narrowed in deep suspicion and a hint of jealousy as she repeated the name Bate under her breath. Bate threw her arms around Chelsea, pulling her into a warm embrace and exclaiming that it was wonderful to see her again. She pulled back slightly, looking Chelsea over with a bright smile and remarking that after all these years, she really had not changed at all. Bate then noticed the small, silver-haired girl standing nearby, clutching a stuffed teddy bear with a grumpy expression. Bate squealed with delight, asking if this was a little angel sent to the world by God because she was just so cute. She reached out toward the girl, asking who the little sister was, but Chelsea held up a hand to introduce her friend properly. Chelsea explained that this was Bate from Rochester, a potions professor who would likely be teaching Campbell soon. With a slightly shy look, Chelsea added the detail that shocked her friend to the core, introducing the child as her fiancé. Bate stood frozen, her mouth hanging open as the word fiancé echoed in her mind. Campbell looked up with a sharp, defiant gaze, clarifying that she was indeed the fiancé and not just someone brought along to lift a curse. Bate quickly recovered, laughing and teasing that the little one seemed a bit jealous. She told Chelsea that while she respected the title, she would not go easy on her just because she was a friend once Campbell entered the school for testing and admission the next day. Bate flashed a brilliant smile as she prepared to leave, telling her lovely new student that she looked forward to seeing her on time tomorrow. Campbell watched the woman walk away, her expression cold and unreadable as she bid a silent goodbye to Bate. Once they were alone, Chelsea leaned down, noticing the pout on the girl's face and asking why she seemed so unhappy. Irina, hidden within the form of Campbell, felt a surge of irritation, thinking to herself that Chelsea was merely a blood slave who would be eaten eventually, so there was no reason to care about her feelings at all. The next morning arrived with a clear sky, and Bate was already waiting at the academy gates, waving energetically at Chelsea and Campbell as they approached. Chelsea smiled and greeted her friend, trying to encourage Campbell to be polite. However, the girl remained silent and cold, pointedly releasing Chelsea's hand as they walked through the entrance. Bate noticed the tension, watching as Campbell walked past her without a word of greeting. She asked Chelsea why her fiancé seemed so unhappy, but Chelsea could only sigh, admitting that she had asked but the girl refused to say anything. Chelsea turned to Bate with a serious expression, asking her to take good care of the girl. She explained that she had to return to headquarters immediately to report the news of Irina's resurrection. Bate gave an encouraging thumbs up, suggesting that Campbell say goodbye to her fiancé since she would be gone for several days. Campbell looked away, thinking that food did not deserve a goodbye, and stated aloud that saying goodbye only added to one's worries. The admission process began in a grand courtyard where a hooded figure stood before a glowing, dark orb. The tester called out for the next person, summoning Campbell to step forward. The silver-haired girl walked toward the platform, her long hair catching the light as she prepared for the evaluation. She stood before the swirling blue and black energy of the testing orb, her small frame looking fragile against the magical artifact. As soon as she placed her hand upon the cold surface, dark, jagged lines of energy surged from her palm and into the sphere. A violent explosion of purple and white light erupted, causing a nearby student to scream in shock that it was an SSS-level chaos magic talent. A man identified as the vice-chancellor came running over, his face twisted in a mix of shock and pure joy as he shouted that Rochester had finally found a student with such a rare attribute. The vice-chancellor leaned down toward Campbell, his eyes wide with excitement as he asked for her name. When she confirmed she was Campbell, he immediately asked her to be his disciple, promising that within half a year he would make her the youngest magister in history. Campbell looked at him with a hollow, polite expression, though internally she mocked the offer, knowing she had been born with the power of a great magister. She told him she was honored, while a note appeared mentioning that becoming his disciple would grant her significant privileges. The man let out a boisterous laugh, saying he would report this to the principal immediately. He told her to find him after class for guidance and then skipped away, humming a happy tune to himself. Not everyone was pleased by the display, as a dark-haired woman named Angus watched from the shadows, scoffing that talent was useless. She crossed her arms and remarked that a few years ago, there had been another excellent student with SSS-level talent named Chelsea G. Sevier. Campbell turned her head sharply, hearing the name of her hunter. Angus continued with a cruel smirk, saying that Chelsea had been kicked out of the Magic Academy in despair. The news hit Campbell hard, her mind racing with the thought of Chelsea being expelled. She looked at the ground, her brow furrowed as she processed the idea of the strong hunter being a failure in the eyes of the school. Angus leaned in close to her, warning her not to be arrogant like Chelsea, or she would end up being kicked out like a lost dog as well. Bates suddenly stepped between them, blocking Angus and shouting her name in a firm, protective tone. Bates snapped that Angus was going too far and reminded her that Campbell was just a child. She added that for a teacher to speak this way was not only impolite but incredibly mean. Angus didn't back down, sneering that Chelsea and any child she brought were all cut from the same cloth. She turned to walk away, throwing a final warning over her shoulder that she hoped Campbell wouldn't act out when she took her class. Bate placed a comforting hand on Campbell's head, telling her to forget it. She explained that Angus was the divination teacher and often targeted girls who were talented and good-looking because she was stubborn and bitter. Campbell looked down, her eyes darkening with a quiet, dangerous resolve as she thought about the upcoming divination class. Later that day, the students gathered in a dimly lit room for divination class. Professor Angus stood at the front, her silhouette sharp against the chalkboard. She held a teacup, announcing with a sinister grin that the first lesson would involve using tea leaves for divination. She began to pace the room, the sound of her boots echoing as she walked past the seated students. She claimed that divination was a craft for true magicians, her eyes scanning the room for a target. She stopped directly in front of Campbell, her gaze cold as she stated that God punishes those who do not respect fate. She ordered Campbell to look at the tea residue in the cup and tell the class what it indicated. She slammed the ornate cup down onto Campbell's desk. A student whispered that it was unfair to expect a result on the first day, but Campbell simply smiled and said she would try. Campbell peered into the cup, seeing the wet green leaves settled at the bottom. She placed her hands around the porcelain, a faint glow appearing as she cast a subtle spell over the tea. Her eyes took on a distant, glassy look as she whispered to the professor that she saw a disaster. Angus snapped at her, calling it nonsense and snatching the cup away to prove her wrong. However, as Angus looked into the tea leaves herself, her face drained of color and her eyes widened in genuine horror. She began to tremble, stammering that it really was a disaster and that they needed to report to the principal immediately. In her panic state, she clutched her chest and accidentally let the cup slip from her fingers. The cup shattered into pieces upon hitting the floor. Angus didn't wait to clean it up, bolting out of the classroom and slamming the heavy doors behind her. Campbell sat calmly at her desk, a small, triumphant smirk appearing on her face as she let out a soft HMPH. That night back in her private quarters, Angus was a mess of nerves. She sat on her bed, clutching a metal cross to her chest and muttering that Campbell was ominous. She stared into the darkness of her room, chanting for the shadows to stay away and not to come for her. She gritted her teeth, the cross pressing hard into her skin as her fear reached a breaking point. Suddenly, the window to her room was blown open by a powerful force, the latch snapping as the wind rushed in. A tall, beautiful woman with long black hair and pointed ears appeared in the opening, looking down at the teacher with a sneer of disgust. She called Angus a clown and said that just looking at her made her feel sick. Angus fell back in terror, screaming for help as she realized a vampire was standing in her room. The vampire, Irina, loomed over the cowering woman and remarked that her blood had a truly off-putting taste. She sighed, noting that it was nothing compared to the deliciousness of Chelsea's blood. Irina tapped her chin, pondering how she should punish the rude old woman for her behavior earlier that day. She considered killing her, her hand reaching out to pick up a small, sharp blade from a nearby table. However, she realized that a dead professor at the academy would cause too much trouble and bring unwanted inspectors to the school. She looked at the blade, thinking that simply scaring her was too light a punishment. She noticed the blade had a unique shape, almost like a writing tool. She leaned over the terrified, frozen Angus and began to write something across the woman's cheeks in blood-red ink. A short time later, Angus was shown hanging from a balcony by her wrists, her face covered in humiliating scribbles. Irina tossed the tool away into the dark bushes below. She stood under the light of the crescent moon, a dark smile on her lips as she looked back at her handiwork. She whispered to herself that this punishment was good, satisfied with the chaos she had sown. Irina looked up at the crescent moon with a cold, satisfied smirk, noting that the punishment she had dealt was sufficient. However, the exertion of her powers had taken a visible toll, causing her form to shift into a small, weakened state as she realized how much energy she had spent. Hunger gnawed at her insides, a sharp reminder of her current limitations. She closed her eyes, focusing her power into a glowing purple spark as she wondered where her disobedient blood slave had disappeared to. Far away in a crowded tavern, Chelsea gripped her knife with white knuckles, her eyes blazing with defiance as she ordered the men blocking her path to get out of her way. She had already finished the wine they demanded she drink, but the two thugs showed no intention of letting her pass, mocking her beauty and suggesting a single glass wasn't enough to settle the offense. A sudden wave of dizziness washed over her, making her realize with a start that the wine had been drugged. The two men laughed, their faces twisted with predatory glee as they planned to carry her back together. Chelsea looked around frantically, her vision blurring as she realized the other patrons were too afraid of these men to intervene. She refused to give in, thinking of how Campbell was still waiting for her to return. As the larger man swung a massive axe toward her, Chelsea found she couldn't even aim her weapon. Suddenly, a flash of purple light cut through the air, and both men screamed in agony as they were struck down by an invisible force. A voice cold as ice echoed through the room, calling Chelsea a useless human being. Chelsea looked up to see a vision of a young girl with long silver hair holding a teddy bear, looking down at her with disdain. No, that wasn't right. The image flickered and shifted into the dark, regal form of the vampire princess. It was Irina, her presence accompanied by the heavy scent of blooming red roses. Chelsea gasped out the name of her captor as she struggled to stay upright. Irina's eyes glowed with a lethal intensity as she cursed her enemies to return to hell. Memories of Duke Eaton flickered in the back of her mind, a face she could never forget. He had once stood before her with a mocking smile, his elven ears sharp against his dark hair. He had claimed he had no choice but to destroy her. He told her to blame her vicious and cruel stepmother for her fate. Back in the present, Irina tightened the magical purple bindings around Chelsea's wrists, surprised that her slave knew of Duke Eaton. Irina looked down at the girl, her expression unreadable. She urged Chelsea to keep talking, curious about what the girl meant by wanting to return. No matter what Chelsea argued, Irina insisted that a human's life had nothing to do with a vampire like her. Irina's gaze softened into something more dangerous as she decided to take Chelsea back to the castle. She pulled Chelsea close, her fingers trailing over the girl's face as she told her to enjoy the moment slowly. Irina leaned in, her tongue grazing the pulse point on Chelsea's neck. Chelsea's eyes went wide, a mixture of fear and an unwanted sensation washing over her. She let out a soft pain sound as her face flushed, her body betraying her will. With blood trickling from her lip, Chelsea told Irina she might as well kill her, declaring that both the princess and Eaton were her enemies. Chelsea's voice trembled with rage as she explained that she had only become a bounty hunter to avenge her parents. Irina went silent, her amber eyes reflecting a sudden, deep-seated somberness. She remembered her own chains, the weight of the cold metal against her skin. Eaton had stood over her then, repeating his claim that he had to destroy her. He had blamed her stepmother, Lena, for the necessity of her downfall. When Irina asked if he was in cahoots with the queen, Eaton had simply smirked, saying the smart always joined the strong. He had used his magic to tighten her shackles, the purple energy burning her skin. He mocked her as a low-level vampire who only survived because of her father's favor. Irina had cried out in pain as the betrayal cut deeper than any blade. Eaton spoke of how Lena, despite being weak, had won the king's exclusive favor and produced 3 sons. He reminded Irina that while her biological mother had been strong, she was dead and gone. Irina had spat back that she was the most powerful daughter of Cain. She had been poisoned by the brother she trusted most since childhood. She remembered him offering her a glass of blood, claiming it was a special gift from their father. He had revealed his true colors, admitting he wanted to charm her and turn her over to Lena. He planned to imprison her until the end of the king's 1,000-year celebration to ensure her father's disappointment. Irina had collapsed in her cell, unable to believe such a betrayal was possible. She lay on the cold floor, sweat beading on her forehead as the poison took hold. Even then, she clung to her identity as the daughter of Cain and the strongest blood princess. She had fallen into a deep despair behind those bars. At the royal palace, King Cain looked displeased as he questioned why Irina would rather spend time with Eaton than attend his celebration. Blood Queen Lena stood beside him, her green eyes filled with mock concern as she called Irina willful. Her children joined in, whispering that Irina didn't take their father seriously and likely already saw herself as a king. Cain's grip tightened on his throne, his anger mounting as he listened to their lies. They begged him not to be angry, acting as if they were protecting her while they poisoned his mind. Cain roared for Irina to be brought to him immediately upon her return. When Irina finally stood before him, her face was pale but her spirit was unbroken. Cain ordered her to kneel, his voice like thunder. Lena and her son mocked her for missing the celebration to meet with the Duke. Irina tried to defend herself, accusing them of colluding with Eaton to imprison her. Lena clung to the king, tearfully asking how Irina could wrongly accuse her. She claimed Irina was too powerful for anyone but the king himself to trap. Irina pointed to the brutal marks on her neck as proof of her ordeal. Cain had heard enough and shouted for silence. He called Irina lawless for contradicting the queen and ordered her to be punished with 30 silver whips. Irina looked at her father in disbelief, realization dawning that he chose to believe the lies over his own daughter. As she was dragged away, the weight of the vampire world's ruthlessness settled on her shoulders. She had always believed her strength made her the destined successor. She had thought her father would never let Lena surpass her. But as the silver-bladed whip struck her skin again and again, the pain cleared her mind. Blood sprayed across the floor with every strike. In that moment of agony, she finally realized the truth. Vampires were never meant to be merciful. Looking up with eyes full of hatred, she thought of Lena's children and her treacherous brother. She looked toward her father, Cain, with a gaze that promised death. She vowed silently that she would become strong enough to kill them all. The crack of the whip echoed through the cold stone halls of the palace as Prince Yu collapsed, his body shredded by the silver-edged lash. Irina stood over him, her expression devoid of the warmth they once shared as siblings. She held a whip with a silver blade, a weapon specifically designed to punish vampires who dared to overstep their bounds. Each strike was calculated. She told him that while the first few blows brought agonizing pain, by the 30th, the sensation would vanish because the body simply gave up. Even a high-level vampire could not survive such excessive trauma, and Irina intended to see him reach that limit. Blood pooled on the ornate rug as Zhu reached out, his voice trembling with desperation. He begged for mercy, reminding her that he was her brother and that he had only been obsessed for a moment, pleading that he had taught her so much in the past. Irina looked down at him with a chilling smile, her amber eyes glowing with a dark satisfaction. She agreed that he had taught her one final truth, that as long as she was strong enough, everyone else was merely a stepping stone on her path forward. Any expectations she once held for her family had been burned away by their betrayal. She told him plainly that he was the one who had destroyed her kindness with his own hands. 3 hours passed before the silence of the palace was shattered by a scream. A guard burst through the doors, his face pale with terror as he realized the magnitude of what had occurred. He shouted for someone to report to the king immediately. Prince Zhu lay dead in the center of his palace, his body covered in deep whip wounds and the corrosive marks of silver erosion. News of the prince's death traveled fast, reaching the queen, Irina's stepmother. Panicked, she gathered her skirts and prepared to flee to the king for protection, convinced that the bitch Irina was behind the murder. But as she reached the doorway, her body suddenly seized, refusing to move another inch. From the shadows of the balcony, Irina emerged like a ghost, her long dark hair flowing in the night breeze as white butterflies danced around her. She asked her stepmother where she thought she was going so late at night. The queen stumbled back, her voice shaking as she demanded to know what Irina wanted, reminding her that this was her private bedroom and she was not allowed to enter without a summons. Irina only smiled wider, informing her that she had come to let the queen taste exactly what it felt like to be drugged. The queen shrieked, asking if Irina meant to kill her. Irina chuckled, her eyes narrowing as she leaned in close. She denied wanting to kill her, claiming to be a very disciplined person who only believed in a simple philosophy. She leaned over the terrified woman, whispering that she believed in a tooth for a tooth and an eye for an eye. With a sharp command, Irina ordered her hidden companions to come out. Two rough-looking men stepped into the light, grinning as they approached the queen. Irina reminded her stepmother of her plan to have the Earl of Eton force himself upon Irina, and since that plan had failed, Irina was simply returning the favor. The queen screamed that she was the queen of the Blood clan, but her warnings fell on deaf ears. The shadows of the men loomed over her as she was pinned to the floor, her screams echoing through the room. Irina turned to leave, tossing a final warning over her shoulder that if she ever had to care about this again, she would ensure there were no bones left of the queen next time. The purge did not stop there. Every vampire who had taken action against Irina that day was hunted down and killed, with only the Earl of Eton spared because he had been under Kane's direct protection. When the news reached the king, he was livid, smashing furniture in his rage. He could not believe Irina had dared to disturb his territory and wondered if she would try to kill him next. One of his advisors knelt before him, suggesting that Irina was becoming a disaster and that they needed to act quickly to kill her before she fully matured. The king looked on with a grim expression. However, Irina knew the truth of her existence. She was the Blood Princess and she was immortal. Not even Kane possessed the power to truly kill her. The most they could do was hold a sealing ceremony, and even that would only lock her away for 100 years. Now those 100 years had finally passed. Back in the present, Irina held the unconscious Chelsea close. Chelsea stirred in her sleep, her brow furrowed as she whimpered for someone named Campbell not to go. Irina's smile faltered as she watched the human girl. She mused that perhaps this blood food wasn't as heartless as she thought. But as Chelsea continued to moan, begging Campbell not to leave her, Irina's irritation flared. She repeated the name with a growl, her face darkening with jealousy. She couldn't believe Chelsea was still thinking about this Campbell even now. A dark resolve settled over Irina. She decided she would have to find a way to get rid of the real Campbell. In her mind, Chelsea could only belong to her and no one else. Chelsea sat up with a start, the name Campbell still on her lips. She looked around the unfamiliar, luxurious bedroom, confused about how she had gotten there after being drugged by Irina. A knock at the door startled her as a polite student entered carrying a tray of food. He told her he had brought breakfast and claimed she had returned late and intoxicated the night before. He even praised her skills, saying she had driven away 2 thugs by herself. Chelsea was baffled. She looked at her hands and neck, the ropes were gone and the bite wound had completely vanished. She wondered if the entire encounter with Irina had been nothing more than a vivid nightmare. At the Rochester School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, a different kind of drama was unfolding. A female student stood in a library, shouting at Professor Angus. She couldn't believe he was accusing Campbell, a mere 14-year-old child, of having the strength to attack him. Angus sat at a desk, his face hidden in shadow, muttering that the girl was a despicable piece of trash and just as disobedient as Chelsea had been. The students whispered among themselves, shocked by the rumor that someone had sneaked into the professor's room and hung him out the window all night. Campbell stood among her peers, looking the picture of innocence as a friend promised they wouldn't let Angus wrongly accuse her. Campbell thanked her softly, but as she looked toward the window, a small, cunning smirk played on her lips. She watched the professor fuming, knowing exactly what she had done. Angus slammed his fist onto the table, swearing he would take away her magic and send her to prison. He demanded that the girl be locked up so she would never have a chance to practice magic again. The vice principal arrived to restore order, telling Angus that his behavior was unseemly for a teacher. He summoned Campbell and her roommates to his office. One of the roommates explained that they were likely being taken to the mantra statue for testing, but she assured Campbell they would testify for her. Campbell tilted her head, wondering what a mantra statue was. They were led to a massive, angelic stone figure holding a book. The vice principal explained that the statue would detect any lie told in its presence. One of the roommates stepped forward eagerly, offering to go first. Campbell watched with a nervous expression, her hand clutched at her chest. Angus glared at her from the side, promising he would catch her in her lie. The roommate knelt before the statue, testifying that Campbell had fallen asleep very early the night before and never left her bed. As the statue processed the words, Angus looked on in shock, wondering if he was seeing things correctly as the truth was recorded. Professor Angus stood frozen in shock, his eyes darting between the silent girl and the unyielding stone of the mantra statue as he realized the truth was not what he expected. His pupils dilated with a mixture of confusion and growing fury, unable to fathom how his accusations had been swept away. "You devil," he snarled, pointing a trembling finger at the silver-haired girl as he accused her of using some foul deception to trick the other students into believing she had never left her room. Campbell looked up with wide, tearful eyes, whispering that she didn't understand why this was happening. A student nearby placed a comforting hand on the girl's head, assuring her that the mantra statue would never wrong anyone and encouraging her to tell everyone exactly what she had done the previous night. Campbell offered a small, shy smile as if gathering her courage. A heavy silence fell over the hall as the girl stepped forward, her dark shoes clicking against the cold floor as the statue began to hum with a faint, magical resonance. The long, silver hair of the girl swayed as she turned her back to the crowd, facing the judgment of the ancient stone. "Will you never accuse someone unjustly again after this?" her eyes seemed to ask as she stared intensely at the witness of truth. She knelt gracefully before the pedestal, her blue dress pooling around her like a fallen cloud. "I, Campbell Wayne, declare that Professor Angus was not hung outside the tower by my hand last night," she stated clearly. A brilliant flash of blue light erupted from the statue, confirming her words and sending a shockwave of realization through the gathered mages. Professor Angus felt as if a bolt of lightning had struck him, his body stiffening as the weight of the statue's verdict crushed his ego. Behind her innocent facade, the girl knew the truth was a simple matter of semantics. The person who had hung the professor was Irina, a name that had nothing to do with the identity of Campbell. The professor's mind snapped, his vision blurring with a murderous heat as he screamed that she had somehow rigged the test. Fire erupted from his clenched fist, the orange flames licking the air as he prepared to strike down the girl who had humiliated him. "You deserve to die," he roared, lunging forward with a lethal intent that threatened to incinerate everything in its path. Other students cried out in terror, but before the flames could reach Campbell, a golden blur intercepted the attack. Chelsea stood firmly between the predator and her prey, her eyes burning with a protective fire that rivaled the professor's magic. "Why is she here?" Campbell wondered, her eyes wide as she watched her protector arrive at the 11th hour. Chelsea turned back with a look of pure panic, asking if Campbell was okay and apologizing profusely for being late. Campbell immediately collapsed into Chelsea's arms, sobbing that she was scared and that the teacher had actually tried to kill her. "I am so scared," the girl wailed, burying her face in Chelsea's shirt as the older woman's expression hardened into one of cold fury. Chelsea looked over her shoulder at the professor, demanding an immediate explanation for the madness she had just witnessed. "You noisy old frog," Chelsea thought, her irritation boiling over as the professor continued to rant. "Shut up," Chelsea screamed, reaching down and hurling her own shoe with such force that it caught the professor right in the face. The room went silent as the shoe bounced off the stunned man's head, and the other students whispered that Chelsea must have finally lost her mind. "You simply do not deserve to be a professor if you can deal such cruelty to a child, and then try to shift the blame onto her head," Chelsea declared, her voice echoing through the hall. Chelsea gestured toward the trembling girl at her side, asking the crowd if they really believed a child would allow herself to be humiliated like this if she were truly guilty. A student stepped forward to de-escalate the tension, urging Chelsea to calm down and leave the rest to the academy officials. "New disciple," Chelsea repeated, her brow furrowing in confusion as the student explained that Campbell was an SSS-level talent and the vice principal's prize student. The girl promised that the college would handle the matter and give the new disciple a proper explanation. "I certainly hope so," Chelsea muttered, her gaze lingering on the professor with lingering suspicion. She looked down at Campbell, her heart softening at the sight of the girl's apparent vulnerability. "Let us go home," Chelsea said softly, reaching down to scoop the girl up into her arms. "I am sorry I left you alone to face such a thing," Chelsea whispered as she carried her away, promising that she would never abandon her again. Campbell looked up at her with tear-stained cheeks, asking why she had come back so suddenly when she had important business to attend to. Chelsea hesitated, unable to find the words to explain the sudden, visceral nightmare she had experienced on the road. How could she admit that she had dreamed of Irina threatening Campbell, or that Campbell had coldly accused her of abandonment? She carried the girl through the sun-drenched gardens of the academy, the light filtering through the trees as she fled from the lingering shadows of her own fears. Irina, hidden behind Campbell's eyes, looked at the woman carrying her with a sense of profound irony, wondering what this blood slave was thinking by swearing to protect a blood prince with supreme power. She can't even protect herself right now, yet she speaks of protection for me, the vampire princess mused silently. Are all humans as foolish as this one? Irina wondered, watching Chelsea's determined face and noting that despite everything, the woman hadn't learned to be selfish. What is wrong? Do you not trust me? Chelsea asked, noticing the girl's silence. Campbell looked down, her voice small as she admitted that she believed her, but that she was still very angry about being left alone. As my fiancé, you have failed in your duty, the girl said, a playful but sharp edge entering her tone as she told Chelsea she would have to accept a punishment. Chelsea felt a strange thrill at the suggestion, her heart racing as she realized her little angel was starting to take the initiative to punish her. I am willing to accept any punishment you see fit, Chelsea replied, her face flushing as she felt the curse in her body react to the girl's command. She sank to her knees on the soft grass, looking up with a submissive gaze and asking exactly how Campbell wanted to punish her. Yes, how should I punish my disobedient puppy, the girl thought, her blue eyes shimmering with a secret predatory delight. Her gaze wandered to a tree nearby, where a colorful poster advertised the opening of a new maid cafe. I see, the girl whispered, a mischievous glint appearing in her eyes as she formed a plan. A short time later, Chelsea stood in the center of the room, her face burning with embarrassment as she smoothed out the frills of a black and white maid uniform. Campbell leaned in close, her voice a low purr as she asked if the outfit was to her liking. I want that, the girl said, pointing a slender finger toward a small, trembling pudding sitting on the table. Campbell, Chelsea stammered, her confusion growing as the girl picked up the dessert. With a sudden movement, the pudding was dropped, landing right against the white fabric covering Chelsea's chest. What a shame, such a delicious pudding, the girl laughed, her eyes bright with amusement. Chelsea sighed, reaching down to clean herself and offering to go get another one from the kitchen. No, the girl said firmly, her voice stopping Chelsea in her tracks. I want that piece, the girl insisted, her smile widening into something dark and demanding as she toyed with a purple ribbon. But the pudding is on my chest, Chelsea pointed out, her voice trembling as she looked at the sticky mess. Are you being disobedient? The girl asked, her eyes narrowing as she challenged the woman before her. Chelsea looked away, her breath hitching as she struggled with the indignity of the situation. Following her words without dignity like this, Chelsea thought, wondering what would happen if the girl ever found out she wasn't the real Campbell. Will she regret what she is doing to me today when the truth comes out? She wondered silently. A hand reached out, firm and cool, lifting Chelsea's chin so that she was forced to look into the eyes of the girl she thought she was protecting. The heavy wooden doors of the manor remained firmly shut, a silent barrier between the safety of the room and the world outside. Chelsea lay back against the pillows, her face flushed with a deep, frantic heat as she reached out to grab the sleeve of the girl beside her. Don't go, Campbell, she pleaded, her voice thick with a desperate vulnerability. Don't leave me, I only have you. In the hazy, fractured edges of her memory, a different version of the girl looked down at her. This figure was a shadow of the past, her features blurred by time and trauma, her voice a chilling whisper that demanded submission. Are you disobedient? The memory asked, its tone cold and authoritative. The vision shifted as the young girl turned her back, walking toward the large doors without looking back. Leave, she commanded, leaving Chelsea to reach out into the empty air. No, Campbell, she cried out in her sleep. The dream broke as Chelsea felt the reality of her current life settling back in. Although the memory of that day often felt like nothing more than a fever dream, the fear of abandonment was a physical weight. I cannot lose Campbell, so I must do whatever it takes, she thought, her eyes glistening as she sat up in her maid attire while Campbell worked to untie the bindings of her corset. Chelsea looked up at her master with an expression of pure, submissive devotion. Chelsea is obedient, master, she whispered. Irina, still wearing the guise of the youthful Campbell, offered a small, enigmatic smile. Internally, she felt a flicker of genuine concern. Was the bullying at the academy too severe, she wondered, or would Chelsea start to suspect something was wrong? She leaned in, her voice soft as she brushed a hand against Chelsea's cheek. Chelsea, did I go too far? I am sorry, I did not know you disliked this. Chelsea gasped, her breath hitching as her face turned a bright, blooming red. No, I like it very much, she stammered, her hands trembling as they hovered near her chest. They sat together on the edge of the bed, the distance between them shrinking until their foreheads nearly touched. I did not think about anything else, Chelsea whispered, lost in the proximity. Irina watched her closely, a predatory edge hidden behind her kind eyes. If you are afraid of being left behind by Campbell, she suggested, then it is better not to tell her the truth. Chelsea's eye fluttered, her gaze fixed on the girl she believed was her savior. Really? Irina asked, her voice dropping to a low, suggestive hum. She looked Chelsea up and down, a playful but sharp light in her eyes. Chelsea, you are naughty. I am your fiancé. Do you even want to hide things from me? Master, I dare not hide anything from you, Chelsea insisted, her head bowing in shame as a blush crept down her neck. Just now, I was just thinking about you. Irina's smile widened, her expression turning into something far more satisfied. Miss me? She asked with a soft chuckle, aren't I right here? A thin, dark rattan vine, controlled by Irina's hidden power, slithered across Chelsea's thigh like a living thing. Chelsea let out a soft moan, her mind swirling with conflicting desires. She thought of being whipped hard by Campbell, a punishment she both feared and craved. She wanted to become a prisoner of Campbell's desire and throw all reason behind her. Irina watched the reaction, her own hunger growing. I really want to take a bite and see what such fair and delicate skin tastes like, Irina thought as the rattan struck again. Will it taste better than her lips? Chelsea's head tilted back, her eyes glazed with a mixture of pain and pleasure. It is so light, she thought, surprised by the sensation. How could it be different from the pain I imagined? It is like scratching an itch. Irina suddenly pulled back, her eyes wide with a simulated shock as if she had just realized the extent of what she was doing. She threw her arms around Chelsea, her voice breaking into a sob. Why is my sister crying again? Did I go too far? Is it my fault? Does it hurt? Chelsea immediately began to comfort her, pulling the girl into a protective embrace. No, Campbell, you did a great job, she insisted, her heart aching for the girl she thought was an innocent angel. You are the kindest person in the world, the one who is saving me. There is no need to blame yourself at all. Chelsea smiled brightly, trying to reassure her. It is true, look, am I not very good now? And I feel the curse is loosening. Once the curse is lifted, you won't have to sacrifice for me anymore. Sacrifice? Irina thought, a dark smirk playing on her lips where Chelsea couldn't see it. What kind of sacrifice is this? I just love this way of torturing her. She looked at Chelsea's smiling face and made a silent vow to herself. You have to find a way to make her curse continue to come true so that you can continue to toy with her. Chelsea, meanwhile, was lost in her own thoughts, determined to end the curse so her little angel wouldn't have to do things she didn't want to do. The next day, the sun shone brightly over the grand architecture of the Magic Academy Museum. Every new student who joined the academy was expected to visit and learn about the outstanding students of past generations. Names like Clancy Fu and Soappenny were displayed prominently, their portraits serving as inspiration for the newcomers. Groups of students gathered around the paintings, listening to the instructors explain that as long as they studied hard, they could be as good as those legendary figures. Irina walked through the halls, her mind filled with a sense of superiority. Excellent. I have had the ability of a great mage since I was born, she thought disdainfully. If it weren't for playing the role of a stupid and ignorant little girl, I really wouldn't want to listen to this. Her internal monologue was cut short when she turned a corner and stopped dead in her tracks. There, hanging in a place of honor, was a portrait of a beautiful blonde woman in academy robes. The plaque beneath it read, Chelsea G. Sivir. Irina's eyes widened in genuine surprise. Chelsea? It turns out that she was once so good and could be regarded as the pride of heaven. She stared at the image of the woman she currently held captive, seeing a spark of brilliance in the painted eyes that she hadn't expected. A group of older girls approached the portrait, their expressions full of scorn. A person who has not even finished magic school can be considered an outstanding student? One of them asked, her voice dripping with venom. I am afraid the people who manage the museum forgot about her and forgot to remove the sign. Irina's gaze sharpened as she listened to them. No one but me has the right to laugh at Chelsea, she thought, a cold anger bubbling up. The lead bully, a girl with long blonde hair and a cruel smile, laughed out loud. Nosy, I said she is a waste, she declared. Irina stepped forward, her expression calm but her eyes freezing. Even if she is in the trash, she is still an outstanding student of the academy, Irina said firmly. Unlike you, there is not even a photo of you in the museum. The bully's face contorted with rage. You, she hissed, her eyes narrowing as she looked down at the younger girl. Irina stood her ground, her arms crossed over her chest as the other students began to filter out of the room, leaving them alone. Sharp-tongued, are you Campbell? The bully asked, leaning in close. The vice principal said you are extremely talented, but what can you do? Her friends laughed behind her. Maybe the vice principal made a mistake, one of them mocked. When I see her like this, she doesn't look like a genius at all. She's still almost a clown. Step aside, Irina said coldly, her voice devoid of any emotion. She tried to walk past, but the blonde girl blocked her path with a shove. Yo, why are you leaving in such a hurry? She asked with a smirk. Weren't you quite tempered just now? How are you scared? The lackeys joined in, circling around. Look at this poor little thing, you don't know, you think we've bullied you, one said with a fake pout. Who told you to be so mean? Boss beat her. Irina looked at the group, her patience finally snapping. This group of people is really an eyesore, she thought. She tried to remind herself of her role, but the insults were becoming intolerable. I play the role of a helpless little girl, but if I can't help but kill a few people, Chelsea will find out, she mused. One of the lackeys grabbed her by the shoulder, shaking her. Hey, our boss is talking to you. What do you mean by lowering your head? Are you looking down on our boss? She leaned in closer, her voice a threat. If you dare to look down on our boss, believe it or not, I will beat you to death now. Irina remained silent, her hair shadowing her eyes. Slowly, she looked up, and for a brief moment, her eyes flashed with a terrifying golden light. Let me go, she whispered, the command carrying a weight that seemed to vibrate through the air. A sudden, unnatural chill swept through the hallway, making the bullies shiver. Why, it suddenly seems to have cooled down, one of them stammered, her bravado faltering. How is it possible? Even if she is extremely talented, she is just a weakling who has just entered school. Irina's eyes were now fully glowing, her expression one of pure lethal intent. If you don't want to die, get out now, she barked. The blonde girl let out a nervous laugh, trying to regain control. Ha ha ha, what, you want to kill me? I'm so scared. She pointed a finger at Irina's chest. I advise you not to be so harsh. Just shout a few words, Chelsea is a waste, and I will let you go, how about it? That was the final straw, not so good. Irina thought, her power surging around her in a dark, invisible wave. Chelsea is my favorite food, and anyone who insults my food insults me. The bullies recoiled as the murderous intent became a physical pressure. Who are you? The blonde girl gasped, her face turning pale. How could a little girl have such strong murderous intent? Her friends were paralyzed with fear, realizing too late that they had provoked something monstrous. "Boss, don't talk nonsense to her, she's just a little trash, give her a quick beating," one tried to say, but her voice lacked conviction. At first, I didn't want to reveal my identity, dumping the body after killing someone, Irina thought, her gaze fixed on them like a predator. But now, I just want to get rid of these idiots, go to hell. A massive magical circle erupted on the floor beneath the bullies, glowing with a sinister light. "Let us go, we realize our mistake," they screamed as the magic began to overwhelm them. Seconds later, the blonde girl and her friends were sprawled on the floor, their pride shattered as they bowed frantically. "Please forgive us." Irina stood over them, her eyes returning to their normal color but her expression remaining stern. "Just come here today and watch your tongue," she warned. "I'll come and get it at any time." The bullies scrambled to their feet, bowing and scraping. "Yes, yes, thank you, Miss Campbell, for your gift." As they ran off, Irina took a deep breath, her mind already shifting back to her manipulation. How should I pretend to be pitiful in front of Chelsea next, she wondered. After all, my blood food is still waiting for me to go home. She looked down at her pristine academy uniform and reached out, deliberately tearing the fabric and scuffing her knees. "Huh?" Pretending to be pitiful, she muttered as she made herself look tattered and beaten. The sun had set by the time she reached the manor. "Chelsea, I'm back," she called out, her voice sounding weak and shaky. Inside, Chelsea was carrying a tray of fresh bread, a warm smile on her face. "Campbell, you're back, dinner is almost ready," she began, but the words died in her throat. Her eyes widened in horror as she saw the state of the girl in the doorway. Irina stood there, her clothes torn, her hair a mess, and tears streaming down her face as she clutched her chest. "Chelsea," she sobbed, her voice cracking with practiced grief. "I didn't fight on purpose, it was them, they did it to me." The shadows of the other students loomed large in Campbell's memory, their mocking laughter echoing as they surrounded her. A faint blue light shimmered around her feet as she stood her ground, her voice trembling but resolute as she declared that while they could say whatever they wanted about her, she would never accept them insulting Chelsea. Tears welled in Campbell's large, innocent eyes as she clung to Chelsea's arm, looking up with a heartbreaking expression. "They beat me first, Chelsea, can you believe me?" she sobbed, while Chelsea held her close, promising that as her fiancée she would always believe her. Chelsea's expression softened into one of protective warmth as she stroked the girl's hair, though her voice held a dangerous edge. "Don't scare her," she whispered before asking for the names and numbers of those who had laid a hand on her. Campbell sniffled, pointing out that she only knew the leader was named Louis Ling, a name that Chelsea repeated with a cold, calculating focus. Night had fallen over the academy grounds, the dark silhouettes of the trees swaying in the wind. A sudden gust of wind whipped through the foliage as a blue streak of energy cut through the darkness. Louis Ling fled through the woods, her pride wounded as she muttered about the shame of being humiliated by a mere child. Her face was marked with a fresh scratch, her eyes burning with a vengeful fire as she vowed to skin the girl once her true identity was revealed. Suddenly, a brilliant arc of blue magic slashed through the air, catching Louis off guard and forcing a sharp cry of pain from her lips. Chelsea stepped out from the shadows, her presence commanding and lethal as Campbell hovered just behind her. "Are you Louis Ling?" Chelsea asked, her gaze fixed on the girl who had dared to cause Campbell pain. The two stood together, a striking contrast of Chelsea's fierce determination and Campbell's wide-eyed observation. The other girls nearby began to tremble, their legs shaking as they realized the extent of the scars on their leader and wondered if Campbell was truly the one responsible. It made no sense to them, as Campbell's talent had previously been mediocre at best, and they could not understand how she had suddenly become so powerful. One of the cronies cowered on the ground, stammering out a question about who Chelsea thought she was to interfere with their boss. Louis Ling's eyes widened in realization as she stared at Chelsea, recognizing her from a photograph. "Are you Chelsea, the person in the photo?" she asked, while Chelsea's purple eyes glowed with a predatory intensity. Another flash of blue light erupted as Chelsea struck again, ignoring the insults as she declared that she could not bear to see anyone bullying her fiancé. A complex magical circle manifested before Chelsea's hand, pulsing with ancient power as the other girls shouted that they would avenge their leader. They rushed forward with cries of defiance, but Chelsea dispatched them with a series of swift, punishing blows, marking them as accomplices in the mistreatment of Campbell. Chelsea stood tall over the fallen Louis, her hand glowing with mana as she issued a simple, cold command. "Apologize," she said. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper as she told Louis that she did not care about criticism directed at herself, but she would never allow her family to be harmed. Trembling and cornered, Louis finally relented, her voice cracking as she muttered a half-hearted apology to Campbell. "I've already apologized, what else do you want?" Louis snapped, her face flushed with anger. A small flame of blue fire ignited on the tip of Chelsea's finger, the heat distorting the air as she demanded a more sincere tone. The crackling of the magical fire filled the silence, and Louis felt the weight of Chelsea's gaze pressing down on her. Chelsea's eyes remained cold and unyielding, waiting for the girl to show true remorse. Broken by the overwhelming pressure, Louis dropped to her knees and bowed her head to the dirt, weeping as she admitted she had been blind and should never have bullied Campbell. She sobbed that Campbell was not a waste but a genius, prompting Chelsea to look back at the young girl with a faint smile, asking if she was satisfied with the apology. Campbell put a finger to her chin, her inner thoughts of blood and food masked by her adorable exterior. Since my little blood food has asked this, I will just reluctantly bully these little shrimps for her, she thought, before puffing out her chest and declaring that Chelsea was the true genius. The other girls quickly scrambled to agree, their voices overlapping as they promised never to lay a finger on Campbell again. Satisfied with the outcome, Campbell grabbed Chelsea's hand and began to lead her away, her face bright with a smug, happy grin that Chelsea could not help but find incredibly cute. Chelsea looked down at the girl resting peacefully, wondering if she was finally asleep. Campbell, are you awake? She whispered softly. The girl remained still, her eyes closed in a deep, tranquil slumber. Chelsea let out a breath she had not realized she was holding, her violet eyes softening with relief. Fortunately, she did not wake up, otherwise things would have been much more complicated. She leaned in, her golden hair brushing against the other girl's shoulder as she watched her sleep. Master, rest well, she murmured, a flicker of something dark and expectant in her gaze. I look forward to your punishment. As Chelsea turned away and reached for the door handle, her thoughts were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. When doing these things, I no longer feel disgust in my heart, she realized with a start. I am even looking forward to this. She paused, her hand trembling slightly against her chest as she tried to reconcile her burgeoning desires with her sense of morality. No, we can no longer embarrass the little angel and do such excessive things, she scolded herself. She clenched her fist, the leather of her glove creaking. I must find a way to lift the curse as soon as possible or avenge my parents as soon as possible. Maybe there will be clues in Irina's castle about the vampire who killed my parents. With a quiet click, she closed the door behind her. The moment the door shut, the girl on the bed snapped her eyes open, her gaze sharp and calculating. A slow, playful smirk spread across her lips. Funny, my food was so duplicitous that it sneaked in on me while I was sleeping, Irina mused to herself, her eyes glowing with a predatory light. She thought back to the previous night, her eyes shifting to a fiery red as she recalled the gangsters she had used to vent her frustration. I was a little reluctant to eat her, she thought, watching a crow fly across the face of the massive full moon outside. It was a beautiful, clear night, the kind that beckoned to creatures of the dark. However, her current state was unacceptable. It feels really uncomfortable to be a waste, and I have to find a way to regain my strength. She looked down at her pale, slender hands, remembering the secrets hidden within her ancestral home. I remember. There is still some magic left in my castle that can nourish the vampires. Deep within the shadows of the old castle, Chelsea was busy rummaging through a heavy chest, her brow furrowed in concentration. Suddenly, she felt a presence behind her and spun around, her eyes widening in surprise. A woman in an elegant black and green gown stood there, a dagger held casually in her hand. Oh yeah, the stranger purred. Chelsea did not hesitate, drawing her own weapon in a flash of steel. Who? She demanded. The vampire leaned in close, her dark hair framed by red roses. Is this your attitude towards your benefactor? She asked with a mocking smile. Chelsea's lip curled in defiance. Benefactor, you deserve it too, die, she hissed, lunging forward. The vampire merely chuckled, her red eyes sparkling with amusement. She was strikingly beautiful, her neck adorned with a glittering emerald necklace. With a swift movement, the vampire parried Chelsea's strike, the sound of clashing metal echoing through the hall. Little thing, if it weren't for me, you would have died in the castle, the woman said, her voice dripping with condescension. Ungrateful, it turns out that humans are nothing more than that. Chelsea pushed back, her jaw set. I don't need your help, stop being so sentimental, she snapped, swinging her blade again. The vampire's eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint appearing in their depths. Don't be so hasty or I might hurt you, she warned, leaning into Chelsea's space. Chelsea struggled against her grip, shouting, let go. The sound of heavy footsteps approached the massive double doors of the inner sanctum. Several vampires stood guard, their expressions grim as they watched the entrance. They turned as another figure approached, the atmosphere thick with tension. Chelsea looked at the woman beside her, her eyes searching. Irina, is there anyone else in your castle? She asked. The vampire gave her a knowing look. Don't you know very well whether there is anyone else in my castle? They watched as a high-level vampire stood before a glowing purple seal. A hand reached out, touching the magical circle as flames began to lick at the edges. Suddenly, the vampire was engulfed in a pillar of fire, his screams filling the air as he was consumed. Go, someone shouted as the others scrambled back from the inferno. Chelsea and the vampire princess stood together, watching the grisly scene unfold. A charred silhouette was all that remained on the floor. A high-level vampire, how could he be burned to death? Chelsea exclaimed. The vampire princess sniffed the air, her expression darkening. The air smells of black magic. She looked thoughtful, her finger tapping her chin. How could a black magician appear near my castle? Chelsea looked at her skeptically. Why are you asking me this question? She asked. The vampire turned to her, her voice serious. Because it looks like the black magicians among you humans have made some kind of deal with the vampires. It seems that you humans are also selfish and greedy and are unwilling to accept the status quo. Chelsea's gaze hardened. Black magicians are traitors to mankind. I'll go find out what's going on with them. The vampire princess reached out, a surge of purple energy crackling between them. But don't even think about it, she commanded. In an instant, she vanished, leaving Chelsea standing alone in the grand hallway. She's gone, Chelsea muttered, staring at the empty space. The next morning, the girl known as Campbell skipped down the stairs, her silver hair flowing behind her. Sister, I'm going to school, she called out cheerfully. Chelsea caught up to her, her expression troubled. Wait, Campbell, she started. She looked into the girl's bright blue eyes, hesitating. Is something wrong with my sister? Campbell wondered silently. Chelsea took a deep breath. Campbell, me, do you know of any way I can break the curse as quickly as possible? She looked down, her eyes filled with a desperate longing. I really want to find out what happened between the traitor and the vampire, but the curse always hinders me, she thought. Campbell smiled gently and patted Chelsea's head. If my sister wants to know, I can go to the library in the Magic Academy to check the magic books. Chelsea's face lit up. Thank you, Campbell, the girl waved as she walked away. You're welcome, sister, just wait for me at home. As she walked, Campbell's smile turned into a cold, calculating smirk. It seems that the little prey cannot wait to lift the curse, that's fine. A proper understanding of curses can help my prey live longer and play longer, she mused. At the Magic Academy, the tea art class had just concluded. Campbell made her way straight to the library, her eyes scanning the towering shelves. Curse, vicious curse, she whispered, running her finger along the spines of the ancient tomes. Finally, she stopped, found it. She opened the heavy book, the pages yellowed with age. According to legend, this curse originated from ancient times and was very vicious, the text read. She wondered if it was usually used on opponents who had a blood feud. As she read, the edges of the pages seemed to singe and burn, revealing the dark history of the spell. Once the curse takes effect, the cursed person and their descendants will not live to be 30 years old. A haunting image of a woman with long red hair appeared in her mind's eye. The person under the curse will burn his life and feel the heat every day he is alive until he dies. She read on, her eyes widening. If you're cursed, you can temporarily suppress the curse by being abused by your partner. The book showed a man with a whip, a cruel smile on his face. Over a long time, the cursed person will completely lose his mind, become a slave of desire, and die without any wealth or property. It was a fate worse than death, but why abuse? Because abuse is another form of erosion. It seems to relieve the symptoms, but in fact it is silently eroding the cursed blood until the oil lamp is exhausted. Campbell looked at the book with a mix of pity and fascination. If it were just an ordinary master-servant role-playing game, I would not mind cooperating with little blood food to help her relieve the curse. But if the ending is destined to be death, I do not want to see her die like this until I find a tastier substitute. She turned to the final section, her breath catching. There is only one way to lift the curse, but the method is extremely cruel and painful, and once executed, it cannot be stopped. The illustration showed a dagger hovering over a cursed mark on a woman's chest. The cursed person needs to cut out the entire cursed totem on his body. Next, the cursor needs to cut his wrists to blade, and before the blood coagulates, exchange body fluids with a partner. Campbell froze. Wait a minute, she gasped, slamming the book shut. What does the book say about exchange? She could not believe it. What a joke. I have never been the only one to suck and bite humans, and no one has ever been able to snatch bodily fluids from my mouth, she thought indignantly. However, human beings do not only have bodily fluids in their mouths. Her mind raced, imagining other possibilities. Other places, it is also possible to exchange body fluids, isn't it? A sudden noise startled her. What sound? She whispered, looking around the quiet library. She peered through the gaps in the bookshelves. Her eyes widened as she saw two figures entwined in the shadows. How could a vampire appear in a magic academy? She hissed, her anger rising. What I hate the most is unruly vampires. Who is so brave and dares to commit murder in the Magic Academy? She thought, stepping out from behind the shelves. She heard the sound of retreating footsteps and caught a glimpse of dark hair. Rounding a corner, she saw a hand lying motionless on the floor. She gasped as she looked down at the body. This is. She leaned closer, her heart hammering against her ribs. Do you died? She asked softly. A girl with pink hair and glasses appeared in the doorway, her face pale with shock. She looked from Campbell to the body on the floor, her eyes wide behind her lenses. Campbell stood frozen as the realization hit her. The pink-haired girl began to scream. Ah, suck, the vampire killed someone. Voices echoed through the halls. Where is the vampire? Why is Campbell here? Where are the vampires? A crowd of students gathered, staring at Campbell and the victim. Someone knelt by the body, checking for a pulse. Professor Angus, they cried out in horror. The students whispered among themselves, their faces filled with fear and suspicion. Didn't Professor Angus have a conflict with Campbell before? Someone pointed out. The rumors spread like wildfire. Could it be Campbell? She is a vampire? News of the arrest reached Chelsea quickly. What, you mean my fiancée Campbell is a vampire and she killed Professor Angus? She shouted, slamming her hands on the principal's desk. The messenger nodded solemnly. Principal, yes, that's what was announced. Now Campbell has been arrested and executed. Chelsea did not wait to hear another word. Impossible. How could Campbell do such a thing if he is so timid and kind? There must be some misunderstanding, she yelled, running out of the office. She raced through the academy grounds, her heart full of dread. Unexpectedly, Campbell turned out to be a vampire, and the principal ordered him to be burned at the stake. She heard the cruel gossip of the students as she passed. I heard that Professor Angus died miserably. Angus had offended Campbell before he was alive. It was definitely her fault. Chelsea grit her teeth. No, how is it possible? Campbell has been my fiancé since we were young. We grew up together. How could she be a vampire? She must have been framed by a vampire. At the execution site, Campbell stood tied to a stake, her expression one of quiet resignation. The principal held a flaming torch aloft. Execution, he bellowed, lowering the fire toward the wood. Stop, Chelsea's voice rang out across the square. With a swift movement, she threw a blade, severing the torch from the principal's hand. She leaped onto the platform, standing defiantly in front of the girl. Sister, Campbell whispered, her eyes filling with tears. Chelsea looked the principal dead in the eye. Principal, I believe Campbell is not a vampire. Please don't torture her, she declared, her voice unwavering. Campbell looked up at her, a weak smile touching her lips. Sister, you are here. It's great to see you again before I die. Campbell looked up with eyes brimming with tears, her voice trembling as she spoke. She explained that she had only gone to the library to read, and yet these people were falsely accusing her of a terrible crime. She leaned closer to Chelsea, claiming that her only intention was to find a way to help Chelsea with a magic book that might help with a curse. A look of profound sorrow crossed her face as she questioned why a good angel like herself was being treated with such cruelty. Looking directly into Chelsea's eyes, she whispered that she feared she would die today, asking if Chelsea would find the truth and give her justice after she was gone. Chelsea gripped her shoulders firmly, promising that she would not die because she was innocent and that she would definitely save her. A small, sad smile touched Campbell's lips as she replied that she believed in her sister more than anyone else in the world. Deep within her mind, the being known as Irina laughed at the ease of the deception. The punishment of fire meant nothing to her, but the feeling of being treated with such favor simply by pretending to be weak was addictive. She was a blood prince, a creature born into a world where she had to fight for everything she desired. From her earliest memories, she had learned to grab what she wanted and do whatever it took to keep it. She looked down at Chelsea, who was kneeling before her, and felt a surge of predatory satisfaction. Her plan was unfolding perfectly, using her beauty and feigned vulnerability to lead her prey step by step into a carefully designed trap. To Irina, the entire situation was becoming truly fascinating. The principal's voice cut through the air like a blade, ordering the students to set the fire. He shouted that the school would never allow evil things to exist within its walls. He pointed a finger toward the bound girl, declaring that anyone who dared to kill someone on campus must be prepared for execution. Chelsea stepped forward, her expression hardening as she challenged the principal. She asked if Campbell even had the ability to kill someone like Professor Angus, accusing the staff of wanting to convict her based on mere speculation without even giving her a chance to prove her innocence. The principal narrowed his eyes, retorting that the librarian had testified that Campbell was the only one present in the library when the professor died. Waldorf, the librarian with a prominent scar across his face, stood nearby clutching a thick book. He looked down with a pained expression and confirmed the statement with a quiet yes. He added that even if she wasn't the murderer, she must be an accomplice, which was equally unforgivable. The principal ignored Chelsea's pleas, stating that it was almost time to light the pyre. A student moved forward, holding a flaming torch toward the wood. Wait, Principal, Chelsea shouted, physically stopping the hand of the student with the torch. She stood her ground, arguing that if vampires were the ones known for killing people, then proving Campbell wasn't a vampire would prove she wasn't the murderer. She reminded everyone that the Academy possessed spiritual stones for testing vampires and that it made no sense to execute her without a proper test. The crowd of students began to murmur, agreeing that a trial by fire was too extreme and that the spiritual stone should be used to verify the truth. The principal's face twitched with hidden frustration. He realized that while he wanted Campbell dead to hide what she might have seen in the library, he had to maintain his prestige. He smoothed his expression, claiming that he too cherished talent but that the Academy had zero tolerance for vampires. He finally conceded, stating that since Chelsea insisted, he would take her to be tested, but warned that if she was a vampire, the execution would continue. Chelsea turned back to Campbell, promising to get her out of this mess. Irina watched her, wondering how upset her good sister would be if she realized the person she was fighting for was the very monster she hated. They moved to a room where a large, deep blue orb sat upon a wooden stand. The principal explained that this was the spiritual stone used for detecting vampires. He noted that if a vampire approached it, a bright red light would burst forth. He gestured toward the stone, telling Campbell to come forward and put her hand up. Chelsea gave Campbell an encouraging look, telling her not to be afraid and that the stone would bear witness to her innocence. Campbell reached out, her small hand hovering over the cold surface of the orb. The room fell silent as everyone watched, including a suspicious Waldorf and the calculating principal. After a long moment, the crystal ball remained dark and unresponsive. Campbell turned back with a confused look, asking if she could go now since the ball hadn't lit up. Waldorf's face contorted in disbelief, his green eyes wide as he muttered that it was impossible. He grew frantic, suggesting that perhaps there was too little vampire blood in her body and that they needed another way to verify her identity. In his mind, he was certain that regardless of the test, Campbell had to die. Hateful, Waldorf hissed, his eyes glowing with a strange intensity. He began to channel magic, a blue and pink circle forming around him as he accused Chelsea of going too far. He prepared to lash out, but the principal's voice boomed, telling him to stop it all. The principal stepped in, grabbing Waldorf's arm and demanding to know what he was doing. The librarian grunted in frustration, his face tensed with anger. The principal then turned to Chelsea and Campbell, apologizing and stating that they should not use torture until the full truth was found. The principal put on a friendly face, promising that the college would cooperate in treating Campbell's injuries and meet any needs they had. Chelsea didn't buy the sudden change in attitude, coldly stating that there was no need for his help since they had no evidence against Campbell. She reached down and lifted the girl into her arms, declaring that she was taking her away right now. The principal watched them leave with a fake, pleasant smile. Once they were gone, his expression darkened significantly. He warned Waldorf that if he was so impulsive next time, he shouldn't blame the principal for being rude. Waldorf bowed his head, muttering his agreement. Back in the safety of their quarters, Chelsea sat Campbell down, telling her to wait while she went to get some medicine. Campbell reached out and grabbed Chelsea's sleeve, pulling her into a tight hug. She called Chelsea her big hero, saying she was the most powerful person in her mind and that she had been so scared of the fire. Chelsea felt a pang of guilt, thinking that she was no hero if she couldn't even protect the person she liked from being covered in bruises. Campbell looked up with a radiant, innocent smile, telling her sister how great it was to have her. Internally, Irina relished the moment. She found it incredibly addictive to control the emotions of a human who regarded her kind as mortal enemies. Chelsea looked down at the girl, her eyes filling with tears as she apologized for putting her in danger by sending her to the academy. She felt the physical pain manifesting, but Campbell noticed her distress and asked why she was crying. Chelsea tried to hide it, but Campbell insisted on helping her, thinking to herself that she wasn't tired of playing this game just yet. Chelsea looked at her with genuine affection, telling her that she was like family and that she would never abandon her. The word echoed in Irina's mind, a look of genuine surprise crossing her face as she realized that her little blood food actually treated her like a family member. Chelsea leaned in, her voice a soft, echoing promise of protection. "My little angel, you're my family. No matter what you do, I will never let you leave me." A genuine, radiant smile spread across Campbell's face as she threw her arms around Chelsea in a tight hug. But beneath the warmth of the embrace, a dark necessity lingered in Campbell's mind. The method to break the curse was cruel, requiring Chelsea to eventually experience a terrifying body reshaping. In her mind's eye, Chelsea could almost see the harrowing trials she was willing to face, including the sensation of being thrown from a high altitude. Falling through the dark, the terrifying feeling of hovering on the edge of life was the only way to truly transform. Campbell watched her sister with a mix of deep affection and predatory hunger, knowing that each step closer to breaking the curse brought them closer to a gluttonous feast. It was becoming unbearable to have such delicious food dangling in front of her eyes without being able to swallow it yet. The sun shone brightly over the timbered roof of the Hunter Guild as members gathered for their weekly council. At the head of the long table sat President Old Hilias, his long white beard and somber expression commanding the respect of everyone in the room. He looked up as the final member arrived and took her seat. "Chelsea, you are the latest here," he noted calmly. "Can you first tell me what useful clues you have recently?" Chelsea stepped forward, her expression professional and sharp. "I got news from the Magic Academy that a vampire sneaked in, sucked the blood of a teacher, and escaped," she reported, her eyes narrowing as she described the mutated traces on the corpse. Another hunter slammed a hand on the table, confirming the growing threat. "Yes, this happened to me too in the Enchanted Forest, where people had already been turned into mummies by strange bite marks." President Hilias covered his face with a gloved hand, the weight of the news heavy upon him. "During this time, everyone should be on alert," he warned, ending the meeting while urging them to pay attention to safety. As the others filed out, Hilias called out to her. "Chelsea, don't leave yet," he said. "You stay, I have something to say to you." He turned his back to her, looking at the portraits on the wall with a sigh. "It has been 2 years since you joined the Hunter Guild, and I still remember how hard you worked when you first joined." He recalled her early missions, where she fought with a reckless, almost suicidal intensity against the monsters. "You're very powerful, but back then, every move seemed to make you ready to die together with the vampire," he said, his voice laced with fatherly concern. Chelsea looked down, acknowledging the worry she had caused. "I couldn't bear to leave Campbell and die alone anymore, so I have become more cautious on every mission." Hilias reached into his robes and produced an ornate silver flask. "Just know you take this bottle of potion. It is a concentrated magic potion used to detect vampires, and it should find the mutant hiding in the academy for you." The night was silent as Chelsea walked through the dense woods, her boots crunching softly on the leaves. It was another full moon night, a sight that always brought back the darkest and most painful memories of her life. Her parents had died on a full moon night just like this one. She could still see the ground stained red, her father's unblinking eyes staring at her, and her mother's crushed fingers where she used to play the piano. "Whether it is a mutated vampire or an Eton, I am going to kill them all, leaving no one behind," she whispered to the cold shadows. Suddenly, a dark figure lunged from the brush, his blade flashing in the moonlight. "Are you here for the magic potion?" he hissed with a voice like grinding stones. A man in a black hood reached out with a clawed hand, his teeth bared in a snarl as he tried to snatch the flask. He grabbed Chelsea's arm, the force of his grip drawing blood as she struggled to pull away from his reach. One hand was too much to resist against his unnatural strength. Am I destined to sacrifice this magic potion? She wondered desperately as she felt herself being pinned. Just as the man moved to strike, a pale hand clamped down on his wrist with bone-shattering force. Irina stood there, her red eyes glowing with predatory amusement as she looked at Chelsea. Meeting again so soon, she purred, her presence dominating the clearing. Chelsea jumped back, her heart racing as she gripped her knife. Irina, it's you, she gasped, wondering if the vampire was an accomplice of the man in black. Irina's grip tightened on the man's arm, her nails digging into the black fabric of his sleeve. I didn't expect that. Besides me, you have many enemies, Irina said with a cruel, beautiful smile. Chelsea watched in silence, realizing with a start that the vampire princess hadn't come to kill her this time. I'm here to save you, Irina claimed, her expression shifting into a playful smirk as she toyed with the attacker. Chelsea felt a surge of unease at the thought of working with a vampire prince to capture another monster. The man in the hood snarled, his eyes wide with fear as he realized he was hopelessly outmatched by the ancient power before him. He suddenly broke free and sprinted into the darkness of the trees. Don't run, Chelsea shouted, starting to give chase as the figure vanished. Irina watched them go, her arms crossed over her chest as she mocked the man for being so indifferent as to leave without a hello. Irina caught up with Chelsea easily, her movements a blur of grace. Unfortunately, I have already investigated his identity, she revealed. He is just a poor imitator, not a real vampire, she added, leaning closer until her lips were inches from Chelsea's ear. Want to know his identity? She moved into Chelsea's personal space, her voice dropping to a seductive, dangerous whisper. How about you let me take a bite and I will tell you the answer? Chelsea shoved her away, her face flushing with anger and defiance. Bored, get out of the way, she snapped. I can get to the bottom of it without you telling me. Irina sighed, watching the hunter walk away into the brush. It is boring, and with the speed of your human investigation, we don't know how many people will die before the results are found. Just one bite from me will tell you who the murderer is, and you don't want to know, she tempted again. Chelsea hesitated, her mind warring between her hatred of vampires and the desperate need to save lives. If I collude with Irina again, what is the difference between me and the black magicians who betray humanity, she thought. Unfortunately, Irina was not in the mood for a fair trade. In this cooperation, I am prepared to buy and sell by force, the vampire declared. Before Chelsea could react, Irina lunged, her fangs sinking into the soft skin of Chelsea's neck in a sharp bite. A wave of dizziness washed over the hunter as she collapsed against the rough bark of a tree, gasping for air. I will definitely kill Irina with my own hands in the future, she swore weakly. As the lingering scent of the vampire faded, a new smell reached Chelsea's nose from where the attacker had been. Yellowed paper and an old ink smell, she muttered to herself. Librarian Waldorf. She looked down at the silver potion bottle still clutched in her gloved hand, her mind racing with the new lid. Later, she stood before the academy's principal discussing the properties of the liquid. This potion only works on vampires, magnifying their desire for blood as long as they drink it. She set the bottle on the table between them, the blue liquid shimmering under the light. Vampires hanging around the Magic Academy will definitely reveal their flaws, she said. She watched the principal's reaction closely, her eyes sharp and unforgiving. Principal, you have been talking about him. Could it be? She trailed off. She leaned over the desk, her gaze piercing his composure. Are you feeling guilty? She asked directly. In a quiet moment of reflection afterward, Chelsea felt a pang of shame for her encounter with Irina, feeling as though she had betrayed her sweet little Angel Campbell by letting the vampire get so close. Chelsea stood tall, her eyes fixed on the man across from her. Are you feeling guilty? She asked. The principal managed a strained smile, his face slick with a nervous sweat. Feeling guilty? As the principal, I am worried that your unknown potion will be harmful to ordinary people, he replied. Without a word of hesitation, Chelsea took the silver pitcher and poured the glowing blue liquid into a clear glass. She raised the vessel to her lips and drank deeply, the cool liquid sliding down her throat as the principal watched in stunned silence. Can this be proven? She asked, her gaze cold and challenging. The principal leaned forward, his fingers steepled in front of his face. Even if it is proven that it will not cause harm to ordinary people, how can we guarantee that vampires will drink it? He questioned, his eyes narrowing. At least let Campbell set an example first, he added, noting that the crystal ball used to test human blood had not reacted to her earlier. Suddenly, the heavy wooden door creaked open. Campbell stood in the doorway, her long silver hair cascading over her shoulders. I just agreed to let the whole school cooperate, she announced calmly. Chelsea turned, surprised to see her there. Campbell, she whispered. I heard it all, sister, the girl replied with a soft, knowing smile. She walked forward, took the glass from Chelsea, and drained the remaining liquid without a moment of doubt. Is it okay now? She asked, holding the empty glass as she looked at the principal. He could only stammer out a weak confirmation, though internally he was seething at her boldness, wondering how she could possibly not be a vampire. Outside, Waldorf stood before a group of students, his expression grim. Don't worry, everyone, the vampire will be caught as soon as it gets dark, he declared, receiving a chorus of agreement. Chelsea and Campbell watched from the shadows of the library before turning to leave. Most vampires are nocturnal and diurnal, and they also choose to forage at night, Chelsea noted. Let us go back first. Campbell nodded happily, her eyes bright. Okay, she chirped. Once they were in private, Chelsea handed Campbell a glass of water. Take a break first, she said softly. Campbell sat down, a serene expression on her face, but internally Irina was calculating. The drug is taking effect, she thought, feeling her body struggle against its incomplete recovery. She looked at Chelsea, her predatory instincts surfacing. I really want to take a bite and taste the smell of blood, she mused. As Chelsea leaned over, Campbell's eyes fell upon the girl's pale skin. Sister, where did these bite marks come from, she asked, her voice trembling with feigned concern. Chelsea jumped back, her hand flying to her neck. Bite marks, she stammered, her mind raced back to her encounter with Irina. Could it be Irina at that time, she thought, her heart hammering against her ribs. No, maybe I bit it accidentally, she lied quickly. Campbell's eyes welled with tears as she clutched Chelsea's dress. Sister, if one day you fall in love with someone else and decide you don't want me anymore, please tell me directly, okay? She sobbed, I don't want to be hidden. Chelsea felt a surge of guilt, pulling the girl into a tight embrace. Campbell, I am sorry, she whispered. Irina, hidden behind the persona of the innocent girl, felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. Campbell gave up everything for me, but I couldn't even be honest and made her sad for me, she thought mockingly. What a bad wife I am. Biting her as Irina was simply her most correct decision. Not only could she enjoy 2 meals with 2 different identities, but she could also appreciate Chelsea actively seeking the release the curse demanded. Chelsea, do you remember how to break the curse? She asked, her voice shifting to something more commanding. She looked up at Chelsea with a piercing gaze. Chelsea, is this how you treat your master's orders? Chelsea looked down, her face flushed with a mixture of shame and submission. Yes, she whispered. The book says that before starting the ritual, the cursed person needs to have complete trust in her partner. Campbell recited as Chelsea stood before her in a thin white slip. And use the cane to awaken the cursed person's desire, she continued. Chelsea's heart thundered in her chest. Why hasn't the cane fallen yet, she wondered, her eyes squeezed shut in anticipation. When the strike finally came, a sharp gasp escaped her lips. Aha, it hurts, she moaned. Campbell watched with a cruel, delighted smile. My sister obviously likes it very much, and even the curse is starting to loosen, she observed. Chelsea looked up, her eyes glazed and pleading. Chelsea, I like it very much, being beaten by Campbell. Please come again, she whispered, her resolve crumbling. What should I say if I want it? Campbell prompted. Please, master, beat me, Chelsea begged. Irina felt the surge of power. Very good, now the little blood food is becoming more and more popular. It will definitely be more delicious when eaten like this, she thought, raising the cane once more. Suddenly, the sound of splintering wood echoed through the room. Campbell's eyes snapped toward the window, her face contorting with rage. Who dares to ruin my enjoyment of delicious food? She hissed. Damn it, how dare you ruin my delicious meal? The window stood wide open, the curtains fluttering in the breeze. Someone had come in, Chelsea realized, her hand going to her chin in thought. Campbell, let's split up and look around to see if we've lost anything, she suggested. Campbell agreed and they began to search the room. Sister, I found it, Campbell called out from the shelves. She held up a small, clear packet filled with dark liquid. Blood bag, she said, her voice dripping with disgust. They actually put this disgusting rancid blood in my luggage, trying to convict me of being a vampire. Chelsea's eyes widened in horror. What? She cried. If we hadn't discovered it in advance, they would have found the blood bag and Campbell would be burned at the stake. Her mind immediately went to the arrogant man from earlier. It must have been Waldorf who made Campbell the scapegoat. She turned to the girl, her expression fierce with protectiveness. Campbell, just be obedient here and wait for me to come back. I will go and catch the person who framed you now. Don't worry, as long as I am here, no one can bully you. Campbell smiled sweetly. Yeah, I believe, sister, she said, as Chelsea marched out of the room, her footsteps heavy with anger. Campbell's expression shifted. Her features blurred and transformed, the silver hair darkening and the eyes turning a predatory gold. Irina had returned. The night air was thick with the scent of old books and something far more metallic. In the Magic Academy library, a figure moved through the shadows. Chelsea arrived, her senses heightened. It is the smell of fresh blood, she whispered. She watched as a man moved past the bookshelves. He is indeed the murderer who killed Professor Angus in the library. Outside, under the pale glow of the crescent moon, Waldorf collapsed to his knees, his hands trembling. I killed so many people yesterday and sucked so much blood. What should I do now? He wailed. He looked up at a looming, hooded figure standing in the darkness. Didn't you say you are highly capable? Why didn't you come to save me? If it weren't for you, how could I practice this damn black magic? He screamed. The hooded figure remained unmoved, their voice cold and mocking. Even this little thing can't be done well. Why do you still have the face to question me? I can't save you. Waldorf grabbed at the figure's cloak. Do you want to give up on me? I have done so many things for you and you treat me like this. The hooded figure simply looked down at him. With a sudden, violent movement, the figure struck out. Roll, they commanded as Waldorf was sent sprawling across the ground. He coughed violently, clutching his chest as he struggled to breathe. His hand clawed at the dirt, his desperation evident. From behind a tree, Chelsea watched the scene unfold. It turns out that he went astray, practiced black magic, and needed to suck human blood like a vampire, she realized. Her eyes hardened. People like Waldorf who practice black magic deserve to die here. But I must bring the principal to testify before he dies to clear Campbell of suspicion. Waldorf scrambled to his feet, a jagged scar running down his face as he bared his teeth in a snarl. Escape quickly, he hissed to himself. He turned to run, but stopped dead when a pair of elegant white legs stepped into his path. He looked up, his eyes widening in pure terror. Blood Prince Irina, why are you here? He stammered. Irina stood before him, her dark hair flowing and a cruel smile on her lips. Waldorf's mind raced, recognizing the terrifying presence before him. I am not wrong, even if I have only seen it once, I still recognize it, he thought, his heart failing him. Irina stepped closer, the silver chains in her hand rattling with a lethal promise. I didn't expect you to know me. It is your honor to be able to see me before you die, she purred. Waldorf fell to his knees, his voice cracking with fear. No, I don't want to die. All I kill are people. I've never killed a vampire. Please give me a way to live. Irina tilted her head, her eyes flashing. Huh, then you still want to kill vampires, she asked. No, I didn't mean that. I mean vampires are a more advanced race. He blurted out, desperate to appease her. Irina's laugh was cold as she jerked the chain, sending him crashing to the ground. Those who are greedy for life and afraid of death, no wonder even humans look down on you black magicians, she sneered. Tell me, how would the students at the Magic Academy react if they knew that their respected senior had become a dog wagging its tail in despair? Waldorf looked up at her, his face pale with confusion. Why me? I have obviously never seen you, he cried. Irina leaned down, her face inches from his. Do you still feel that you are innocent? Are you still wondering why you are the unlucky one, she asked. You are going to die anyway, so I will let you die clearly. She whispered a name that made his blood run cold. Campbell, remember. Waldorf's eyes bulged. What is your relationship with her? Could it be? He started to say. He remembered the test from earlier. The crystal ball didn't light up when Campbell was tested, he thought frantically. Irina's eyes glowed with a terrifying light. That's right, she said, I am Campbell. She threw her head back and laughed, the sound of her joy echoing through the dark woods as she reveled in her deception. I am Campbell, she said, her voice ringing out with a terrifying, melodic cheerfulness that defied the grim scene. She laughed, a bright and hollow sound that echoed through the darkness as she looked down at the broken man before her. Waldorf could hardly breathe, his face contorted in a mixture of agony and pure, unadulterated disbelief. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, his wide, green eye trembling as he stared up at the girl he had underestimated. One single thought on my part actually caused me to be killed, he realized, the absurdity of his demise flashing through his mind in his final moments. Campbell leaned in closer, her expression shifting into a serene, almost pitying smile that didn't reach her cold eyes. Well, letting you know the truth before you die is my last mercy, she whispered. She watched him with a predatory stillness, her hand resting near his throat as his life force flickered like a dying candle. Go well, she added softly as he let out a final, pathetic whimper of no. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by a sharp intake of breath as others arrived on the scene. A voice groaned, filled with the weight of exhaustion and confusion. Chelsea stood in the shadows, her brow furrowed as she looked toward the spot where the struggle had ended. Chelsea, can you guarantee that Waldorf is the murderer? Her companion asked, his voice skeptical. He is an old man from the Magic Academy. How could he be hiding behind the scenes? Chelsea pointed a firm finger toward the evidence of the struggle, her eyes hard with conviction. I saw him using black magic to fight with people, and he was even injured by black magic, she insisted. There are traces of black magic fighting here, and you can tell at a glance that what I say is true. She stepped forward, her senses heightening as she scanned the area. Right here, she murmured, her voice dropping to a low, cautious tone. I can already smell blood. A sudden jolt of alarm crossed her features, her eyes widening as the metallic scent grew overwhelming. Strange, why is the blood so heavy? She wondered aloud. She rushed toward the center of the clearing, her heart hammering against her ribs. Where is he? She shouted, looking around frantically. Her breath hitched when she finally saw him, a crumpled form lying motionless on the ground. How could this happen? She gasped, her hands trembling. When I left just now, he was obviously still alive. Her companion reached down, his fingers brushing against a piece of parchment that had been left near the body. He began to read the words aloud, his voice steady despite the grim revelation. I am Waldorf, an unforgivable black magician, the note began. It was a full confession, admitting to the murders in the library and the students at the academy, claiming he had absorbed many ordinary people for his dark arts. The news of the confession spread through the academy like wildfire. Waldorf is actually a black magician, one student whispered in shock. No wonder he kept clamoring to kill Campbell last time, it turned out he just wanted to silence her. It is terrible, another added, shaking their head. I thought he was a nice gentleman before, but I did not expect him to be this kind of person. Amidst the gossip, someone asked the obvious question of how he had died. Campbell stood nearby, her back to the crowd, her long silver hair cascading down her blue dress as she listened to the shifting tides of public opinion. Two girls approached her tentatively, their faces etched with guilt. Campbell, I am sorry, we misunderstood you earlier, the blonde one said, clutching her hands together. The girl with glasses looked down, her voice small. Don't take what I said seriously. Campbell turned slightly, her gaze neutral as she gave a small, graceful nod. I won't argue with you, she replied simply. Internally, however, the ancient soul within the girl felt only a deep-seated revulsion. Humans are so hypocritical, she thought, her amber eyes narrowing as she looked away. When I was wronged, everyone was like a snake and a scorpion, and now they act like this. She watched the clouds drifting across the blue sky, feeling a profound sense of detachment from the mortal world. I really don't understand why humans always love to do these superficial things. As they walked away from the academy grounds, Chelsea hurried to catch up, her long blonde hair catching the sunlight. Campbell, are you still angry? She asked, looking at her companion with genuine concern. Campbell puffed out her cheeks in a rare display of outward frustration. When I think about the people my sister has been protecting all this time, I feel worthless for her, she muttered. Although they are always easy to be taken advantage of, they are also simple and enthusiastic, and in them there are many ordinary happinesses. Chelsea looked at her, a soft, radiant smile spreading across her face as she reached out a hand. Such a precious and warm life, just like the feeling Campbell gave me, is worth risking my life to protect, Chelsea thought to herself. She felt a surge of protectiveness for the girl beside her eyes shining with an intensity that made Campbell pause. Campbell stared back, her expression unreadable. Yeah, I am different from those idiots, she thought, her internal monologue sharp and cynical. I just believe in more practical things. She looked at Chelsea's earnest face and felt a flicker of mocking amusement. For such an illusory thing, she fought tooth and nail to protect it. This little blood food was simply stupider than those idiots. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden commotion in the street. Please marry me, a man's voice bellowed. Chelsea and Campbell stopped, their attention drawn to a crowd gathering nearby. A man was down on one knee, holding out a ring to a young woman in a green dress. I hope to formally obtain your permission to cherish and protect you for the rest of my life, he declared. The crowd began to cheer, chanting for her to promise him. Is this a proposal? Campbell asked, her finger resting on her chin as she watched the scene with curiosity. Chelsea stood beside her face flushing a deep crimson as she watched the romantic display. Campbell looked at Chelsea's reaction and couldn't help but feel a sense of disdain. Campbell would certainly want this more practical action too, she thought, before correcting herself. Yep, only humans would need such an unrealistic proposal. Eventually, the two of them made it back to their residence. Finally arrived at home, Campbell sighed as they stepped through the door. Sister, I am so hungry, she complained, walking ahead into the house. Chelsea trailed behind her expression becoming serious and resolved. Campbell, I want to officially, she began, her voice trailing off. Campbell turned around, her eyes widening in sudden panic. She moved with supernatural speed, clapping her hands over Chelsea's mouth to silence her. Don't speak yet, she commanded, her own face heating up with a rare blush. She stared into Chelsea's bright blue eyes, her heart racing for a reason she didn't want to admit. There is no way I would agree to her request, she thought frantically. I am a blood prince, and it is okay to play house pretending games with her, but how could I really marry a human like her? Her mind flashed to a vivid, terrifying image of the two of them in white wedding gowns, standing intimately together. More importantly, if I agreed to her proposal on the wedding night, I would have to use this body to satisfy her, she worried. No matter how you look at it, it is a bit too perverted. The thought of their dresses tangling together made her pull back even further. Campbell, I would like to be more formal, Chelsea said, her voice muffled but determined as she tried to pull Campbell's hands away. That is enough, stop talking, Campbell insisted, her eyes squeezed shut. If she really said that, I don't know whether to refuse or agree. She felt Chelsea take hold of her hand, the contact sending a jolt through her. No, please let me finish, Chelsea pleaded, dropping down to one knee just like the man in the street. Campbell, excuse me, would you like? She started again. Campbell braced herself for the proposal, her face a mask of frozen shock. Will you lift the curse for me? Chelsea asked, her eyes wide and hopeful. Campbell blinked, her entire worldview tilting. What she uttered completely caught off guard. Chelsea didn't stop there, her excitement building as she spoke. Sorry, Campbell, I know you won't refuse me if I need it, but I still want to formally obtain your permission. She looked up at her with a beaming, almost manic grin. Please let me be your maid and abuse me as much as you like. Campbell stood frozen, the absurdity of the request slowly sinking in. It is so ridiculous, she thought, her hand covering her face as a laugh threatened to bubble up. I thought she loved me so much that she wanted to propose to me. I didn't expect that all she could think about was being abused by me. She let out a soft, genuine chuckle, her lips curling into a smirk. This is truly the funniest joke I have heard in years. She looked down at Chelsea, whose face was flushed with a different kind of heat now. Just looking at Campbell like this, the curse in Chelsea's body started to tremble with excitement. Campbell leaned back, tapping her chin thoughtfully. Speaking of which, it seems that I haven't played this with Chelsea yet, she mused. She turned and began to walk toward the sofa, her movements slow and deliberate. Campbell, Chelsea asked, following her with her eyes. Campbell sat down, crossing her legs and looking at Chelsea with a newfound sense of dominance. Come here, little maid, she said, her voice dripping with playful malice. You have to bark like a puppy. Chelsea dropped to her knees on the floor, her hands clasped in front of her as she looked up at her master. Little puppy barking, she repeated, her voice steady and obedient. Campbell leaned forward, her eyes glowing with a faint, predatory light. It is shameful to say that who is so obedient in front of others but is begging to be played by me in private, she thought, her smile widening. Little dog, why aren't you crawling yet? Are you waiting for me to lead you with a rope? Puppy, Campbell teased, her voice a low purr as she watched Chelsea's every move. Sister, do you hate being treated like this by me? Campbell asked, her hand moving to gently tilt Chelsea's chin up. Chelsea leaned into the touch, her breath hitching. No, not annoying, she whispered. But Campbell, Chelsea's gaze was fixed on Campbell's lips. Campbell didn't seem to have kissed me since entering the house, she thought longingly. I really want to be kissed by Campbell who looks like this. They leaned in closer, the space between them disappearing as their lips almost touched. Sister, please swear that you will always be my puppy, okay? Campbell whispered against her skin. Oh yeah, Chelsea breathed out, her eyes fluttering shut. Promise me, but the oath will be effective, Campbell warned, a small, knowing smile on her face. I promise you I will always, Chelsea began, her voice lost in the intimacy of the moment. The moment was shattered by a loud, sudden thud against the door. Chelsea, are you at home? A man's voice barked from outside. The two of them jumped apart, their faces red and startled. I'll open the door, Campbell muttered, her eyes flashing with irritation. Who is it that ruined my good deeds again? Standing at the door was a man with short, dark hair and a scar on his cheek. The president asked me to tell you new news about mutant vampires, he said. He was Michael Lynn, a well-known bounty hunter, and his eyes flicked between the two women with a smirk. Is that your fiancé? He asked, his tone suggestive. If you haven't opened the door for so long, are you doing something shameful and disgusting inside? Michelin leaned against the doorway with a sneer that made his scars twitch. His voice dripping with mock concern as he remarked that Chelsea must be truly starving if she was willing to lay her hands on such a little girl. Chelsea did not back down, her eyes flashing with irritation as she demanded to know exactly what he thought he was doing there. He let out a sharp, derisive laugh, asking if she was so terrified of being discovered that she had actually forced herself to fall in love with a mere child. Chelsea stepped into his space, her posture rigid and defensive as she told him to show some respect because Campbell was her fiancé. Michelin finally dropped the act, his expression turning cold as he relayed a message from the president, informing her that the recent incidents were not caused by mutated vampires but by black magicians. As he turned to leave, he threw a venomous glance over his shoulder, calling her a proud bitch and promising that he would eventually make her kneel and apologize to him. Once the heavy door was shut, the silver-haired girl looked up with an innocent, wide-eyed expression, softly asking her sister who that man had been. Chelsea looked down at her with a pained expression, her heart sinking as she realized the girl had likely heard every insult, and she asked if she had been listening the whole time. She gently placed a hand on Campbell's head, telling her not to be angry because Michelin was simply an unimportant person within the guild. Campbell looked up at her with a mix of worry and resolve, suddenly suggesting that they should go to the Hunter Guild together to make their relationship public so everyone would know they were a loving couple. Chelsea felt her breath hitch, the proposal catching her completely off guard as she stared at the girl in shock. She leaned down, her forehead almost touching Campbell's, but she whispered that she could not make it public because she feared the scandal would destroy the girl's reputation. Chelsea reminded her that while she was a noble lady, Chelsea was just a vampire hunter whose family had been ruined long ago. She worried that if their identities were made public, Campbell might one day regret the engagement and want to leave her for someone else. Campbell's eyes darkened, her voice taking on a chilling edge as she asked if Chelsea thought her love was just a childish affair of the ignorant. She turned her back to the hunter, her silhouette framed by dark, thorny roses as she lamented that the traces of her existence might one day become a memory that made Chelsea sick. She called Chelsea a coward, accusing her of being the type of person who was too afraid to even admit when she liked someone. Reaching up, Campbell gripped Chelsea's face firmly, staring directly into her eyes and demanding to know who she was. Chelsea, completely mesmerized by the intensity in the girl's gaze, whispered that she was her master. Campbell smiled, though her inner thoughts were far more sinister as she imagined the excitement of the real Campbell appearing and exposing Chelsea as a fraud. She pulled Chelsea into a firm embrace, declaring that since they would never leave each other, they should go and make their relationship public to everyone. Chelsea hesitated, trying to suggest that there might be other ways to handle the situation that didn't involve such a drastic step. Campbell cut her off, urging her to break the curse and arguing that the insults of the crowd would actually help loosen its hold on her. They soon arrived at the Hunter Guild, where the heavy wooden gates stood open to the morning light. A crowd of hunters had already gathered in the courtyard, whispering among themselves and wondering who had called such an urgent meeting. Michelin stood among them, his eyes bulging in shock as he saw Chelsea walking toward the stairs while holding the young girl's hand. He fumed silently, wondering how she dared to show her face in public with that child as Chelsea called for the crowd to be quiet. Standing before the assembly, Chelsea announced that the person standing next to her was her fiancé, Campbell. The crowd erupted in fury, with men shouting that Chelsea was a disgrace to the Uester family and a despicable pervert for attacking a young child. Chelsea stood still, the weight of their words hitting her like physical blows as she realized that even though she had expected this, the reality of it still hurt. She could feel the curse reacting, its dark influence striking again as her vision blurred. A strange sensation washed over her, and she felt as though she could no longer resist the humiliation, even finding herself craving more of it. The crowd continued their assault, screaming that she was a toad trying to eat swan meat. They labeled her a shameless slut and told her to get out of the guild immediately. Campbell watched Chelsea closely, noticing the change in her demeanor and asking if the curse had been altered. When Chelsea confirmed that it had, the girl's face lit up with a joyful, almost predatory smile. Michelin stepped forward, his face red with anger as he shouted that Chelsea was bringing shame to her dead parents by acting this way. He turned his attention to Campbell, telling the girl she had been lied to and that a noble lady should never associate with people like Chelsea. He was convinced that Chelsea would not be able to bear the abuse, smugly thinking to himself that she had brought all of this upon herself. High above them in the president's office, an elderly man with a long white beard looked up from his desk, his nose wrinkling as he detected the scent of a high-level vampire. He stood up, sensing the danger as the chaos in the courtyard intensified. Suddenly, a man from the crowd lunged at Chelsea with a massive axe, screaming for the pervert to go to hell. Before the blade could find its mark, Chelsea moved with a blur of speed, catching the axe by its handle and staring the man down with a cold, terrifying intensity. She delivered a powerful kick that sent him crashing to the ground, telling him that if he couldn't learn how to speak properly, she would teach him how to shut up. Her hand tightened on the weapon as she demanded an apology. The man groaned, refusing at first and insisting that he hadn't said anything wrong. He looked toward the rest of the guild, asking why he should be the only one to apologize when everyone else had been scolding her too. Chelsea raised the axe high, her aura flaring with a dark, suffocating power as she gave him one last chance to apologize or face the consequences. Terrified, the man finally broke, begging for mercy and apologizing profusely as Chelsea warned him that next time, she would cut off his tongue. She stood there, her eyes shimmering with a mix of defiance and exhaustion as the crowd fell into a stunned silence. The president stood tall, his long white beard a stark contrast against his dark robes as he looked down at the young hunter. "Michelin, why would you speak so excessively?" he asked, his voice echoing with a weight of authority that demanded silence. "You are all the strongest hunters in the guild and you are teammates." Michelin bowed his head, his face shadowed with a mixture of shame and frustration as he listened to the reprimand. He offered a quiet, respectful response, acknowledging the elder's words with a simple, "Yes, President." Standing nearby, Irina watched the exchange through the eyes of her human disguise, Campbell. Her mind was a whirlwind of suspicion as she scanned the room. Of all the people present, she was the only one I did not know and who might have leaked the aura of a high-level vampire. She looked down at her own reflection, her large blue eyes appearing innocent and wide. But she is just a child, she mused, wondering how Chelsea could possibly fail to notice her true nature if she were truly a threat. If she was really a vampire, how could Chelsea not notice it, she thought, a flicker of doubt crossing her mind. Could it be that I was mistaken? The tension in the room was shattered when a scout burst through the doors, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "President, this is not good," he cried out, stumbling into the center of the hall. He doubled over, clutching his knees as he delivered the grim news. "I just received news that more than 10 innocent humans were killed by vampires in the magic forest one after another." The president's expression hardened instantly. "Now all hunters, please prepare your weapons and set off for the enchanted forest. Be ready to kill the vampire at any time if you encounter one." The hunters erupted in a chorus of agreement, their voices rising in a unified shout. "Yes," they cried, their fists raised in the air. Chelsea stood among them, her blonde hair catching the light as her gaze narrowed with lethal intent. Campbell watched her closely, her heart sinking as she realized the implications. Want to kill vampires? Then Chelsea is leaving, she thought, her brow furrowed with a mix of sadness and calculation. That night outside their home, the air was thick with the scent of evening blossoms. Campbell clung to Chelsea's arm, her voice small and pleading. "Sister, we always spend less time together and more time apart. Can you not go out today?" She looked up with shimmering eyes, her thoughts far more primal than her appearance suggested. "Why does little blood food just want to run out? I am so hungry," she thought. Chelsea placed a gentle hand on Campbell's shoulder, her expression softening despite her resolve. "Campbell, I am sorry. Compared to staying with you at home, I have more important things to do. Vampires have been around recently. You should stay at home and do not go out. You must pay attention to safety." Campbell pouted, her eyes fixed on Chelsea's lips. "Then can you kiss me? Just treat it as a parting gift." Chelsea hesitated for only a moment before leaning in. "Of course you can, then you must wait at home." They shared a tender embrace beneath the boughs of a flowering tree, the world around them fading into the background. When they finally pulled apart, Chelsea's cheeks were flushed a brilliant crimson. "Sister, you clearly know what I want, this is it," Campbell whispered, a playful glint in her eyes. After kissing so many times, why does sister still blush? Chelsea turned away, waving a hand as she hurried toward the gates. "I am leaving, Campbell. Go to bed early. Good night." Campbell watched her run away, her sweet smile lingering until Chelsea was out of sight. Then the warmth vanished from her face. Her eyes began to glow with a fierce, amber light, her pupils slitting like those of a predator. "Those new vampires are really ignorant and always disturb me from enjoying my blood food," she hissed to the empty night. "Chelsea's full attention should be on me. Everyone who steals my blood food should die." Deep within the dark forest, a rogue vampire laughed as he recounted his kills to his companions. "I have not felt this happy for a long time. Do you know how much blood I sucked today? 5 people, a whole 5 people." He leaned back, his thirst far from quenched. "I want to drink it all in one go. Go grab a few more humans." A sudden sound in the brush made him spin around, his fangs bared. Who is there?" he barked, his eyes darting through the shadows. A woman stepped into the moonlight, her long dark hair flowing behind her and her eyes cold and unforgiving. The rogue's bravado vanished instantly, replaced by a paralyzing terror. You are the ancestor, Irina." He gasped, the name a death sentence on his lips. "Ancestor," he stammered, falling to his knees. Irina raised a hand, and a purple aura erupted from her fingertips, lifting the rogue and his friends into the air as if they were nothing more than dolls. "Did you kill all these people?" she asked, her voice like grinding ice. The vampire clawed at his throat, desperate for air. Ancestor, I know I was wrong. Please do not be angry. Please spare me this time. From now on, I will only drink blood bags and will never hurt humans again. Irina's smile was devoid of any mercy. If you do something wrong, you will be punished. There is no use in verbally admitting your mistake. She stepped closer, the moonlight framing her like a dark goddess. Humans and vampires have signed a peace contract for 100 years, but because you broke the rules, the hunters attacked again. That being the case, I can only give you a little punishment. The rogue pressed his hands together in a frantic prayer. No, Ancestor Irina, we really know we were wrong. Please spare us this time. She ignored his pleas, her mind drifting back to the blonde hunter she had left behind. Chelsea, she whispered, her gaze distant and longing. She looked down at the pathetic creatures at her feet with utter disdain. The vampires, seeing a momentary lapse in her focus, scrambled to their feet. Thank you for not killing. We will definitely obey your orders. We will never kill humans again. They bowed low, their voices trembling. Thank you, Ancestor, we will leave first. They turned and bolted into the darkness, but Irina's eyes followed them with a predatory glint. I am not ready to let you go, she murmured. A short time later, Chelsea arrived at the scene with her fellow hunters, finding the rogues incapacitated and broken. Chelsea, look, we are so lucky that we caught a big mistake right away, her companion exclaimed. We should be able to get a lot of rewards if we bring these 3 vampires back. Chelsea looked at the fallen monsters, a sense of unease gnawing at her. But this is unavoidable, she said quietly, her eyes reflecting the cold moonlight. Hidden in the shadows, Irina watched them, a satisfied smirk on her lips. What a coincidence, right? Little Blood Food has received the reward and should be able to stay with me obediently. The memory of the forest seemed to blur into a different reality. Chelsea walked through the halls of a school, her bag slung over her shoulder as she tried to ignore the constant pestering. Students, please pay attention to safety on the way home from school, a voice announced over the intercom. Chelsea checked her phone, seeing a message from Irina demanding she wait. It is her again. It keeps harassing Chelsea for no reason, she muttered. I have to go back and walk Bebe quickly. I have to leave quickly. Hey, Chelsea, Irina called out, leaning against a railing in her school uniform, her arms crossed. Did I not ask you to wait for me? Chelsea didn't slow down, her expression one of mild annoyance. Never, do not follow me, she shouted back. Later, as the sun began to set, Chelsea walked her large white dog through the park. Bebe walked slowly, she coaxed, her smile returning as she enjoyed the peace. Irina followed at a distance, disguised behind sunglasses and a hat, watching with a mix of jealousy and adoration. Wow, what a cute puppy, a passerby remarked. Is it called Bebe? Irina sighed, her voice a whisper. Yes, do you like puppies too? The scene shifted back to the guild where the president was addressing a crowd of hunters. Chelsea is a good role model for everyone. Her abilities are obvious to all, and this time she was the first to fire the first shot of mankind's counterattack. He turned to her with a proud smile. Chelsea, is there anything you want to say to everyone? Chelsea remained silent, her eyes downcast as the weight of the praise felt like lead. Chelsea, the president prompted, his brow arching. She looked up, her voice steady but questioning. Yes, President, I suddenly remembered a question. Tell me who killed those vampires? The person who killed the vampires only knew how to kill vampires. But what about indiscriminate killing? The president turned his back to her, his long hair cascading down his robes. What about indiscriminate killing? He echoed, his tone dismissive. Chelsea stood in the courtyard, the wind whipping her skirt as she grappled with the morality of their war. In another part of the forest, a pair of elegant high heels stepped through the lush grass. Campbell stood in a clearing, looking small and vulnerable as a group of high-ranking vampires emerged from the trees. Stop, the leader commanded, a woman with deep red hair and an ornate fan. Are you Campbell? She looked Campbell over with a hungry gaze. Boss, her blood looks like it is easy to suck, sizzle, one of her subordinates hissed. Campbell let out a soft, mocking laugh. Funny, I have lived for hundreds of years and no one has ever touched my blood. I am so scared, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. The vampire leader's eyes narrowed. If you're afraid of being eaten by me, just tell me who you are. Why did you come out of the dark forest right after my vampire died? Do you know who killed the vampire? Campbell tilted her head, her silver hair shimmering. Who are you and why should I tell you? The subordinates snarled, their fangs fully extended. Boss, she is really tired of living as a human, eat her. The red-haired leader snapped her fan shut, her eyes glowing with a feral light. Human beings who do not know good and evil, since you do not say, I can only teach you to speak nicely. She lunged forward, her mouth opening to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. A gunshot thundered through the trees, a silver bullet grazing the vampire's cheek. Who, she screamed, spinning around as blood trickled down her face. Chelsea burst into the clearing, her pistol raised and her eyes burning with rage. The vampire is not far ahead, everyone should follow him. Go to hell, she shouted, pulling the trigger again. The magic potion bullet struck one of the vampires, sending him crashing to the ground. The leader hissed in frustration. No, it is a magic potion specially used to deal with vampires. Let us go. The monsters vanished into the mist just as the rest of the hunters arrived. Go, Michelin shouted, leading the pursuit. Chelsea ignored them, her entire focus on the girl trembling in the grass. Chelsea, Campbell cried out, her eyes wide with feigned terror. Chelsea dropped to her knees, pulling Campbell into a tight embrace. Are you injured anywhere? No, I am sorry, Campbell, I did not protect you in time. Chelsea's heart ached with a physical intensity. When I think that Campbell might leave me because I failed to protect her, my heart is as sharp as a knife, she thought, her eyes welling with tears. The pain is so addictive. Campbell looked up at her, a strange light in her eyes. Sister, are you excited? I am really tortured by a curse. I am obsessed with this heartache regardless of the occasion. Campbell leaned in closer, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. Sister, do you still remember the method to break the curse introduced in that book? She pulled a small, ancient-looking volume from her robes. To break the curse, you must jump from a high altitude and experience the pain of being reborn before you can proceed to the next step, the text read. Campbell's lips brushed against Chelsea's ear. Does your sister feel that now is a good opportunity? Chelsea stared at her in shock, the words hanging between them like a challenge. Nearby, Michelin watched them, scratching his head in confusion. I almost caught him, what a shame, he muttered, though his eyes were fixed on the two women. Campbell suddenly shoved Chelsea away, her face a mask of dramatic anger. You big liar, I never want to see you again. She stood up, pointing a finger at the stunned hunter. Did you not say you could protect me? But I am in great danger with you, you do not love me at all. Chelsea reached out, her voice desperate. I am sorry, do not be angry, okay? Campbell's expression didn't soften. Unless you jump off the Orost castle and prove your determination to love me, I will no longer believe you. The other hunters watched from the shadows, whispering among themselves. They were deeply in love before, but what is going on now? I just said that these two will not last long. Chelsea definitely cannot jump. Michelin watched with a predatory smile, his eyes fixed on Campbell. If Chelsea does not jump, does it not prove that she does not love Miss Campbell that much? When Miss Campbell is heartbroken, I will go up to comfort her. If Campbell can accept a female bounty hunter as her fiancée, she must be able to accept me. After all, I am also a man. High atop the stone battlements of Orost Castle, the wind whipped through the air, carrying the weight of a desperate ultimatum. Campbell stood precariously near the edge, her voice trembling with a mix of feigned hurt and genuine testing as she declared that it was far too dangerous for her to remain by Chelsea's side when there was no proof of love between them. Chelsea stood frozen for a moment, her boots heavy on the stone as she stared at the woman she was sworn to protect, yet felt so inexplicably tied to. She looked into Campbell's eyes, seeing the flicker of doubt that mirrored her own internal chaos. Nearby, Michelin and the other hunters watched with sneering expressions, mocking Chelsea and questioning if she actually cared for the aristocratic lady or if she was simply clinging to her for power. Campbell felt a pang of sorrow, her silver hair catching the light as she wondered if Chelsea truly lacked the courage to prove herself. But Chelsea's resolve hardened, her hand moving to her chest as she looked directly at the woman she loved. I would jump off a cliff for you, Chelsea declared, her voice ringing out with a certainty that silenced the mockers. Without a second of hesitation, she stepped off the ledge, her body plunging into the open air as Campbell cried out in horror. As she fell, the world became a blur of blue sky and gray stone, and Chelsea felt the curse within her body stir with an excitement she had never felt before. She closed her eyes, the fear of impending death causing her heart to race, yet she felt a strange peace knowing she hadn't let Campbell down. Suddenly, a strange sensation washed over her, and she opened her eyes in surprise, wondering if some unseen magic was intervening to save her. She hit the ground with a heavy thud, the impact softened by a mysterious force that left her gasping for breath. Campbell came sprinting across the courtyard, her face pale with terror as she reached out for the fallen hunter. She pulled Chelsea into her arms, her voice thick with guilt as she begged for forgiveness for forcing such a dangerous stunt. Chelsea tried to steady herself, though her legs were covered in painful, weeping scratches from the descent. Even as she winced, she managed a weak smile, trying to comfort her frantic fiancé despite her own injuries. Deep within her mind, the persona of Irina watched the display with a cynical detachment, thinking humans were truly the most foolish creatures for falling for such obvious lies. Yet as she looked at Chelsea's battered form, a flicker of something genuine pierced through her cold heart. She had lived thousands of years and never known a trust this absolute, leaving her to wonder if this feeling was real or just another human deception. Michelin arrived moments later, breathless and stunned by the scene of the two women clinging to one another. Chelsea tried to pull away, insisting she could walk, but her legs buckled beneath her. Michelin stepped forward, his tone gruff as he warned them that they needed to leave before dark, lest they be eaten as snacks by the vampire princess Irina. Both Chelsea and Campbell looked up at him with expressions of sheer confusion, given the irony of his warning. Michelin huffed, his pride wounded by their lack of immediate gratitude, and he turned to stomp away in a fit of pique. Despite his attitude, he eventually helped carry Chelsea back inside, laying her gently onto a plush sofa to recover. I am leaving now, so take care of her yourself, Michelin muttered, waving a hand dismissively as he headed for the door. He paused for a moment, his face softening into a smirk as he told himself he wasn't doing this out of kindness, but simply because it wasn't in his character to refuse a rescue. As the door clicked shut, he couldn't help but feel a swell of self-satisfaction, convinced he was a truly great and noble man for his deeds. Sometime later, the atmosphere in the room turned domestic as Campbell appeared wearing a frilly apron, holding a spatula aloft with a bright, forced cheerfulness. She presented a plate of food to Chelsea, though the sausages and mushrooms were charred black and surrounded by a suspicious purple aura. Chelsea stared at the burnt offering, her stomach turning as she politely declined, claiming she wasn't hungry just yet. Campbell's expression fell slightly, though she accepted the rejection with a small nod. Her thoughts flashed back to a heated meeting at the Hunter Guild, where she had stood before the council with a knife driven into the table to emphasize her point. The room had been filled with dissent, as an older councilman argued that the vampire hunts should be called off since no humans had died recently. Chelsea had erupted in anger, shouting that such a peace was only temporary and that they had to take down the vampire eaten to ensure lasting safety. The older man had shrunk back, sweating under the intensity of her gaze. He reminded her of a promise made long ago, his voice trembling as he looked toward the head of the table. President Lay, a man with a long white beard and a stoic expression, looked at Chelsea with weary eyes. He spoke of Eaton as if he were a demon, a monster that would silence entire families if provoked. Lay sighed, admitting that the announcement was perhaps the biggest mistake of his life, because of the countless lives lost in the pursuit of that goal. Other guild members joined in the mockery, laughing that a sealed cripple like Chelsea could never kill a vampire prince on her own. The insults were cut short when Michelin slammed his fist onto the table, the wood groaning under the force of his strike. He sat back with a confident smirk, looking at the cowards around the room. He ridiculed them for their timidity, pointing out that they were only trying to stop Chelsea because they were too afraid to act themselves. Michelin leaned forward, his eyes flashing as he declared his full support for Chelsea's mission. President Lay nodded slowly, acknowledging that it was indeed time for the Hunter Guild to be led by someone with more courage than the old men currently in charge. The room fell silent as the weight of the agreement settled, leaving the detractors stunned and speechless. After the meeting adjourned, Chelsea found Michelin in the hallway and offered him a sincere smile, thanking him for his support. Michelin looked away, his expression turning competitive as he told her not to get the wrong idea. He explained that he also wanted to kill Eaton and become president, and he warned her not to let her guard down because he was still her rival. When Chelsea finally returned home that evening, she found Campbell waiting for her on the sofa, clutching a pillow with a worried pout. Chelsea sat beside her, explaining that she had moved an agreement within the guild and that she could become the next president if she successfully killed Eaton. At the mention of the name, the persona of Irina flared to life within Campbell's eyes, her gaze turning sharp and deadly as she realized the man Chelsea hunted was the very same blood count who had betrayed her so long ago. Irina's eyes narrowed as the memory of the betrayal resurfaced. Was it really the blood count, Eaton, who had dared to betray her? The memory was bitter, a jagged shard of the past where he had colluded with Lina to strike at her on the very day of her father's birthday. Irina could almost see him as he was then, a man who believed himself clever enough to destroy her. Eaton had stood there with his smug grin, his hands wrapped in heavy chains as if he were a prisoner of his own ambition. Because her father had sealed her away before she could settle the score, Eaton had been allowed to live freely for nearly 100 years, an advantage he never should have had. Irina watched the blonde woman carefully, her strength still recovering. She knew Chelsea wanted to attack Eaton, and while she could not guarantee the Count would die, she could at least ensure Chelsea survived. Chelsea's voice was firm as she clutched the fabric of her skirt, declaring that she must kill Eaton or she would be forced to quit the Hunter Guild. Irina looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and curiosity at the girl's intensity. Chelsea's expression softened into a sad smile as she spoke of the innocent people Eaton had slaughtered, including her own parents. She felt the weight of their sacrifice, knowing they had died to protect her, yet she felt unworthy of the life they had given her. Memories of being cast out as a disaster and a burden to her family flashed through her mind. She remembered the cold words of her relatives telling her to roll as far away as she could. She had never lived up to their expectations, feeling like nothing more than an ordinary person who had lost her purpose. To her, this world was a cage she could only escape by proving her worth. "I am a valuable person," Chelsea whispered to herself, her eyes burning with a desperate need for revenge. Irina found the situation almost laughable. How dare this human talk about annihilating the vampire clan right in front of its prince? The irony was thick, yet a part of Irina was genuinely curious to see the look on Chelsea's face when she finally realized who was sitting in the prince's seat. But a sudden pang of worry struck her. If Chelsea discovered the truth, she would lose her favorite little source of blood. The thought of no longer being able to play these games with her was surprisingly bothersome. As they moved through the dark woods, Chelsea urged her companion to hurry, sensing they were close. Irina watched her, a dark thought crossing her mind. "I will reward you," she thought, her eyes glowing with a predatory light. She leaned in close to Chelsea, her voice a low murmur as she told the girl to close her eyes. They were interrupted by a sudden rustle in the bushes. Chelsea spun around, her hand reaching for her weapon. "Who is there?" she demanded. The bushes rustled violently, and Chelsea feared another vampire was out for blood. She took off running, ignoring the chain that rattled behind her as she pursued the intruder. Irina watched her go, annoyed that someone had dared to interrupt her game. Chelsea cornered a terrified vampire woman against a tree, her dagger held tight. But a shadow fell over them both. A tall man with long, dark hair and pointed ears stepped out of the darkness, a cruel smirk on his face as he praised Chelsea's courage. He mocked her for trying to kill his people right in front of him. Chelsea's breath hitched as she looked at him, her hand trembling slightly. "Are you eaten?" she asked. The man stepped forward, his polished shoes crunching on the grass. He looked her up and down as if she were nothing but a snack delivered to his door, inviting her to let him have a taste. He moved with a terrifying grace, his hand resting casually near his waist as he loomed over her. Chelsea's gaze hardened. This was the monster who had killed her parents. Today, she would stand up for them and everyone else who had died by his hand. With a scream of revenge, she lunged forward, her dagger aimed straight for his heart. Eaton did not even flinch, his eyes mocking her weak force as he asked if that was all she could do. But Chelsea had a trick of her own. A bright blue magic circle flared to life on the palm of her hand. Eaton's eyes widened in shock, a gasp escaping his lips as the magical energy surged. He clutched at his throat, his arrogance replaced by sudden pain. Eaton tried to compose himself, claiming a single magic circle would not be enough to defeat him. However, a streak of dark purple energy suddenly lunged forward, sinking deep into the wound on his chest. He coughed up blood, his eyes bulging as he collapsed to his knees, unable to understand how this was happening. The purple flames danced in the air, a manifestation of a power far greater than Chelsea's. From the shadows, Irina's hand reached out, controlling the dark magic. She appeared in her true, regal form, her dark hair flowing around her as she looked down at the traitor. She would not let him be arrogant any longer, and with Chelsea's help, it was time for him to die. "Say goodbye to your life, Eaton," she whispered with a cold smile. Terrified, Eaton realized Irina had been resurrected. As the black magic surged toward him, he did not hesitate to grab the female vampire who had been standing nearby. The dark energy struck her instead, her body dissolving into purple sparks. The woman screamed for her Lord Count to be careful, but it was too late for her. Eaton's hand gripped her shoulder tightly as he used her as a shield. The poor creature disintegrated, begging for mercy that would never come. Eaton's face twisted with rage as he turned his sights back on the human girl who had started this. "You managed to piss me off, so die," he hissed. His hand lashed out, his sharp claws raking across Chelsea's neck. Irina's eyes went wide with horror as she screamed Chelsea's name. Blood sprayed across Chelsea's white shirt, and the girl stared blankly as she felt her life slipping away. "No, I cannot die yet," Chelsea thought, her vision blurring as she reached out toward a fading light. Irina rushed toward her, her voice filled with desperation. In the haze of her dying mind, Chelsea saw a vision of her mother. "Mom, are you here to pick me up?" she whispered. Her eyes began to flutter shut, the light of the world fading. Irina knelt over her hands glowing with a dark, forbidden power as she tried to pull Chelsea back from the brink. She knew that using black magic would leave permanent traces on the girl's body, haunting her with side effects for the rest of her life. But she could not let her go. Eaton watched from a distance, his face pale with fear as he realized the princess had truly returned. He knew he had to report this immediately and fled into the night. Chelsea's eyes snapped open, a sharp gasp escaping her throat as she realized she was still alive. She looked around, confused, until she saw the figure of Eaton nearby. Someone was helping her, she realized, but she did not care who it was. She stood up, her boots crunching on the ground as she approached the wounded Count. With a manic laugh, she lunged at him one last time, driving her blade into his chest. "Eaton, I want you to die," she screamed, her face contorted with a joy that bordered on madness. As she stood over him, she felt a strange surge of power, wondering why her magic felt so much stronger after her brush with death. She looked down at her bloody hands, a chilling smile spreading across her face. "Dad, Mom, I finally killed Eaton, I avenged you," she laughed, her mind fracturing under the weight of the revenge and the black magic. Irina watched from the shadows, her expression grim as she realized the side effects of the spell had already taken hold. The scene shifted to a memory of a younger Irina, smiling brightly as she promised her parents she would bring her fiancé, Chelsea, back safely. She had kept her promise to keep her alive, but the cost was far higher than she had imagined. Chelsea thought back to the time she was a countess, a daughter who made her family proud and lived a life of grace. She remembered being stuffed into the darkness of a closet, watching through a narrow crack as her parents' lives were taken away by the monsters in the night. Since that day, she had replaced her musical instruments with cold, sharp weapons, driven by a singular need for vengeance. The young noblewoman had transformed into a cold, determined hunter, shedding her former life to become a shadow in the night. Under the pale glow of the moon, she knelt over the fallen body of Eaton, her hands gripping a dagger as the finality of her mission set in. She whispered to the darkness that she had finally avenged her father, her mother, and their entire family line. A haunting, blood-stained smile touched her lips as the weight of her deed settled in, a mixture of triumph and lingering sorrow. From the shadows, Irina watched with a predatory gleam, noting that the blood on Chelsea would accelerate the catalytic side effects, potentially turning the hunter into a low-level vampire. Nearby, searchers wandered through the woods, confused because they were certain Eaton had been right there just moments before. Irina's pointed ear twitched as she realized she had found exactly what she was looking for in the chaos. The men hurried toward the sound of movement, calling out for others to follow them into the brush. One of the men grabbed Chelsea's shoulders, hailing her as a hero for finally ending Eaton's life and bringing justice to their ranks. They showered her with congratulations, while Chelsea looked on with a dazed expression, her mind already turning toward a future where she would lead as president and protect everyone from the vampire threat. Her gaze sharpened as she focused on the immense responsibility now resting on her shoulders. The memory faded as her vision blurred, returning her to the present moment. A young girl in a blue dress rushed to the door, crying out in alarm at the sight of Chelsea's injuries and asking how she had become so hurt. Chelsea reached out to comfort her expression softening despite the grime and blood of battle. A servant moved past them, excusing herself to fetch hot water to clean the wounds and tend to the hunter's needs. The onlookers whispered about how much the girl loved her, but Irina, hidden behind the mask of a devoted companion, took pride in how her acting skills were deceiving them all. A man in a dark cloak watched the exchange with crossed arms and a skeptical brow, his eyes narrow and suspicious. He turned to Chelsea and asked if she had ever truly doubted the woman who claimed to be her fiancé. The girl in blue leaned in close, telling Chelsea to be good while she began to wipe the blood away with a gentle touch. Irina's eyes darkened with hunger as she thought of the delicious, mana-rich blood she was about to taste under the guise of care. She leaned down, her lips meeting Chelsea's skin in a gesture that looked like an intimate kiss but felt like a predator's strike. Chelsea felt the sharp sting and realized with a jolt that she was being fed upon once again, questioning if the woman before her was even human. Outside, the real Campbell Feather store approached the wooden house, following the directions she had been given by the locals. She stopped at the window, her heart sinking as she saw Chelsea embracing another woman who looked exactly like her. Irina pulled back with a flush of mock enthusiasm, wondering how the real Campbell would react to seeing her fiancé with a fake version of herself. Chelsea looked dazed, her eyes clouded and her breath hitching as the vampire's influence took hold. The butler, Mike, was ready to storm in and demand an apology for the deception, but Campbell held him back. She wanted to hear the truth from Chelsea's own lips before making any rash decisions about their future. Irina pulled away, untying the knot of Chelsea's collar and claiming she was tired, secretly satisfied with the blood she had stolen. Morning light broke over the garden the next day, casting long shadows across the path. Chelsea prepared to leave for the Hunters Guild to handle the president's affairs, telling the girl in blue to stay safe at home. As the door closed, she found herself face to face with a stranger in a regal pink gown. The woman introduced herself with quiet dignity as Campbell Feather Store, the true bearer of that name. As they walked together through the town, the real Campbell noted that Chelsea seemed to have already suspected she was being replaced by an imposter. Chelsea offered a soft apology, but Campbell reminded her that their engagement had never officially been terminated despite the years apart. She asked with a steady voice if she should be angry with Chelsea or the woman who had stolen her identity. Chelsea looked down, admitting that it had taken her far too long to confirm the truth of who was standing beside her. When asked if she had actually fallen in love with the imposter, Chelsea confessed that she might have been losing her heart to the wrong person entirely. Campbell clenched her hand, stating that the Astor clan valued love and righteousness above all else, and she would allow Chelsea to make a choice. Chelsea remained silent, her heart torn between the duty she owed to her family's legacy and the strange feelings she had developed. Images of her intimate moments with the fake Campbell flashed through her mind, haunting her with their intensity. She took a deep breath, her face set with a new and chilling purpose. Chelsea announced that she would continue her engagement with the real Campbell, provided she was allowed to uncover the imposter's true identity first. She looked ahead with a cold, piercing gaze, wondering exactly who the liar was that had managed to deceive her for so long. The moon hung like a silver sickle in the dark sky, casting long, eerie shadows through the dense canopy of the forest. Chelsea walked through the undergrowth, her mind swirling with a growing sense of betrayal as she wondered who the liar was that had deceived her for so long. Her family was already in decline, yet the Feather Astor family had still sent Campbell Feather to fulfill the engagement, a gesture that now felt like a trap. She looked down, her heart heavy with the realization that she didn't have the face to lie to the real Campbell anymore, wondering what kind of monster she had actually fallen in love with. She felt as though the beautiful bubbles of her sweet life were popping one by one, leaving her with a reality she didn't know how to handle. A sudden rustle in the trees made her freeze. She ducked behind a thick trunk, her breath hitching in her throat as she whispered a question to the shadows about what the sound could be. A sharp, pained cry echoed through the clearing as a massive dark wolf was violently struck down. Chelsea peeked out, her eyes widening in sheer terror as she saw the silver-haired girl standing over the beast. "Campbell," she whispered, her voice trembling. The girl turned toward her, a serene and terrifyingly beautiful smile playing on her lips even as blood stained her hands. Chelsea covered her mouth, her body shaking with the shock of seeing the supposed angel reveal such a monstrous side. Far away, lightning tore through the blackened clouds above a towering, Gothic castle as the cry went out to meet Princess Irina. Inside the lavish, dimly lit halls, vampires dressed in formal black attire dropped to their knees, trembling as they welcomed their lady back. One of the elders looked up in awe, noting that even after all this time, she remained as young and radiant as the day she was sealed. Irina stood before them in her true form, her dark hair cascading over a deep red gown adorned with pearls. She looked down at them with a chilling smirk, calling them a bunch of rubbish who had forgotten who they belonged to. She demanded to know how many of them still remembered the peace contract after 100 years of her absence, Of course I remember, one of them stammered, sweating under her gaze. A woman in a tan dress clasped her hands in prayer, begging for mercy and claiming she had been wrong. They whispered among themselves, realizing that Lord Eaton had been killed by Irina and that her power had recovered far more than they anticipated. We have all been deceived, Lady Irina. A young man cried out, reaching a hand toward her in desperation as he swore they would never dare to betray her again. Irina turned away, her expression one of utter boredom as she muttered that they were really noisy. She thought to herself that if she had more capable people around her, she wouldn't keep any of these cowards alive. She looked back over her shoulder, warning them that if any vampire dared to break the peace contract again, she would kill them without mercy. We promised to take good care of the vampires, they replied in unison, bowing their heads to the floor. Irina smiled, thinking that the town should be peaceful for a while, enough for her little bloody food to calm down. She gazed out at the horizon, her eyes gleaming with a possessive light as she decided she would stay with Chelsea forever. Back at the manor, Irina watched Chelsea from the shadows, her heart racing with excitement. Chelsea stood by the window, her face pale and her eyes vacant. She couldn't reconcile the two versions of the girl she knew, wondering how the little angel she cared for could be Irina, the one who had killed countless people. She remembered how she used to talk nonsense about wanting to annihilate the vampires in front of her, feeling like a total joke. She grabbed her head in frustration, her mind fracturing under the weight of her own ignorance. I am so stupid, she groaned, sinking toward the floor. She stared at her trembling hands, wondering how she was supposed to face the person she thought was Campbell. She realized now that it was Irina all along, merely pretending to be the innocent Campbell. Suddenly, the silver-haired girl appeared in the doorway, calling out to her sister. She ran forward and hugged Chelsea tightly, telling her how much she had missed her during her absence. Internally, Irina was starving, thinking about how she hadn't tasted blood in 2 days and how she wanted to feast on Chelsea right then and there. Chelsea looked down at the girl, her expression cold and distant. In the past, she had loved being called sister by this sweet angel, but now the words felt like poison. I am back, the matter is settled, Chelsea said, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. The girl looked up at her, sensing the shift in mood and wondering why her sister suddenly seemed to dislike her. Chelsea forced a small, strained smile, claiming she was just tired because the guild was busy killing vampires. In that case, the girl said, leaning in close, then sister, just kiss me, she whispered, claiming she had been thinking about her all day. Chelsea felt the familiar pull of the curse, her resolve crumbling as she fell into a submissive state. Master, please punish me, she whispered, her eyes filling with tears as she told herself she couldn't surrender again. Irina smiled playfully, asking how she wanted to be punished. I want Master to abuse me harshly, Chelsea replied, her face flushed with a mix of shame and desire. Irina told her to go get her a glass of iced milk. As Chelsea walked away, she reflected on how she had once thought these were all innocent interests, only to realize they were the whims of a devil. She hated vampires, and she hated herself even more for being controlled by the curse. Irina watched her go, thinking that Chelsea could never leave her and that she would eventually take her back to her own territory forever. The next morning, Chelsea stood before the assembled members of the Hunter Guild, dressed in her dark combat gear. Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to attack the vampire, she announced, her voice firm. A heavy silence filled the room as the other hunters looked at her with suspicion. What is wrong with everyone, she asked, sensing the tension. One of the leaders stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he asked Chelsea what her relationship with Irina truly was. In a strange, distant memory of a different world, a young Irina found herself standing in the middle of a modern city street during winter. She looked around at the tall buildings and bright lights, confused about where she was. A small girl with blonde hair and a warm coat approached her, calling her sister. The child asked why she was wearing so little and warned her that she would catch a cold. The little girl took off her own scarf and wrapped it around Irina's neck. Beautiful sister, please go home early, the child said with a bright, innocent smile. Irina stood there in silence, staring at the young Chelsea with a look of utter bewilderment. Tiruz leaned in, his eyes narrowed with a cold, calculating suspicion. Chelsea, what is your relationship with Irina? His voice dropped an octave, delivering a revelation that felt like a physical blow. Campbell is Irina. Chelsea felt the blood drain from her face, her mind racing to comprehend how the secret had been exposed so quickly. I told Tiruz about this because I wanted to discuss it with someone, a voice nearby murmured, but the betrayal cut deeper than a simple conversation. Unexpectedly, Tiruz had exposed the matter to the public, making things nearly impossible for Chelsea. The president of the guild looked on, her face a mask of disappointment. President, you did speak up, didn't you? A hunter challenged, his voice rising in anger. You knew Campbell was Irina, so why did you get involved with her? The accusations continued to fly as another hunter stepped forward, his expression full of contempt. No wonder you were able to kill Eaton, he spat. It turns out that someone is helping you behind the scenes. Chelsea shook her head, her voice firm despite the pressure closing in on her. Sorry, I didn't mean to hide this from everyone, and I only found out about her identity not long ago. She stood tall, her eyes flashing with a defiant fire. But I was able to kill Eaton by virtue of my own ability, and it had nothing to do with anyone else. Tiruz let out a harsh, mocking laugh that echoed through the hall. Then you dare to say that you and Irina have nothing to do with each other? He shouted. We witnessed you confessing your love to Irina with our own eyes. Chelsea clutched her side, her mind flashing back to that moment of vulnerability. She realized then that Irina had known her true identity all along, even if she had not known Irina's. It was all a setup, a trap designed to leave her defenseless. The memory of Irina's touch felt like a ghost on her skin. "We will never be separated," the vampire had whispered. Chelsea realized with a sickening jolt that Irina had been plotting against her from the very beginning, playing a massive game of chess where Chelsea was merely a pawn. "Shout all you want," Teruz sneered, his lip curling. "Who wouldn't say such stupid things? Just tell me whether you admit that you are colluding with the vampires." "I never colluded with the vampire," Chelsea screamed back, her resolve hardening into something cold and sharp. "I will definitely wipe out all the vampires and I will never let Irina go." She looked at her hands, the weight of her mission pressing down on her. Irina was the blood princess and the daughter of Cain, and the Hunter Guild was currently too weak to face her head-on. Chelsea's plan began to take shape in the darkness of her mind. She would use Irina, staying close to her to learn the locations of her kind. One by one, she would disintegrate the low-level vampires, weakening the princess's power base. Finally, when Irina was isolated and vulnerable, it would be her turn. The president sighed, considering the strategy. "I think Chelsea has a point," she said softly. "With our current strength, we can barely beat the daughter of the ancestor of the vampire clan." Others began to nod, swayed by the logic of the desperate gambit. Chelsea has a clear plan to annihilate her, and it might just be an accident that she is entangled with the blood princess. Tiruz slammed his hand onto a table, the wood cracking under the force. "Stop talking about the things that are and are not," he roared. "It is a fact that you are mixed up with the vampires." He glared at the president, his eyes wild with ambition. "The president must be convincing. What if you suddenly rebel and leak the plan to her? I don't believe that someone like her will continue to be the president." Suddenly, a young hunter with a scar across his face spoke up, his voice cutting through the noise. "I believe her." He looked at his comrades with unwavering conviction. "She is the best among our group. No one is more suitable than her. I believe she can lead us." "Kill all the vampires," he added, his eyes burning with intensity. The room fell silent as his words took hold. "Okay, since you are willing to vouch for her, then I will believe you again." A voice called out from the crowd. "Then I will believe you once too." Another echoed. Chelsea looked away, her heart heavy with the burden of her lies and her truth. "I also believe that I will definitely do it," she thought, "even if it is that person. The lover who once shared her bed would have to die." She watched Irina sleeping peacefully in the dim light, the vampire's silver hair splayed across the pillow like silk. In the days that followed, Chelsea threw herself into her research, testing chemicals that reacted violently in small vials. She filled her journals with notes, detailing every weakness she could find, her quill scratching frantically across the parchment. The president marveled at the progress. "President, the new weapon you researched is so easy to use. I feel like I am so powerful now," she exclaimed. An older hunter patted his rifle, a grim smile on his face. "I can hit 10 in one go." The mission began at a massive, dark estate that served as a vampire gathering place. Chelsea watched from the shadows as a vampire in a red dress wandered through the courtyard, unaware of the death approaching. "Now come on," Chelsea commanded, her voice a sharp whip crack in the night. The air was filled with the sounds of battle and the screams of the undead as the hunters struck. "How did they find it here?" a vampire shrieked before being cut down. "Ah," they cried out in pain as the hunters' arrows and bullets found their marks. Chelsea looked at her map, the locations of vampire dens marked with heavy red crosses, each one a victory bought in blood. Later, back at the house they shared, Irina sat close to Chelsea on the sofa, her eyes wide and innocent. "I heard that sister has killed many vampires recently?" she asked softly. "Yes," Chelsea replied, her voice flat as she stared at the floor, her feet tucked into fluffy white slippers. She wondered if Irina would be angry, considering those were her people being slaughtered. "Sister is so awesome," Irina chirped, a bright, cheerful smile on her face. "Those guys from the Hunter Guild must all admire sister, right?" Chelsea looked at her, searching for any sign of deception. "Do you really think so? Don't you think I am too cruel?" "No, the vampires have always preyed on the weak," Irina said, leaning in. "Even the useless gangsters like the Hunter Guild can't defeat these big brothers, which proves that they're just making do with their lives." Irina's eyes darkened for a moment as she thought to herself. She could not keep fighting like this all day long. Her little blood food must be exhausted from killing those vampire trash. "Why don't you think of a way for the two races to coexist peacefully?" Irina suggested aloud. "Sister, we will definitely have peace and then we can be together forever," she promised, hugging Chelsea tight. "Well, it definitely will," Chelsea agreed, though her internal thoughts were far more grim. "After I kill all the other vampires, I will kill you with my own hands," Chelsea vowed silently, her blue eyes cold and distant. In this way, mankind can gain eternal peace. The domestic routine continued, with Irina lounging on the sofa reading a newspaper while Chelsea cooked in the kitchen. But the peace was shattered when the door was thrown open. "Who? Get out!" Irina snapped, her eyes flashing red. Two figures stepped into the room, their presence a dark stain on the clean house. "Irina," a man said, his voice dripping with urgency. Irina stood her ground, her arms crossed as she glared at the intruders. "What are you doing here? Don't you want to live anymore?" she hissed. "Irina, I'm sorry," the man replied, bowing his head in a show of respect that felt forced. Irina gritted her teeth, her mind racing. "All vampires who appear here may leave traces, and I don't want Chelsea to find out yet." The man, Blood Count Zinji, looked up with eyes full of fury. "Irina, do you know what the Hunters Guild has done? They destroyed our castles and caves and killed hundreds of low-level vampires." He gestured wildly, his voice cracking with emotion. It's already reached this point, but you actually still have the heart to play games with humans here? Irina merely smiled, a cold, elegant expression. So what? She's just my food. I can take her away soon, and it will not be too late to go back then. She watched them with a predatory calm. With fewer troublesome vampires, it would be easier for her to deal with them when the time came. Take her back? A woman with pink hair and pointed ears asked. Her name was Blood Count Linrui, and she looked horrified. Provide her with a vampire gathering place so that the Hunter Guild can destroy it in one fell swoop. Linrui stepped forward, her voice trembling with indignation. Your Highness Irina, don't you think you're too obsessed with that human being? She has already killed so many of your tribe, and yet you still want to take her away. Zinji slammed his fist against his chest, his eyes burning with a red light. Irina, if you really want to take her back, then I will definitely kill her myself. Chelsea and our blood family have a sworn hatred, and I want her to pay for it with her life. He roared. Irina blinked, her expression shifting to one of genuine confusion. What happened? She asked. She could not understand why the noble Earl of Blood was so angry just because some low-level vampires were dead. Linrui moved closer to Zinji, her eyes filling with tears. Zinji's wife gave birth to a son for him not long ago, she explained softly. But when he went out for a trip, the castle was attacked by the Hunters Guild. His wife and children were killed by the Hunter Guild, taking advantage of the chaos. Irina felt a pang of genuine shock. How could her little blood food be so ruthless? She wondered why Chelsea had never mentioned any of this to her. The tension in the room was palpable when the kitchen door opened. Campbell, come for lunch, Chelsea called out, stepping into the room with a long braid over her shoulder. She stopped dead when she saw the two strangers. Vampire? She whispered, her eyes narrowing as she recognized the aura of power coming from them. Chelsea immediately moved in front of Irina, shielding her with her own body. How did you get in? She demanded, her voice full of protective rage. Irina played her part perfectly, cowering behind Chelsea's legs. These two people suddenly appeared and said they wanted to kill me to avenge their people, she whined. My sister saved me. Get out of here, get out of here. Irina's voice echoed in the minds of the two counts, a silent sound transmission through the air. Chelsea's mind was spinning as she watched the exchange. No, cannot, she thought. Did the vampires even want to kill their own princess? Linrui stared at Irina, her heart breaking at the betrayal. Linrui, if you don't want to die, get out of here. Irina's mental command was like a physical blow. Linrui could not believe it. There were countless vampires in the tribe killed and injured, and despite this, Irina was still helping this woman to speak. It seems that if we don't kill her, the vampires will soon be extinct. Linrui thought, her eyes hardening with a new, dark resolve. Sister, be careful, Irina shouted as a surge of energy erupted in the room. Chelsea reacted instantly, her hands moving in a blur as she summoned a crackling blue magical circle to block an incoming strike. The power hummed between her fingertips as she held the line against the blood counts. If you dare to touch her, I guarantee that you too won't survive tonight. Irina's voice boomed, no longer silent, her authority as a princess finally surfacing. One day you will regret it. Zinji spat, his eyes burning with hatred as he realized they were outmatched for now. Go, he commanded, and the two vampires vanished into the night. Irina immediately collapsed into Chelsea's arms, sobbing. Sister, I'm so scared, she cried. She looks so scary. Will I have nightmares at night? Don't be afraid, Chelsea whispered, stroking the girl's hair. As long as I'm here, she has been driven away. But Chelsea's mind was far from calm. How could a nearly 1,000-year-old vampire find other vampires scary? She had seen Irina's lips moving, but she hadn't heard a sound. Could it be the sound wave communication method recorded in the books about high-level vampires? She wondered. Outside, standing on a nearby rooftop, the two counts looked back at the house with disgust. Irina is a traitor to humanity, Zinji hissed, his voice trembling. The vampire clan is in danger and she does not protect the vampire clan, she only wants to please humans. She is not worthy of being our king at all. Zinji, I do have a plan, Linrui said, her pink hair fluttering in the wind, but I don't know if you dare to do it. What? Zinji asked, his eyes turning to her with a dark curiosity. Linrui looked him straight in the eye, her voice cold and certain. Overthrow Irina's rule. Inside the cold stone walls of a hidden fortress, a group of cloaked figures gathered around a long table. One of them slammed a fist down, his voice raspy as he noted that the vampire clan had been beaten to a pulp recently and that Irina, whose seal was only recently lifted, was nowhere to be seen. A woman among them crossed her arms, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light as she suggested that with humans and vampires at war, there was no better time for them to have a hearty meal. They could secretly prey on humans under the guise of being vampires and then shift all the blame onto the blood drinkers. A prospect that made one man shout that he was tired of hiding away during the day. His face was etched with a scar as he roared that he would kill all humans before the two warring races could even react. He declared that no one on the continent would ever dare to offend the black magicians again. In the bustling city, a large notice board stood as a grim reminder of the rising tide of violence. New flyers were posted daily, warning that innocent citizens had died tragically in their homes and that the vampires had appeared once more, urging hunters to kill them on sight. Inside the Hunter Guild, Chelsea stood before the president, who asked if the vampires were starting to cause chaos again and what their next move should be. The air was thick with resentment as guild members argued that these devils who did not know how to live or die had to be eliminated, even though the remaining vampires had been driven to the fringe areas and were now hiding in total secrecy. The president leaned forward, a cold smirk on his face as he asked who could say there were no vampires when the biggest one was right next to Chelsea. Chelsea froze, her eyes widening in a moment of stunned silence as she processed his words. Her mind raced back to the strange occurrences and the inexplicable deaths of innocent people who had only just begun their lives. The president pressed her, asking why she had not done anything to Irina yet and if she was actually trying to protect the monster. Chelsea lowered her head, her voice quiet as she explained she only wanted to know Irina's true purpose and feared the princess was planning something while staying with her. A shadow fell over her face as the weight of her duty clashed with her complicated feelings. She suddenly looked up with renewed resolve, declaring she wanted to wipe out all vampires, even as a fellow hunter warned that they could not defeat the Blood Princess. She simply replied they would wait for an opportunity. A light knock at the door interrupted the tension, and Campbell peeked inside with a sweet smile, asking if she could bring them lunch. Chelsea stood up immediately, telling the others she had to go, while they teased her about being in love and asked for an invitation to their future wedding. Campbell, looking radiant in her blue gown, simply thanked them all with a graceful nod. Once they were alone in the hallway, Campbell looked at Chelsea with a hint of sadness, asking if it was true that she was planning to do something to Irina. Chelsea looked away, her heart hammering against her ribs as she struggled with the lie, eventually resolving to herself that she could never hurt Campbell but would kill Irina as soon as she returned. She hurried away, her face flushed with embarrassment as Campbell watched her go in silence. Chelsea questioned her own heart, wondering if it was fair to Campbell that such dark things were destined for Irina, considering Campbell seemed so innocent and oblivious. Later that day, Campbell threw her arms around Chelsea in a warm embrace, complaining that the guild had been so busy she had almost forgotten what her sister looked like. Chelsea held her close but pulled back slightly to tell her that she must keep the doors and windows closed and not run around while she was out. When Campbell asked why, Chelsea warned her about the tragic vampire killings, prompting Campbell to laugh and say she would protect herself so she could marry Chelsea safely. As Campbell smiled, Chelsea's expression darkened with the knowledge that she would soon have to go and hunt the remaining vampires down. As the sun began to set over a grand Gothic manor, the sky turned a bruised shade of orange. The click of elegant heels echoed against the floor as someone walked with purpose through the halls. Irina appeared, her long black hair flowing over a deep red gown as she entered the chamber of the remaining vampire survivors. The vampires cheered at her arrival, believing their queen had finally come to save them from the hunters and restore their glory. A young vampire girl with pink hair clasped her hands, asking if Irina was there to lead them in a war to defeat the humans and regain their territory. Irina looked down at them with disdain, her voice cold as she told them they had no qualifications to retake anything and that their current misery was their own fault. A male vampire snarled that the weak deserved to die and asked if she would really just watch her own kind perish at human hands. Irina replied that she intended to rectify the Blood clan and sign a peace contract for coexistence, but the man spat back that she was being led by humans and was sacrificing her race. The tension in the room snapped as the vampires exchanged looks of betrayal. The male vampire shouted for everyone to join him in killing Irina so they could establish a new king. Irina scoffed at their boldness, calling them foolish as they lunged toward her. She stood her ground, her red dress billowing around her as the traitors attacked. Two vampires looked at each other, coordinating their next move with a desperate nod. One of them summoned a glowing magical formation between his hands, yelling that anyone who stopped them from drinking blood was an enemy. Irina gritted her teeth, realizing she had underestimated them and that they had prepared a specific formation to neutralize her power. Suddenly, the doors burst open and Chelsea stormed in with her pistol drawn, announcing that the last nest had been discovered and the siege was a success. Irina looked up in shock, wondering how Chelsea could have possibly found this place and brought the guild with her. The lead vampire traitor screamed for the others to kill the human first, but Chelsea did not hesitate. She fired and the vampire was thrown back, blood spraying from his chest as someone screamed for it to stop. A violent spray of crimson coated the floor as the conflict turned into a bloodbath. The wounded vampire looked toward Irina one last time before collapsing. Irina stood amidst the chaos, her own shoulder bleeding as she looked at Chelsea and whispered that they had met again. Chelsea's eyes were cold and full of hatred as she stared down the barrel of her gun. She held the weapon with both hands, her finger tightening on the trigger. Irina smiled sadly, thinking how cruel it was that Campbell would feel so bad if she knew what was happening, but then a voice called out Chelsea's name. Campbell stepped out from the shadows, holding a gun of her own and telling Chelsea she was there to help. Chelsea told her it was too dangerous, but Campbell insisted on fighting by her side, promising she would not hold her sister back. Irina stared at the silver-haired girl, her voice a low hiss as she realized the girl's name was Campbell. Chelsea looked at Irina with a piercing gaze, revealing that she knew Irina had been pretending to be her fiancé and lurking around her this entire time. Irina asked when she had found out, her heart sinking as she realized that while she was playing games, she was the one being played. Irina's eyes filled with a dark, burning jealousy as she realized that Chelsea's coldness was all because of this girl. She felt a surge of murderous rage, convinced that Campbell was the one who had ruined her plans and stolen Chelsea's favor. With a feral scream, Irina lunged at Campbell, her claws extended as she shrieked that she wanted her to die. Irina's eyes flashed with a murderous glint as she glared at the group before her voice dripping with a cold, sharp edge. Chelsea, don't get out of the way or I will kill you too, she threatened, her patience finally reaching its breaking point. Chelsea didn't flinch, stepping firmly in front of her silver-haired companion to shield her from the princess's wrath. Why not kill us all together, she countered, her voice steady despite the chaos. Irina, you can't play house with me and have real feelings for me, right? The words seemed to strike Irina harder than any physical blow, her expression crumbling into one of disbelief and raw betrayal. So you have been lying to me this whole time, she whispered, her voice trembling as she searched Chelsea's eyes for a hint of the warmth she thought they shared. Since when? Irina's hand drifted toward her waist, her mind racing back to the moments when she felt secure in their bond. Before, behind Chelsea was my place, she thought bitterly, mourning the loss of a trust she now realized might never have been real. From the sidelines, the other vampires watched the drama unfold with sneering contempt. The pink-haired vampire let out a sharp, mocking laugh, her eyes filled with derision. The dignified princess of the Blood clan actually fell into the trap of human love, she taunted. People just treat you like a fool. Do you think she really loves you? The vampire continued, her voice rising in an attempt to shatter Irina's resolve. She keeps you by her side just to collect information and kill us. Irina, even if you sacrifice us for her, so what? She only likes her fiancé. If you don't believe me, ask her. Irina stood in silence, her head bowed as the weight of the accusations settled over her like a heavy shroud. Chelsea raised her revolver, the barrel cold and steady as she aimed it directly at the vampire princess. You are going to die soon, she stated flatly. Irina looked up, the gun pressing against her temple as she asked one final, desperate question. So is everything they say true? You have been hiding this from me, but you just want to use me to destroy all vampires. Yes, I have been lying to you all this time just to use your hands to destroy the vampire clan, Chelsea admitted, her face a mask of indifference. What am I going to fall in love with you, who is hypocritical, arrogant, and selfish? A strange, knowing smile touched Irina's lips as she looked at Chelsea, a look that suggested she had already anticipated the escape. Won't she run away? She mused softly to herself. Really? Suddenly, the silver-haired girl lunged forward, her own weapon drawn and ready. Sister, get out of the way, she screamed, pulling the trigger in a desperate attempt to end the confrontation then and there. But the bullet found only empty air as Irina vanished, reappearing an instant later directly behind Chelsea. It is me who underestimated you, the princess whispered, her presence suddenly overwhelming. A terrifying aura of purple energy erupted from Irina, swirling around her like a dark storm as her eyes glowed with a predatory light, radiating a power that felt older than the castle itself. The sheer pressure of the energy forced the pink-haired vampire to shield her eyes, her arrogance replaced by genuine fear. So strong is it ancient power, she gasped, realization dawning on her that they were dealing with a force far beyond their comprehension. The silver-haired girl refused to back down, her voice trembling with rage as she faced the transformed princess. You murderous demon, let go of Sister Chelsea, she cried out. If you want to fight, hit me first. The man beside her nodded in agreement, shouting that bullying a woman was nothing and challenging Irina to kill them all if she had the ability. Irina didn't even turn to look at them, simply flicking her finger with effortless grace. A sharp gust of magical energy slammed into the girl, sending her flying backward through the air with a cry of pain. Chelsea watched the display of power with wide eyes, her mind reeling as Irina allowed the others to retreat. Irina, why would you let them go, she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The other vampires were equally confused and outraged by the princess's mercy. Yes, they all bring delicacies to our door, the male vampire complained. Why do they stay and give us blood food? The female vampire stepped forward, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. Irina, are you on the side of the vampires or the humans, she demanded. Irina turned her gaze toward them, her expression cold and unreadable. A group of short-sighted things who didn't even think about this still had the courage to rebel, she muttered under her breath. She addressed the gathered vampires with a voice that brooked no argument. Gather all the survivors tomorrow, she commanded. If you want to continue to rebel after hearing this, you can do whatever you want. The pink-haired girl bristled at the delay, demanding to know why they had to wait until tomorrow and what Irina planned to do. The pink-haired vampire peered down with a cold, analytical gaze as Chelsea finally began to stir from her forced slumber. So you have finally woke up? She asked, her voice dripping with a mock sweetness that felt more like a threat than a greeting. Chelsea blinked against the dim light, her blonde hair splayed across the pillows as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. Who are you? She rasped, her voice thin and dry. Did Irina send you here to free me? A cruel smirk pulled at the corner of the vampire's mouth, revealing the sharp glint of her fangs. Let you go? She repeated, her eyes widening with a malicious delight. You really want to be nice, don't you? Without another word, she reached out, her movements a blur of supernatural speed as she seized Chelsea with an iron grip. With a sudden, violent lift, she hoisted the captive woman into the air as if she weighed nothing at all. Chelsea had no time to scream before she was sent sailing through the air. The vampire made a sharp motion to throw her, casting her body toward the center of the room. Chelsea hit the surface of the indoor pool with a heavy, echoing plop, the cold water surging up to swallow her whole. As she struggled to find her footing in the waist-deep water, her captor hovered effortlessly above the surface, looking down with a predatory sneer. "Tell me, you, the dignified vampire hunter and guild leader, how much the human camp trusts you," she demanded, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "Why did you betray them?" The vampire raised a hand, and a shimmering blue magic circle manifested before her palm, humming with dangerous energy. Chelsea looked up from the water, her eyes burning with a mix of physical pain and raw, unadulterated fury. "I hate the curse," she hissed, her voice trembling with the weight of her loathing. "I hate the curse, I hate you vampires, I hate everyone." The pink-haired woman didn't seem bothered by the outburst. Instead, she reached into the folds of her dress and produced a small glass vial filled with a glowing green liquid. "Very good," she said, her smile widening. "Since you have so much spirit left, I will come every day to bully you once." She held up the intermediate healing potion, its contents swirling mesmerically. Before Chelsea could retreat, the vampire was upon her again, forcing the girl's jaw open and tilting the vial back. Chelsea gagged as she was forced to swallow the bitter medicine, the liquid staining her lips as it began to knit her wounds back together. Far above the damp cells, the atmosphere within the vampire castle was reaching a boiling point. The ancient stone walls seemed to vibrate with the collective anger of the court. A brown-haired vampire stood before the gathered masses, his face contorted with rage as he raised a fist. "Go kill Chelsea now," he roared, his voice carrying through the grand hall. Sitting upon her ornate throne, Irina remained remarkably composed, though her eyes were dark with hidden tension. "Killing Chelsea is impossible," she stated flatly, her voice cutting through the clamor like a blade. The male vampire turned his fury toward his princess, his ears twitching with agitation. "You actually sacrificed your vampire family for a human?" he shouted, accusing her in front of everyone. "You are a traitor." Irina didn't flinch. She leaned back, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders as she looked out at the sea of disgruntled faces, including two young vampires who looked on with growing concern. "Wake up, everyone, times have changed. Haven't you noticed yet?" she asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous, low register. "Humans are no longer the race that we bullied in the past. Now they have more powerful weapons." She gestured vaguely toward the shadows, where the silhouette of a human soldier holding a firearm seemed to haunt the room. "So what if Chelsea dies?" she continued. "They can always replace someone with a stronger one. Look at you again, can you beat me?" The brown-haired man hesitated, his bravado wavering. "We can't beat you," he admitted, stepping back toward his companion. "But you can, that is, why don't you go and destroy them?" Irina turned her head slightly, her gaze drifting toward the window. "My strength has not yet fully recovered," she thought to herself, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her features. "I can only hold on for a while even though it consumes a lot of energy, but it is absolutely impossible for them to know about this." She stood up, her blue gown billowing around her as she addressed the room with renewed authority. "Humans are so numerous that they cannot be killed or exterminated," she declared. "Instead of trying to suppress them, you should think about how to coexist peacefully with them." Her hand tightened on the fabric of her skirt, the blue roses pinned there shimmering in the dim light. "We are a blood race, and we are supposed to rule humans," she reminded them, though her words carried a different weight than they expected. A small wisp of purple energy drifted quietly through the air, unnoticed by most as the princess continued her speech. "We must reform and re-sign the peace agreement to give the vampires a chance to recuperate," she said. From the back of the hall, the pink-haired vampire who had been tormenting Chelsea stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she challenged the princess. "What about Chelsea?" she asked, her voice loud enough to stop the murmurs. "Irina, since you want to make peace with humans, why do you want to detain the human leaders?" She crossed her arms, looking defiant. "I'm afraid this will only create trouble for the enemy." Irina looked her rival dead in the eye, her expression unreadable. "The human leader Chelsea you mentioned has now completely surrendered to me," she lied smoothly. "She will obey my orders and help us convince humans together." The pink-haired vampire didn't look entirely convinced, but she forced a thin smile. "Really?" she mused. "I hope that's the case. Then we look forward to your success, Your Highness Irina." As the crowd began to disperse, a green-haired maid leaned in close to Irina, her voice a frantic whisper. "Now that the human camp has figured out our position, if you want to negotiate, I suggest you." Irina didn't let her finish. She began to walk away, her heels clicking rhythmically against the stone floor. "Enough," she snapped. She paused only long enough to glance back over her shoulder, her face weary. "Go out," she commanded the maid. "We will talk about it tomorrow." Retreating to the privacy of her chambers, Irina approached the large bed where Chelsea lay. The blonde woman appeared to be sleeping, her breathing shallow and even. Irina sat on the edge of the mattress and slowly lowered herself down, lying beside her captive. She reached out, gently taking Chelsea's hand in her own and pulling the girl closer. Irina closed her eyes, a look of strange, possessive peace settling over her face. "Chelsea, you will always be my blood and will never leave me," she whispered into the quiet room. The silence was shattered by a sudden, sharp movement. Chelsea's hand flew up, and the sound of a slap echoed through the chamber as she struck out at the princess. Irina pulled back, her eyes wide with shock as she stared at the woman she had been holding. Chelsea sat up, her eyes cold and sharp, her wrists still bound by heavy metal shackles. Get me out of here, Irina, she demanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. Get me out of here, Irina, Chelsea snapped, her voice trembling with a mix of exhaustion and fury. Irina stood before her, the moonlight catching the sharp angles of her pale face as she looked down at her prisoner. You are not asleep yet? Irina asked, her tone deceptively mild as if they were merely sharing a late-night conversation in a parlor. Chelsea pulled against her restraints, her blonde hair disheveled. You are taking advantage of others, I don't want to see you. She shouted, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Internally, Chelsea felt a crushing weight of despair, knowing it was only because of this wretched curse that she had to beg for mercy from the vampire. If she could only control the dark magic coursing through her, she would fight back against her fiercely and without hesitation. Irina's expression shifted, a shadow falling over her eyes that made the air in the room feel heavy. I see, the vampire princess murmured. She leaned in closer, her presence overwhelming. It turns out that my little blood food wants to play a new game of pretend to rebel against the master today. Isn't it just seducing me to act reluctant? Irina's fingers brushed against Chelsea's skin, her gaze piercing. How to make such an expression? Chelsea recoiled, but there was nowhere to go. What do you want the master to pamper you here tonight? Irina teased, her voice a low, dangerous purr. The mockery continued as Irina tilted her head. Come to think of it, you haven't learned to bark like a dog for a long time, right? Bark for your master to hear. Chelsea's eyes flashed with a spark of her old fire as she shouted back, roll. Her defiance only seemed to entertain the vampire. Yes, if you have the guts, just kill me, Chelsea cried out, her voice cracking. Don't pretend to send someone to bully and intimidate me. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision as she stared up at her captor. Irina watched her, a small, enigmatic smile playing on her lips. Very good, she whispered. In the silence that followed, a strange realization seemed to settle over Irina as she looked at the broken girl before her. My lust for her will never arise again, she thought, though the complexity of her emotions suggested otherwise. She looked away, her own features briefly clouding with something that looked almost like regret. A single tear tracked down Chelsea's cheek, glistening in the dim light. Irina noticed it immediately, her gaze lingering on the salt-streaked skin. She cried. Far away from the cold stone of the castle, the night air was thick with tension in the village. A group of bounty hunters and villagers gathered, their voices hushed but frantic. She has been dealing with Irina all day for her plan, and now she is in danger. We should save her, a woman urged. A man shook his head violently, his face pale with terror. No, that's Irina. She can crush us to death with just one finger, and I don't want to die there. The woman turned on him, her eyes wide with disbelief. Afraid of death, Chelsea was arrested for the sake of all mankind. You just let her be tortured by the vampires. Michael, his gray hair stark against his black coat, tried to intervene. Everyone please be calm, the people must be rescued, but Irina is not an ordinary vampire, and if she shows up rashly, she will just die. I think we still need to think long-term. Tullis sneered at him, crossing his arms. Michael, do you think I don't know that you like Chelsea? For your little trick, you actually want to drag other brothers in the guild to die with you? I absolutely don't agree. If you're worried about her, just go by yourself. The argument devolved into petty bickering, the air filled with accusations of selfish agendas. Standing at the doorway, a young girl with long silver hair watched them with utter contempt. What a bunch of cowards, she spat, her voice cutting through the noise. You are frightened by a mere Irina. She stood tall in her ruffled red dress, her resolve hardening. Since you all don't dare to go, then I will go, save my fiancé. Campbell moved through the dark streets of the village, the sound of her boots echoing against the cobblestones. She reached a heavy wooden door and knocked urgently. A man opened it, looking confused and wary. Who, he grunted. It's me, Campbell said, her blue eyes pleading. Can you help me save Chelsea? She fell into the hands of the vampires for the sake of humanity. We can't just leave her alone. The man didn't even hesitate. Everyone is resting today, please come back tomorrow, he barked, slamming the door in her face. Campbell stood frozen as she heard him shout from behind the wood, get lost, go die by yourself. Another voice joined in, muffled by the walls. No, I advise you not to go, you can't afford to offend Irina. Campbell lowered her head, her silver hair veiling her face. Sister, these are the people you risk your life to protect, a group of cowards who are only afraid of death. She gripped the fabric of her skirt, her knuckles white. I am the heir trained by you, Esther. Even if no one helps me, I won't give up. Under the pale crescent moon, the castle loomed like a jagged tooth against the sky. Campbell didn't sneak in. She walked right into the courtyard, drawing her rapier as she faced the dark figure waiting for her. Irina, where did you hide my fiancé? She demanded, her voice ringing out in the night. Irina stood on the stone steps, her long black hair flowing over a magnificent white and gold gown. Do you really want to know? She asked, her voice dripping with amusement. She held up a delicate glass filled with a dark, swirling liquid. Drink it and I'll tell you. Campbell didn't lower her weapon. I'm just young, not stupid. How could I eat your food casually? Irina took a slow sip, her red eyes gleaming. What, you don't want to know where Chelsea is, coward? With a cry of rage, Campbell lunged forward, her blade whistling through the air as Irina easily parried the strike with a casual wave of her hand. Do you really like her so much? Irina mocked, her movements fluid and effortless. Such a young child, do you really know what love is? Campbell struggled against the vampire's overwhelming strength. She is my fiancée, I have the responsibility to protect her. Irina laughed a cold melodic sound. She was already mine. Before you came along, she had already considered me her fiancé. We live a shameless life every day, and the fun of it is something that a child like you cannot understand. I advise you to go back to where you came from. So what? Campbell countered, her voice shaking with indignation. Sister Chelsea said that she would only take you in if you took my identity and name. You are just a thief who sneaked in, a substitute for me. The one she likes will always be me. The air around Irina seemed to freeze. Ha, she uttered, the word a low growl of pure menace. In a flash of movement too fast for the human eye to follow, Irina dropped her glass and seized Campbell by the throat, lifting the girl off the ground. Say that again, she hissed. Little thing, I am a great prince of the blood clan. How can I be your substitute? Later, inside the quiet halls of the castle, a maid approached Irina with a tray. Your Highness, she still doesn't want to eat today, the maid reported. I knew, Irina replied curtly, her mind elsewhere. She pushed open the door to Chelsea's room, finding the girl sitting on a window bench, staring out at the stars. Chelsea, Irina said softly, before crossing the room and scooping the blonde woman into her arms. Who are you pretending to be dead for? Are you still waiting for someone to rescue you? Chelsea remained limp, her eyes hollow. Irina sighed, her voice taking on a strange, almost gentle quality. It's my fault for being so careless. I forgot that you haven't seen the sun for a long time. How about this? As long as you answer one question for me, I'll let you go for a spin. Chelsea looked up, her neck and collarbone littered with dark bruises and bite marks. Chelsea, are you using me as a substitute for her? Irina asked. Her? Chelsea whispered. Recognition flared in Chelsea's eyes. Did you see her? She grabbed Irina's gown, her voice suddenly frantic. Irina, you can kill me or chop me up as you please, but leave Campbell alone. Irina's grip tightened, her jealousy flaring. Do you care about her that much? She is my fiancée, the person I want to protect my whole life. Chelsea shouted, her face inches from Irina's. If I don't care, who should she care about? Yes, she is the one you should care about, but what about me? Am I the one you want to kill the most? Irina's voice was a jagged edge. Otherwise, do you think I will still love you? Chelsea countered. Irina turned away, drinking deeply from a glass of milk she had brought. I have never been anyone's substitute, she thought fiercely. I will always be her enemy that she can never kill or let go of. She turned back to Chelsea and without a word pressed her lips against the girl's, forcing the liquid into her mouth. Chelsea gasped, her eyes wide with shock as the warmth of the milk filled her throat. She didn't bite me, but she actually. We are enemies and she still has the mood to feed me milk. Irina pulled back, a smear of white on her lip. Okay, enough of the noise, let's eat something. After eating, I'll take you to see your fiancé's body, how's that? Chelsea's strength failed her and she slid from Irina's arms, collapsing onto the rug. She felt weak and feeble, her body refusing to obey her. Little guy, you should eat something first, Irina said, standing over her. In order to kill me, you have to recover your body. Chelsea glared up at her from the floor, her spirit still unbroken despite her physical state. Irina, I will kill you. The maid knocked on the door again, peering inside. Oh, it's really exciting, Irina remarked, glancing back at the door. She looked at Chelsea one last time, a dark thought crossing her mind. Would killing her make Chelsea forget about her? The maid stepped forward and bowed low. Your Highness, the human girl who challenged you without knowing the consequences has been sent back safely. The doctor finished wrapping the clean white bandages around the shallow scratches on the silver-haired woman's arms and legs. He looked up with a hopeful expression, suggesting that to be on the safe side, she might want to try his specialized blood transfusion therapy. He insisted that it was both effective and surprisingly affordable. The woman, identified as Miss Campbell, stared back at him with a flat, unimpressed gaze as he clenched his fists with exaggerated enthusiasm. She gave a blunt refusal, leaving the doctor looking slightly deflated. Standing by the fireplace with his arms crossed, the acting president interjected, telling Dr. Mack that since Miss Campbell was stable, he could leave so they could discuss more private matters. The doctor gathered his heavy tools, including a large saw and a wrench, and offered a final pitch for his enema services before shuffling out the door. As soon as the door clicked shut, the acting president turned on her with a sharp, piercing look. He demanded to know what on earth she was trying to accomplish, and if she truly believed she was being clever. Miss Campbell stood her ground, her voice steady as she explained that she took the risk solely to save Chelsea. She admitted that instead of retreating, she wanted her fiancé to feel the weight of being betrayed by the very person she had tried so hard to protect. The president's expression darkened as he asked if she had even considered the consequences of provoking someone as dangerous as Irina. He warned her that if Irina was pushed too far and launched a massive attack on humanity, the blood would be on her hands. Miss Campbell called them a bunch of cowards, her eyes flashing with anger. She declared that Chelsea had risked everything for the guild only to be abandoned, and she refused to be controlled by their fear any longer. She stormed out of the room, the heavy door banging shut behind her as a maid called out in a panic, begging the president to leave her alone. The acting president watched the door, his eyes narrowed as he wondered just how far she was willing to go for a mere woman. Outside, Miss Campbell hurried through the stone corridors with her butler, Joseph, struggling to keep pace. Joseph adjusted his monocle and observed that Chelsea was simply a childhood playmate who had fallen into a bad situation. He asked her directly if her love for the girl was truly deep enough to justify such a massive sacrifice. She paused, her reflection caught in a nearby window as she considered the question. I probably don't love her, she thought to herself, looking down at her trembling, bandaged hands. However, she told Joseph that protecting her fiancé was the core responsibility of every member of the Uester family, and she would never give up on her. She pressed a hand to her chest, her face set in a mask of grim resolve. In a dimly lit room elsewhere, Chelsea sat alone at a table, mechanically chewing on a piece of dry bread and washing it down with milk. Her mind was consumed with thoughts of the woman she believed was lost. I will definitely kill her to avenge you, she whispered, her eyes brimming with a mixture of grief and hatred. A soft, mocking sound came from the darkness. Irina stepped into the light, her black dress trailing behind her like a shadow. She loomed over Chelsea, asking what she thought had been done to Campbell. Irina sat at the table, crossing her legs and resting her chin on her hand as she studied her captive. She asked why Chelsea was so unwilling to give up her dignity if she truly cared for her fiancé. She is my fiancé, of course I love her, Chelsea snapped, her voice trembling. Irina leaned forward, her eyes glowing with a predatory light as she told Chelsea to prove it by being proactive and pleasing her. Irina moved with sudden supernatural speed, pressing her lips against Chelsea's in a forceful kiss. Chelsea's face flushed a deep, embarrassed red, her breath catching in her throat as she was overwhelmed by the vampire's presence. Irina pulled back just an inch, a cruel smile on her lips as she noted that Chelsea wasn't resisting the kiss anymore. Chelsea stammered out that she hated it and that it was disgusting. That is right, Irina replied, leaning back in, I want you to feel disgusted. Irina thought to herself that even if their connection was built on pure hatred, she was not prepared to let go. Chelsea huddled on the bed afterward, her body shaking as she struggled to process the humiliation. She cried out that Irina's kisses made her feel sick. She realized then that vampires usually had no concept of kissing and only used their mouths to feed. She wondered why Irina was acting so strangely human just to torment her. Since you hate me so much, I might as well give you a real reason to loathe me, Irina said with a sharp grin. She called out to her servants, ordering them to bring Miss President to her room immediately. Chelsea looked up in horror, asking what she was planning, but Irina only promised that Chelsea would soon be unable to escape her presence or even the scent of her skin. Are you satisfied now? Irina asked, looking down at the blonde girl with a triumphant expression. Sometime later, Chelsea was forced into a frilly black and white maid's uniform, standing awkwardly in a grand, golden doorway. Irina lay draped across a luxurious bed, her long dark hair flowing over the silk sheets. She asked why Chelsea was standing so far away and told her to come up and serve her. Chelsea argued that if Irina wanted a servant, there were plenty of others waiting to do the job. Irina didn't listen, reaching out and pulling Chelsea down onto the bed with her. She reminded Chelsea that she was a prisoner and had no right to negotiate her terms. Chelsea pleaded with her, suggesting that if she wanted to humiliate her, she should find another way that wasn't so personally invasive. Your disgust doesn't matter to me, Irina said flatly. She pulled Chelsea into a firm hug, telling her not to move. She whispered that she wanted to hold her just a little longer, even if it only served to make Chelsea hate her more. Irina, I hate you, Chelsea repeated, her voice muffled against the vampire's shoulder. Irina simply told her to be quiet and stop talking. Their moment was interrupted by a vampire maid, who entered to announce that the other lords were waiting for the meeting to begin. As Irina stood to leave, the maid glanced at the bed, wondering why her mistress would go to the trouble of arranging a place to sleep for a human when their race had no need for it. Irina told her to shut up and warned her never to speak of it again. Chelsea remained behind, staring off into space with a hollow expression. In the grand hall, Irina sat before a series of enchanted mirrors to conduct a video conference with the other vampire nobles. The lesser lords were complaining, stating that they were starving and believed humans should be ruled by them rather than protected. Irina snapped at them, clarifying that she was stopping them from murdering people, not from eating livestock like sheep or ducks. She told them to choose between eating duck blood or being completely exterminated. She warned them that if they weren't afraid of death, they could continue to cause trouble for her. A noble with blue hair watched the exchange with a smirk, glad to let the others vent their anger on Irina so he could have some peace. Irina then made a bold announcement, stating she would create 2 new institutions for supervision and punishment, and the candidates would be chosen from the civilian population rather than the nobility. The nobles were shocked and outraged, while the common vampires began to cheer for her decision. Chelsea watched the broadcast from her room, stunned to see that Irina actually seemed to care about the lower classes. She wondered if this hidden side of the princess was the reason she had been lingering around her. Later that evening, Irina returned to the room and noted that the maid said Chelsea had eaten well. Irina, did you really kill Campbell? Chelsea asked, her voice low. She argued that if Irina truly wanted to coexist with humans, she wouldn't have committed such a murder. Campbell will never come back anyway, so you should just give up, Irina said, her face unreadable. Irina turned away, thinking to herself that in her long, lonely years, she had finally found something she wanted to hold on to. She didn't care if that beauty was broken or if it had been dragged through the mud and made dirty. She was determined to keep it. You didn't kill Campbell, did you? You're lying to me? Chelsea's voice was sharp with a mixture of hope and accusation as she confronted the vampire princess. Irina did not look at her directly, her expression cold and unreadable. I should have killed her and fed her bones to the wolves, the vampire hissed, her tone dripping with a dark, simmering resentment that made Chelsea flinch. Suddenly, Irina moved with a speed that defied human sight, pinning Chelsea against the furniture and looming over her with predatory grace. Do you like her so much? Irina demanded, her amber eyes burning with a possessive fire. Does she know that you are already full of my traces? She leaned in even closer, her lips nearly brushing Chelsea's ear as she continued to taunt her captive. Does she know how drunken and dreamy you are every day in my place? Despite her outward display of power, a bitter envy gnawed at Irina's heart. She couldn't deny that she was jealous of Campbell, seeing how Chelsea was willing to sacrifice everything for that girl's safety. To settle the matter, Irina forced a piece of parchment and a quill into Chelsea's hands. What? Chelsea stammered, looking at the blank page. Write a loveless letter, Irina commanded, her voice like iron. Break off the engagement with her and you will have nothing to do with each other from now on. I don't, how can I? Chelsea cried out, her eyes filling with tears as she looked up at her tormentor. Irina's smile was cruel as she leaned over Chelsea's shoulder. If you don't write, I will kill her, she whispered. I will separate you forever and make you the sinner of her family. Be good and listen. Chelsea stared at the paper in despair, her heart breaking under the weight of the vampire's threats while Irina watched her with a chilling, satisfied smirk. Irina's thoughts were singular and dark. She simply did not want them to ever be together again. Under duress, the quill finally moved across the page, forming the words of a letter to Campbell. Far away from the tension of the bedchamber, the evening air was still around a grand, secluded estate. Inside her private study, Campbell sat alone at her desk, her long silver hair glowing softly under the light of a single lantern as she focused on her correspondence. A strange silence suddenly blanketed the room, causing her to pause and look toward the door. Mr. Steward, she called out, sensing an unsettling presence just beyond the threshold. Don't shout, I've locked him out, a familiar, mocking voice replied. Campbell's breath hitched as she looked up to see Irina lounging elegantly on the settee, her dark dress flowing around her like a shadow. Irina, she whispered in disbelief. The young girl stood up quickly, her eyes flashing with defiance. How dare you show up again? Hand over Chelsea, you devil. Irina stood up and began to pace the room, holding an envelope between her gloved fingers. I didn't expect you to be so loyal, the vampire mused. It's a pity that Chelsea doesn't have any feelings for a little girl like you. She held the letter out, her eyes dancing with malice. Look, this is from Chelsea, guess what it says. Campbell reached out and took the letter, her hands trembling. Is this your trick to drive a wedge between me and Chelsea? I won't fall for it, she declared. Irina laughed, a cold and hollow sound. Do I need to use tricks to deal with a little girl like you? Here, take a look for yourself. This is something the person you claimed you wanted to save asked me to give to you. Campbell began to read the lines, her heart sinking with every word. Campbell, from now on, we have nothing to do with each other and marriage matters have nothing to do with each other, the letter stated. She had been engaged to Chelsea for as long as she could remember, and now she felt completely adrift, wondering where she could possibly go from here. Her blue eyes shimmered with unshed tears as the finality of the message settled into her soul. Irina leaned in to deliver the final blow, claiming that Chelsea had called her a nanny and a brat who could never satisfy her. Whoever Chelsea chooses is her own right, Campbell said, her voice small but steady. No matter what, I respect my sister's decision. Campbell looked down at her books, reflecting on how her elders and the people around her had always nagged her about her duties. They had constantly reminded her that she must protect her poor fiancé who had fallen on hard times. She had heard it so much that her ears felt calloused, and she had truly believed it was her destiny. But looking at the situation now, it seemed Chelsea didn't need her protection anymore. Go away, I won't bother you anymore, Campbell said, turning her gaze toward the window. She chose you and I hope you treat her well, she added, her voice heavy with a quiet, dignified sorrow. Irina paused as she prepared to leave, surprised by the lack of anger in the girl. She wondered why Campbell didn't want to fight her or try to destroy what she couldn't have. It was a truly rational love, one that didn't require threats or coercion because it was rooted in the welfare of the other person. Not just holding on, but also letting go, Irina thought as she took flight into the night, her black wings beating against the moonlight. I don't know why, but I'm eager to see Chelsea now. While Irina flew back, a group of vampires gathered in a lavish hall, their faces twisted with frustration. Blame it on Irina, one of them shouted, complaining that she could only drink chicken blood while low-level vampires haunted her like flies. And some hunters sneaked up on us, another added, and yet Irina still wants to sign a peace agreement with humans. The red-haired vampire stood up, her eyes narrowing. I think a woman like Irina is not worthy of being our king. We must take this opportunity to bring her down, she declared, turning to a pink-haired girl. Linrui, what do you think? Linrui remained silent, her gaze fixed on nothing as the conversation swirled around her. Her hands were clenched tightly on her lap, her knuckles white with suppressed rage. They don't deserve to live, she whispered, her voice cold and lethal. Her eyes glowed with an intense, violet light as she thought of the human woman who had enchanted their princess. One of the other vampires looked at her with concern, worried that Linrui's hatred for Chelsea might lead to a disaster they weren't prepared for. What are you afraid of? The red-haired vampire challenged. As long as the four of us join forces, can't we take her down? She occupies the throne and flirts with humans, not caring about the dignity of the vampire race at all. But a male vampire hesitated, reminding them that they still didn't know the full extent of Irina's strength. If we fail, we will all be dead, he warned. Linrui stood up abruptly, her dress rustling with her sudden movement. What a bunch of cowards. If you don't go, I'll go by myself. Don't forget how many of your people Chelsea has killed. Linrui, don't be impulsive, they shouted, but she was already walking toward the exit. These guys are really procrastinating, she muttered, her resolve hardening. She was convinced that if she could just get rid of Chelsea, Irina would return to her normal self. She arrived at the gates of Irina's castle, her eyes fixed on the towers above. Inside, she stormed through the corridors, ignoring the panicked cries of the servants. Lord Linrui, Princess Irina is out delivering a letter. She will be back soon. A maid cried out. Get out of here, you dare to stop me? Believe it or not, I will kill you right now. Linrui roared, her dark wings unfurling and purple energy crackling around her. The maids trembled, trying to warn her that the princess would not be pleased. Princess Irina is aware of the importance she places on that woman, they pleaded. Linrui's eyes were wide with madness. Get out of here, she's just a human being, so what if I kill her? With a violent kick, she burst through the heavy bedroom door. She stepped into the room, her eyes darting around the lavish interior. No, she asked, seeing the bed was empty. Could it be, she whispered, noticing a hidden passage behind the curtains. She followed the scent and found Chelsea in a room specifically built for her. This Irina is really confused. She even built a room specifically for this vampire hunter. Linrui sneered, her hand gripping a bladed chain. It's you, Chelsea exclaimed, backing away as she recognized the hostile vampire from the council. Linrui looked down at her with pure contempt. Why, you don't think Irina really sees you as one of her own? She mocked. Humans are born to be our food, Linrui continued, her voice rising with malice. No matter what, Irina will not miss the opportunity to tear you apart and eat you. She swung her weapon, the chain whistling through the air with deadly precision. We vampires are an extremely cruel race, she screamed. Damn it, there's no way to avoid it, Chelsea thought, her eyes widening as the blades came toward her. In that moment of terror, her mind flashed back to the strange connection she felt with the vampire princess. Outside, Irina finally arrived at the castle, her heart full of anticipation. I can't wait to see Chelsea, she thought, but her expression instantly changed to one of alarm. The smell of blood, she whispered, her eyes narrowing as she sensed the violence unfolding within her walls. Linrui stood over the broken hunter, a jagged silver blade held high above her head. Then you go die, she hissed, her eyes gleaming with a sadistic delight as she prepared to deliver the final blow. Chelsea squeezed her eyes shut, her breathing shallow and ragged as she surrendered to the cold embrace of the end. It is okay to die like this, she thought, the weight of her failures finally feeling light as she prepared to join her parents. But before the blade could descend, a sudden shift in the air froze Linrui in her tracks. Linrui, Irina is back, the realization echoed through the room like a death knell. The pink-haired vampire gasped, her face pale with sudden terror as she realized the gravity of her situation. Not good, she whispered, her wings twitching as she scrambled toward the balcony. If you dare tell Irina you're dead, she snarled at the trembling maids before leaping into the night. The maids stood frozen, their faces drained of color as they looked down at the bloody mess left behind. Finished, one of them whimpered, her hands clasped in prayer. The purple-haired maid rushed to Chelsea's side, her voice shaking with desperation. Are you still alive? What should I do? Do you human doctors have any way to treat you? Chelsea lay motionless in a deep coma, her skin pale against the dark floor. Please, please don't be in any trouble, the maid cried, looking at the blood staining Chelsea's clothes. If you die, Lady Irina will kill me. Suddenly, a chilling voice cut through the room, asking who died. The air grew heavy and cold as the shadow of the true mistress of the castle fell across the doorway. Who did you just say was dead? Princess Irina stepped into the light, her presence radiating a suffocating aura of authority and rage. She looked down at the broken form of the hunter, her eyes narrowing as she saw the deep gashes and the blood. Tell me who did it, she commanded, her voice a low, dangerous growl. The maids could only stammer in response, their bodies shaking uncontrollably. If you don't tell me, I will kill you now. Irina knelt down, her long black hair cascading over her shoulders as she gathered Chelsea into her arms. No, I said it was Linrui. The maid finally shrieked, unable to bear the pressure any longer. She just rushed in without saying anything and started beating Lady Chelsea up, and I couldn't stop her. Irina's expression shifted to something far more lethal as she repeated the name under her breath. Linrui, she whispered, her grip on Chelsea tightening as a new realization dawned on her. I just realized my own feelings, she thought, looking down at the woman she had once intended only to use. She held Chelsea close, the hunter's head resting against her chest as the moonlight caught the silver of the bandages. No matter what, I won't let anything happen to you at this time, Irina vowed, her heart heavy with a protective instinct she had never known. I want to prove that I like you the most. Moments later, Irina stormed into the drawing room where Linrui was attempting to hide her cowardice behind a facade of elegance. Anyone who dares to hurt me is seeking death, Irina's voice boomed, the very walls of the castle seeming to tremble at her fury. Linrui looked up, her golden eyes wide with shock as she saw the murderous intent in Irina's gaze. Irina, what can I do for you? She asked, her voice trembling despite her attempt at nonchalance. You hurt the person? Irina asked, her eyes glowing a deep, hellish red. Linrui stood her ground, her lips curling into a sneer. Isn't she just a human being? If you want to kill her, just kill her. Is it worth it for you to come to her house and ask for punishment? Irina's patience snapped instantly. Useless servant, she spat, her power beginning to crackle in the air around her. You court death. Blue lightning erupted from Irina's silhouette, a manifestation of her ancient bloodline's wrath. The force of the blast sent Lin Rui flying backward, her body crashing against the ornate furniture as the energy tore through her. You are so heartless for the sake of humans, Lin Rui screamed, coughing up blood as she collapsed on the floor. Irina looked down at her with cold indifference, her silhouette framed by the fading sparks of her power. I will spare your life, but if it happens again, I will turn you into ashes. Lin Rui huddled on the ground, her pride shattered along with her body. My noble prince, my king, you actually hurt me without any regard for my feelings for that stupid human, she sobbed, her resentment festering into something dark and toxic. Irina, you have really changed, Lin Rui whispered, watching Irina leave. From the shadows of a nearby pillar, a green-haired vampire watched the exchange with a calculating gaze. Do you see it now? Irina has completely lost her vampire spirit and is only concerned about the vampire hunter. The stranger stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the wounded Lin Rui. Think about the territory and people you sacrificed. Do you still want to support her? Join us and fight against her. Lin Rui stared at the offered hand, the silence in the room heavy with the weight of betrayal. Back in the quiet of the master bedroom, Chelsea's eyes fluttered open. She groaned, her vision blurry as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. Irina was sitting by the bedside, her expression uncharacteristically soft. Woke up, does the wound still hurt? Chelsea looked away, her voice raspy. Well, I didn't expect I was still alive. Irina reached out to touch her forehead. You don't say that next time, it's unlucky. Get up, I will bandage it for you again. Chelsea pushed her hand away with a burst of sudden strength. I don't need your false kindness, she snapped, her blue eyes blazing with defiance. They sent someone to injure me and then deliberately bandaged me. One played the good cop and the other played the bad cop. It was all for the purpose of invading humanity. She pulled the sheets up, her face flushed with a mix of anger and something she refused to name. I will never bow down to her. Irina merely smiled, a predatory yet fond look in her eyes. The way you look at me, she began, leaning in until their noses almost touched. It is really frustrating. Irina pulled Chelsea into a firm embrace, forcing the hunter to look at their reflection in the mirror. Even now, your body still loves me, so what does it matter whether you hate me or not? Chelsea stared at her own reflection, her cheeks burning with shame. Was I like this when I was entangled with Irina? She wondered, her heart betraying her mind's hatred. Maybe Irina is right, Chelsea thought, her resistance crumbling as Irina's lips brushed against hers. I have a feeling that the curse will be lifted soon. This may be the last time to lift the curse, Irina whispered into her ear. Master, please reward me. They fell back onto the silk pillows together, the tension between them finally snapping into a desperate, silent union. Good night, Chelsea, Irina whispered later, her voice a soothing balm. She pressed a soft kiss to Chelsea's forehead before the hunter drifted into a true, peaceful sleep. Hours later, the heavy doors of the chamber creaked open just a fraction. Chelsea slipped out into the hallway, her bare feet silent on the cold stone floors as she navigated the moonlit corridors. She pressed herself against the shadows as a pair of guards walked past, their idle chatter echoing off the high ceilings. Outside, the dark spires of the castle reached toward the stars, a silent prison she was determined to leave behind. She broke into a run as soon as she cleared the gates, her simple shift fluttering in the night wind. I actually escaped from that devil, she thought, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and an ache she couldn't explain. She paused for a moment to look back at the looming fortress. After this separation, when we meet again, we will be irreconcilable enemies. Inside the castle, a guard hurried to Irina's side. Report, the prey that the adults kept in captivity has escaped from the castle. Irina stood by the window, her back to the room as she watched the small figure disappear into the woods. It is just an insignificant little pet, just run away, she said aloud. But her heart whispered a different truth. How can it be insignificant? That person is dear to my heart and has long been more than just a blood servant. She watched the hunter go, a bittersweet smile touching her lips. Love is not about binding and forcing. Instead of making her feel disgusted, it is better to let her go. The peace was short-lived. In a hidden chamber, Lin Rui stood before a gathering of high-ranking vampires. Did you hear that? Irina is a traitor. She colluded with humans and let them go. She has betrayed the vampires. The pink-haired vampire's face was twisted with malice as she revealed her plan. I have prepared a secret method specifically for dealing with the Blood Prince. Let us attack her now. She looked at her co-conspirators, her eyes cold. You can attack her by surprise, but I have one condition, don't kill her. I am going to let her have a taste of what it is like to be a prisoner. Irina sat alone in the quiet opulence of her chambers, her mind wandering back to the human who had managed to slip past her defenses in more ways than one. I wonder where Chelsea is now, she murmured to herself, her eyes reflecting a rare moment of vulnerability. The silence was shattered as a sudden surge of purple energy crackled through the air, manifesting in jagged bolts of magical lightning that danced across the room. Irina stood up instantly, her voice cold and demanding as she told the intruders to come out. The magical aura intensified, glowing with a dangerous violet light as the spatial distortion stabilized. A group of vampires stepped from the shadows, their eyes burning with a traitorous intent. One of them, a woman with glowing, predatory eyes, screamed for Irina to die as she prepared to unleash a killing blow. The floor erupted in a violent explosion of magic as the attackers channeled their collective power into a single, devastating strike. Irina did not flinch, her own power rising to meet them with a calm, terrifying grace. "How many times have you guys tried to do this to me?" she asked, a smirk playing on her lips. "Haven't you suffered enough before?" A pink-haired vampire stepped into the light, holding a shimmering magical seal in her hand. "Do you really think we came here without any preparation?" she countered, her voice dripping with confidence. Before Irina could move, a massive glowing magic circle expanded beneath her, trapping her within its complex geometry. It was a blood judgment, a legendary secret method specifically designed for dealing with the most powerful vampires. Irina felt the weight of the spell pressing down on her, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine concern crossed her face. This was not good. Realizing the danger was far greater than she had anticipated, she let out a sharp command for any loyalists nearby to leave immediately. The green-haired vampire leading the coup glared at her, calling Irina a disgrace to the vampire race for her collusion with humans. The room echoed with the final, bloodthirsty cry for her death as the magic reached its peak. Miles away, beneath the pale light of the moon, Chelsea stood in the middle of a dark forest. Despite the tranquility of the trees, a sudden wave of apprehension washed over her. It was a normal scene in the forest, but she felt uneasy for some reason. Her thoughts drifted back to the palace and the vampire princess she had left behind. Did something happen to Irina, she wondered, her heart tightening in a way she couldn't explain. She shook herself, trying to regain her focus. She reminded herself that Irina was a supreme being of the vampire race and perfectly capable of handling herself. Besides, as a bounty hunter, caring about a vampire was the last thing she should be doing. Vampires were the mortal enemies of mankind, and as the leader of the Cat People Guild, she was supposed to be their executioner, not their protector. Determined to put the princess out of her mind, Chelsea finally reached the grand gates of the guild headquarters. The members standing guard spotted her and called out to the others that their leader had returned. A young girl at a table nearly dropped her glass, her eyes wide with shock. "President," she gasped, jumping to her feet. She rushed forward and threw her arms around Chelsea, crying out that she was so glad Chelsea had escaped. The girl explained that the guild had heard Irina was surrounded and targeted by the seven princes, leaving the princess unable to care for herself. She praised Chelsea's bravery, assuming the president had seized the chaos to make her getaway. Chelsea felt a cold pit form in her stomach. "When did this happen?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The guild was already in a frenzy, seeing the civil war among the vampires as the ultimate opportunity. They believed that with the vampires in chaos and Irina vulnerable, they could launch an attack that would severely damage the Blood clan and ensure human safety. Chelsea looked around at her cheering subordinates, feeling a profound sense of conflict. A male hunter approached her, studying her face with a curious frown. He noted that there were no traces of blood sucking on her body and wondered how she had managed to survive being Irina's prisoner without being turned into a servant. Chelsea's hand went to her throat, the memory of Irina's touch burning like a brand. She remembered the princess asking if she liked it. The flashback of their intimacy was so vivid it made her breath hitch. She turned away, her face flushing as she recalled how hard the vampire had actually sucked her, a secret she could never share with these men. The lead hunter, oblivious to her thoughts, called for everyone to organize their equipment. He declared that they must take down Irina in one fell swoop and completely wipe out the vampires while they were weak. He adjusted his gear, his eyes cold with the prospect of slaughter. Chelsea suddenly spoke up, her voice ringing through the hall. "I don't want this," she stated firmly. She argued that a full-scale war would only lead to massive losses for both sides and that there had to be another way. The hunter stopped, looking at her with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. He asked if she had been brainwashed by the vampires during her captivity. Chelsea stepped forward, her resolve hardening. She argued that the purpose of the guild was not just to kill, but to protect human life. She slammed her hands onto the table, looking him straight in the eye as she emphasized that she was thinking of the lives of her fellow hunters. She declared that, as president, she would negotiate with the vampires to reestablish order and sign a new treaty, pleading with them to believe in her vision for peace. The young girl watched from the side, her eyes sparkling with devotion as she thought the president looked incredibly handsome and noble. Meanwhile, back in the vampire stronghold, the coup was reaching its climax. The pink-haired vampire toyed with the key to Irina's restraints, a cruel smirk on her face. She mocked the princess, pointing out that despite how much Irina had doted on the human, the girl had still left her to live happily while Irina faced death alone. Irina looked up through the haze of the magical suppression, her amber eyes cold and defiant. "Whatever you want to do, just do it now," she spat. "Don't waste my time." Warning, chapter batch 31 was skipped because no valid images were found. Warning, chapter batch 32 was skipped because no valid images were found.